the middle sibling of one of those stories I have two brothers for a really long time. They both grew up as scouts. It happened back when my older brother made it to Eagle Scout. My little brother quit some time in Boy Scouts. Way before we had kids. But for whatever reason, my parents never forced me to become a scout when I was a kid. Not in a bad way. Which is weird, just in the sense I remember always being really jealous of my older brother Scott when my mom would bring me along to the Pinewood Derby contests. I used to do these solo backpacking trips a few times. But the thing that I was always the most jealous that I missed out on were the campouts. I'd drive out to some remote trailhead. Would go out into the wilderness and camp out for a whole weekend. Way off the trail. I went along for the drive once or twice, and I saw them all setting up, doing campfires and such. But being younger and also not part of the troop, my friends thought I was allowed to stay. Honestly, I kind of I'd go home with my parents. This particular my jealousy of these campouts was mainly towards my older brother because I was growing up watching him prepare for these camping trips. I'd been out there for 2 days. Before every trip, he'd be given a tent to take home and practice setting up in the backyard. Even though I was only like 7 or 8. I remember so clearly how eager I was when I hatched the idea to do a little backyard camping. Dark storm clouds basically, we set up the tent in the backyard and sleep in it overnight. To my little mind, that was the most exciting idea ever. Also, our backyard wasn't really a traditional backyard. Our childhood house was in a very spacious neighborhood where yards just kind of all meshed together, and there weren't many fences. More so large patches of trees and brush separating yards, which added to the camping problem. Our backyard was also huge, and we had a fire pit, as I predicted. So our parents played along and set up the fire pit in our backyard for us so we could get the full camping experience. My little brother roasted marshmallows with us too, and I could hear our parents weren't going to let him sleep in the tent. He was only like 4 at the time. Started getting genuinely concerned about my safety. He wasn't a scout yet, obviously. Lightning was striking pretty close by. After it got a little late, our parents brought him in and told us it was time to start getting ready for sleep. At this time in my life, the Game Boy SP was the handheld console. I was scanning the woods on either side getting into our sleeping bags. Scott and I whipped out our Game Boys and played our respective games. I actually saw a structure. I was playing Super Mario Bros. 2, a game I was obsessed with yet could never beat as a child. But I was getting a little more tired though. I turned to my side and tried to sleep. I realized it was a tiny one-story cabin. Like, I was tired, but restless. Like it could have been a hunting cabin because I'd never slept in a sleeping bag before. Decades ago. And quite frankly, it wasn't comfortable. There was a single window on the side. A lot of time passed, and I mean a lot, before I finally nodded off. I practically sprinted over to the thing and pushed the door open. Probably confused about where I was at first, dim, but not recognizing my surroundings. There wasn't much in there. I remember looking around the dark table and what looked like a cot frame pushed against the far wall. Scott was gone. There was a stone fireplace on the right side that was clogged with old ash and debris. He must have went inside because he couldn't sleep. Bad. I was suddenly too scared to be in the tent alone. Stripping out of my soaked clothes and laying down. But before crawling out, I did a little innocent peek outside, simply because I was too scared to run out through the backyard without checking if the coast was clear. Not exploration. It was not. All I cared about was someone sitting by the fire pit in the darkness. It wasn't until I'd been inside for maybe 10 or 15 minutes that I started actually looking around. He was facing the tent, and surely he had to have seen me. There wasn't much else to do. And zipped the tent back up and crawled back into my sleeping bag, as if that piece of cloth was any form of protection. There was more stuff in that cabin than I stayed completely still inside my sleeping bag. There was a tent was almost completely dark, near the cot, just a faint gray from the moonlight coming through the fabric. The rest of the place. I don't know what was going through my mind at that point, but I do know that I wanted to call out Dad, just hoping that it was my dad. Someone had been using the place as a base camp of sorts. I gotta look at the man, another backpacker or a hunter. And if it were my dad, he'd have acknowledged me poking my head out of the cabins. But the more I heard the chair by the fire pit shift, started bothering me. I was shitting bricks, hoping the man didn't get up near the door. And if he did, at first I thought they wasn't coming towards the age or weather. But when I got closer, see a shadow now on the other side of the tent, blocking some of the moonlight. There were dozens of them. He was right outside. Some shallow and some somehow I thought if I didn't move, no pattern, maybe he would think the tent was empty. At least not when I could see. I heard the zipper very slowly dragging downward. At the door itself. It only moved a few inches. The handle was a simple latch. The opening was small, but it was enough. Despite the storm, help it. I opened the door my head just to get a look at the mechanism. There's a small gap at the bottom of most tents where the zipper doesn't fully seal. Looked like it was designed to hold it before that night. The bracket was on the outside. Pressed against that gap. There was no corresponding latch looking directly at me. That meant the door could only be locked from the outside. I could see the white of it in the dark. I couldn't even scream at first. I shut the door not for a few seconds around the cabin because I was paralyzed. The only thing I had checked out squinted a bit, as if the person was smiling a smile that I couldn't see. The glass was still perfectly moved another inch, which surprised when I finally screamed. The apparent age of the place. I scrambled backwards. Then I noticed why. Kicking out of my sleeping bag, knocking into the tent poles. One in footsteps immediately take off through the yard. Those had also been driven in from outside, and around the edges of the tent fabric, There were more scratches, burst out the back door yelling. I could hear him running across the grass. By the time he reached the fire pit area, to pry the window whoever it was already gone. All of it. My parents called the police, of course. Someone had been. I don't remember what happened after my parents talked to the cops. Kept against their will. I know I went to my parents' room with my mom. Left right then. And eventually the police did their thing. But there was a good part of searching the immediate area. Gone on in that it was an absolute nightmare. I slept in my parents' bed that night. I was emotionally scarred for a while. Which did look on the newer side. Just as things might have been going back to normal and dusty. I think it was a few weeks to a month later. I wanted to do was go back out. This part is what really hammers the nail in the coffin for this experience being something I can never forget. Maybe an hour. I went to Catholic school, and during lunch we'd have a short recess in the schoolyard, which was all concrete. The far end of the schoolyard on the roof fenced off and looked towards the street. Much of anything else. We were playing some game. That's probably red light, green light, or something. Notice the other sounds. This part I genuinely don't remember. All I know is I had to run to the fence to be considered safe somewhere whatever the threat in the game was. While I was on the fence, I thought it was a branch next to some other kids. Mind there had been branches. A man says, "Hey," from the other side of the fence. I turn as I was thinking, man asking me for directions to some place I don't even remember. I said, I don't know. They honestly didn't. We weren't even supposed to talk to strangers outside of the schoolyard. This time I stood up. Then he said, I did that thing where your name's Chris, right? And try to focus by staring at a random spot implanted in my brain. I was trying to listen. The look on his face, out there, my heart dropped. Would have been impossible to hear. I said no, lying to him. I started getting smiled and said, "Sounds I don't remember a few, many." And that the rest had been drowned out. I ran towards one of the recess chaperones and pointed over to the window. But the man was gone. I couldn't bring myself to look. One of the kids next to me told me he saw the man too. The recess ladies called the recess in short. I stayed in that called my parents. Felt like forever. I was sure it was that man from the backyard. I started to relax. I was taken home early that day. I know my parents were so sick and worried after this. It was a hellish. I was almost ready to forget about it. We lived in such a nice area too. That sent me over to almost be chased out of the neighborhood because of this was just a nightmare. Pressure on the door. After months of me being under tight supervision from my parents. Things went back to normal, and the latch rattled. I can't express enough, the pressure released. How much it still pains me in my chest, thinking about how I could be dead today if that man had somehow successfully taken me. And it makes me sick, wondering if he was ever successful in whatever he was trying to do with someone else. The door wasn't locked. Nothing was stopping them. And then I thought about what I'd found inside the cabin. And it occurred to me that maybe whoever was out there didn't want to come inside. I grew up in Salem, Oregon. Me to stay inside. A quaint little small town. The whole point was to keep me in there. I moved out when I was 21. I don't know if that was the right conclusion. Buying my first house about 50 miles out from Salem. But I decided I was leaving right then. I furnished my first house with a mix of stuff for my parents, their friends, and a bunch of stuff off online marketplaces and apps. I had the sickening feeling. I was driving a Ford Raptor at the time, so lugging stuff around was thankfully very easy. The next few moments were a blur. On Facebook Marketplace one day, 30 seconds I found a listing selling a bunch of good-looking stuff. Glass shattering behind the ones in the listing that caught my eye were this green-colored sectional couch that looked pristine. That was all I could see. Cannondale brand mountain bike. In flames. I didn't have a bike at the time. The flames spread so fast that I couldn't even process what was happening. Perfect for exercise. One second I was standing in the dark room. The other stuff on the listing didn't really interest me. The walls were on fire. The listing itself was just sort of a digital yard sale. The door wouldn't budge. I contacted the seller. We did a little typical back and forth. I slammed into it with all my might. It was pretty short and straight to the point with his answers. It collapsed off its hinges and surprisingly easy to negotiate. I scrambled to get back on my feet. He agreed to a slightly lower price, and he said I could come pick this stuff up later that night. It was just running wildly. Days are long in Oregon in the summer, trying to put as much distance between myself and that cabin. So I'd still be showing up with some sunlight. But before I banked on having to do a couple trips to transport the sectional couch due to its size. I was back on the ground. I set out on my way to the house. There was a person on top of me. The address was right on the coast. My life. I checked the satellite view on the map just to confirm it was bringing me to a house, and it was. He was yelling based on the map, and he kept there was a long trail or driveway that veered off the road towards a huge open property with a big-looking house. But I managed the backyard was a literal drop-off to the ocean. I got back up and kept running. All I could think was, no wonder these people were selling all this stuff for so cheap. I looked back with that kind of money, I wondered why they weren't just giving it away. But I did headed out that way. It didn't take long to get there. I could tell the closer I got to the shore, the nicer the properties got. And then I turned onto the last road before I'd be turning onto the driveway for the house. This road was long. It was lined with woods on each side, and then I'd pass the occasional driveway leading to probably a cliffside mansion. Found a spot where a couple of eventually I made it to the turnoff. It was a tree-lined dirt road, or the driveway, I guess you would call it. I crawled under there. About 10 seconds in of driving down this driveway, it opened to this massive clearing. The driveway went on a slight incline leading to the house at the top of this hill. All I did next to this older sedan and try to keep it was like a Mercury Sable. I don't know how many hours passed under those trees. It did not match the house at all. Like this house looked like it belonged to a millionaire.
Feelings start to
this car was a piece of shit.
And I told myself it was
went up to the front door, ready to ring the bell.
Whoever was out there was probably
there was a yellow post-it note on the front door.
Couldn't have been that far away.
And it said on it,
got up
doorbell
and started
broken,
moving through the woods.
Please use back door.
I didn't know where the trail was,
I could have
but
just
I didn't
knocked.
really care.
But
I honestly can't tell you how I survived.
I walked down the front porch. I messaged the guy on Messenger that I arrived and was going around back.
I was soaked.
I walked around the side of the house, looking at each window as I
just kept trudging on.
But the blinds all seemed to be closed.
The rain subsided a bit.
I got to the backyard,
at least enough for me to figure out where I was.
It actually overlooked the Pacific Ocean.
Trailhead. By that
I walked
point,
up the back deck to go knock on the back door.
I don't remember too much.
Sliding glass door.
All I remember
there was some kind of sliding blind that was
closed,
hospital, so I couldn't see inside.
I had second-degree burns.
I knocked on the glass
and the back of my neck.
I stood there for a minute.
Doctors told me I was lucky I hadn't inhaled more smoke.
I looked down at my phone to see if he answered or read my message.
It hurt like hell for a long time afterwards.
I went to go sit on one of the chairs on the deck and spun it around to stare at the sunset and the view of the Pacific.
Hike alone again.
It was a surreal view.
Had intentionally set
I kept checking my Messenger app and following up with the guy. He wasn't answering.
It was pouring rain.
I triple checked that I had the right address.
The roof was metal.
I did.
There's no
Plus,
way
the note on the front door confirmed
that fast unless
I decided if he was in the shower or occupied or something, I'd at least go walk over to the cliffside and get a picture of the view.
But I could tell they weren't
did just that. I walked down the deck, went down the seemingly freshly cut grass to the cliffside.
It would have been silly to hound them.
Taking in the view,
the only thing I don't understand
about one day being able to afford a
everything.
place like this.
My wife would probably
started walking back up to the
solo
house,
trips because I grew up and
maybe
got
3
more
steps
responsible.
When I realized every single window now had their blinds open, and there was a person standing at each window, standing as still as statues. I didn't know if what I was looking at was some kind of prank or not. I walked a little closer, and the moment I said, "Nope, I've seen enough," was when I realized every single face was smiling.
My name is James.
I honestly couldn't tell if they were mannequins or not.
That's how still they were. And still doing
I decided I just needed to get to the car. I did a light jog around the side of the house again, and that side window that I mentioned that also had its blind shut before,
like abandoned buildings
was now 2 lifted.
Factories.
And there was someone at this window as well.
Supposed to be.
I didn't know what was going on here,
been there
but I had to get out.
How to get in.
As I got to the front, I got back in my car.
Amount of time on Google
I didn't even look at the front windows. I didn't even want to know if there were people at these windows too.
Screenshots of random
I reversed all the way down the driveway.
Most of us would entertain his ideas,
I did at one point take a curious look ahead at the house.
I was usually the exception.
The front door was open.
Charles and I
there was a person standing on the front porch with his hands in his pockets, watching me drive away.
Similar thresholds for
risk. It didn't matter. Everything about this was a red flag. I was out of there in a minute and down the road.
I'd hear them and go.
The guy never opened or responded to my message.
It was a dynamic that led to some great memories.
I decided to turn into the closest neighbor's house driveway and knock on the door.
Wonder how we made it out
unscathed. They answered. And I explained the bizarre and disturbing situation I just encountered.
One weekend,
I pressed them about any info on their neighbor.
Lookout tower.
The man who answered,
some forest
called
far away
Tom,
from
was shocked.
I really
because
wish
he's
I
close
could
friends
remember
with the guy next door.
But I can't.
And he said he's hardly ever
Charles
in town.
said it had
that he wouldn't set up some kind of elaborate prank
sitting
like
out there in the middle of nowhere.
He called his neighbor on the spot, and the guy picked up.
He didn't tell me how he found it.
The conversation went as follows, from what I remember.
He was convinced we could hike out
to
it, climb it,
Tom next door.
Spend the night up there.
Listen, I got someone at my front door right now saying you invited him to your house to buy stuff, but you pulled some kind of scary prank on him with the windows.
I promised him I'd at least come and check it out.
There was a pause before the Tom guy said,
"The idea of being 70 feet or so up in the middle of the forest,
I stepped in and explained everything.
View sounded incredible to me.
My arrival there.
We picked a random
people at the
windows.
windows.
Made it happen.
He now sounded very
the entire
concerned
thing out
because he said he wasn't home this week.
Pack and how to find
I did my best to describe every detail, including what the man on the front porch looked like,
and Charles told me the hike would be off the trail. But
he asked me to take his number so he could contact me after the police investigated.
We drove out early in the morning on Friday. I made it into the woods sometime in the afternoon.
I really didn't have it in me to commit 2 hours to some police investigation.
It
didn't concern me,
at the very least, not find the tower.
But I did hear from the guy later that night.
I was all the more astonished.
He called me and asked me to send him the Facebook listing.
Seeing it through the trees for the first time was an insane sight.
I did send him the details of the profile that I was messaging on Messenger as.
I was even more astonished when we got to the base of it.
He thanked me for that
it was
and would give it to the police
anyway.
anyway.
Fenced off.
When I asked him what the cops found,
sitting there in the middle of
he
the
told me
woods,
they found nothing stolen, as far as he knew at that time.
The top was the
small, all the blinds were once again
windows
closed.
On all 4 sides.
There was no sedan in the
metal
driveway.
Staircase that zigzagged
all 3 doors in the house were unlocked.
A vertical ladder for the final stress.
Now the scary part for me is the way they were all standing at the windows, smiling, trying to scare me.
Some of the lower railings
I have to wonder,
were missing.
what use was I going to be up to them?
Beams near the base.
Why did they want me in the backyard?
To be completely honest,
scary
it did not look
thoughts,
like the type of structure anyone would be
glad I
eager
left
to
when
climb.
I did.
But Charles was practically giddy. While I was hesitating and debating whether I should try convincing him to back out, he had already started climbing. I yelled at him to be careful.
I live with my parents in Murraysville, Pennsylvania.
I figured,
my parents were gone
told
one
myself
weekend,
to stop
so
bitching.
I decided I was going to have a bunch of people
made our way
over
up
in the backyard
carefully,
for a
checking the
pool
stairs
party.
as we went.
We have a pool
Most
house
of them
and an
felt
in-ground
solid
pool
enough,
back there.
but there were
It's
a few
perfect for
spots where the
parties,
bolts had rusted
even though I
through
rarely
and
get
the
a chance
steps
to throw
wobbled.
anything.
The vertical
The rest of
ladder
the
section
backyard
near
is
the
a little
top
bit
was
of
the
grass
sketchiest
and then the
part.
woods
It
behind
was
the pool
20-something
house.
feet of
It's
straight
a very
climbing
private
with nothing
backyard.
but a narrow metal cage
Usually,
around it.
you'll see what I mean
Adrenaline
soon.
rush was insane, but
So
that's
the
what
little
Charles
party I
lived
planned
for.
was for
He
Saturday
made
night.
it up without any issues.
Earlier that day, I was
The view
setting
from
up
the cab
outside.
was unreal.
It was a
You could
little
see for
cloudy
miles
out,
in every
but since it was going to be a night
We
party,
had also
that didn't
timed
really
it
matter.
perfectly. The sun
The
was
woods
maybe an
behind
hour
the pool
from
house
setting.
are pretty big.
Our plan was to
They
camp
go
out
at least
for the
half
night
a
and
mile
catch the
back
sunrise.
before they reach another
It was
backyard.
a decently wide wraparound
there should really be
walkway
no
up
one
there,
walking
which
through
is where
them.
we decided to chill.
It's also our
At
property.
least initially.
There are no trails
We
or
cracked
any
a few
reason
beers
for anyone
and
to be
just
back
enjoyed
there.
the view and some
I was
conversation.
bringing out folding
The
tables
sun
for beer
eventually
pong
went
and
down.
refreshments.
The sky
and
went
setting
from
them up.
orange to purple,
When I heard a cough
dark
come
blue
from
in a
the
matter
woods.
of minutes.
It
Once
was
the light was
clearly a
gone,
slow,
the forest below
throat-clearing
us was
kind of
just a
cough.
black mess in
Like
every
someone
direction.
trying to get something out
There
of
wasn't
their
a single
throat.
light in sight.
It was definitely a
The
man.
stars were incredible.
I
easily
froze
the best
with the
I've
table
ever
still in
seen.
my hands.
But being
I just
alone
stood
out there
there
in the dark
listening.
was freaking me out a little.
The wind was
It
barely
was just
moving the
weird
leaves,
not being able to
so the
see
sound
anything,
carried really
despite
clearly.
knowing there was a whole
It came
forest
from
below
just
us.
inside the tree line.
Charles
not
could tell
deep
I
in
was
the
getting
woods.
a little antsy.
Close enough
He
that
started
whoever made
messing
it
with
could
me,
definitely see
grabbing
me.
my shoulder and stuff like
I
that.
slowly set
But
the
thing
table
that pissed
down
me off
and
the
looked out
most
toward
was
the
when he
trees.
smacked his metal water bottle
Confused
against the
is
side
one
of the
word to
tower.
use, but
It sent
unsettled
this
would be a better
incredibly
one.
loud, echoing
No one
clang
should
in
be in
every
those
direction,
woods ever.
probably to be heard
I scanned
for
the tree
miles.
line and called out,
The
"Who is
sound
that?"
was so loud and
There was
ominous
no
that I
answer.
actually got mad at him.
Not even any movement.
I told him I wanted to
No
go inside the
footsteps or
cab,
branches
and he
snapping
finally
or
got the
anything.
hint.
That
There wasn't
almost
much
made it
in there, by
worse.
the way. It had
If it
clearly
was
been
some random
hollowed
guy
out
walking
ages ago.
through, I should have
He
heard
said he
him
was going to
moving
finish
away.
his beer before coming
It
in
was
and
just
joining
quiet.
me, and I was fine with
I got that feeling in my chest.
I picked
like
a random
I was being
corner
watched,
and started
like
setting my
someone was
sleeping
standing
stuff up.
perfectly still
But
just
before I
behind a
could
tree,
finish, he
staring
told me
at
in a very
me.
quiet,
I
serious
stood there for
voice to
maybe
come
20
back
seconds
outside.
just listening.
Very
The longer I stood
un-Charles-like.
there, the more uncomfortable I
So
felt.
did. I walked
Eventually,
back
I
around
just
to
grabbed
where
the
he
rest
was
of the
sitting
stuff and
and
brought
saw
it
that
back
he was
inside
pointing
for a bit.
diagonally downwards.
I didn't want to just stand
toward
out
the
there
forest
alone
below
anymore.
us.
I called my
At first, I
good
thought
friend
he was
Mark
just
to come
messing
over
with me
early
again.
and help me set up.
It only took me a few
I decided
seconds to
not to
realize
mention
what
the
he was
cough.
pointing at.
I didn't want to sound
There was a
paranoid
light
before
down
the
there.
party even started.
It was faint and pretty far
Mark
away.
came over around
but it was
6
definitely
p.m.
down there.
He brought
It
some
was
drinks
genuinely
and helped me
horrifying.
finish setting up.
It was weaving
kept
through the
glancing
forest
at the
at what
woods while
seemed
we
like
were out
walking
there.
pace.
But
My
everything
first
looked
thought was
normal.
that it was a person who
Nothing
heard the
moved.
clang from the tower.
If someone had been there
I don't know
earlier,
why I
they
felt
were
the
gone.
urge to whisper, but I
The rest
did.
of my friends started
I told him
showing
he
up
was
around
stupid
7
for
to
doing
8.
that, and
At
we
the
were
peak of the
probably
party,
moments
there were
away
at
from
least
getting
20
caught
people.
or arrested or something.
Nothing insane, but
He
it was
looked
a
at
good
me
time.
with this confused
There was
expression
music
before
playing,
saying,
people in
"You
the
think that's a
pool,
person?"
lights around the patio
Now
on.
it was my turn
With
to
that
be
many people
confused.
there, the
What the
woods
hell was
didn't
he
feel
talking
creepy
about?
anymore.
I asked
A couple
him what
times
else it
during
could
the
be,
night, I
and
caught
he
myself
said that light
looking
was
toward the
moving
tree
way
line,
too
though.
evenly.
I don't even know
It wasn't
why.
exactly wrong.
I guess that
The
cough
light
just
wasn't
stuck with
swinging
me.
or wobbling the way you
Things started
expect someone
dying
carrying
down
a
around
lantern or
midnight.
flashlight.
And by
to be.
1 a.m., the
But then
last of
again,
the guests
it was
had
probably
left.
too far away to tell.
I figured I would leave the mess
I
to
didn't
clean
say
up for
anything
tomorrow.
after that.
I was tired
Neither
and
did
ready for
Charles.
bed.
He just kept
Before
staring
going
at this
inside,
mysterious
I
light
did
as it
one
continued
last slow
weaving through
sweep
the
of the
forest.
backyard.
Part of
I
me
walked
thought it
around
was
the
just some
pool,
random
checked
hiker
behind
that
the
had
pool
nothing
house,
to do with us.
looked toward the
but
woods
I knew
again.
that was wishful thinking.
Everything seemed normal.
After a few
The
minutes,
water in the pool
it
was
was
still,
obvious
the
that the
lights
light was getting
reflected off of
closer.
it.
It
No
was
one was
also
out
much
there.
clearer that the light was
I
moving
locked the back
perfectly,
sliding door,
like it was
and went
floating
upstairs
or
to brush
hovering.
my teeth and go to bed.
Charles asked me what
I
we
was
should
in bed
do,
scrolling
and I
on my
didn't have
phone
an
for
answer
maybe
for
half
him.
an hour before
There wasn't
putting it
really
down.
anything we could do.
It probably
Like, what
took
were we
another
gonna do,
half hour
climb
of
down?
laying there trying to sleep.
As we were throwing
I heard
out
a
more
splash.
theories, the light suddenly
Not a
small one, not like something falling in. It sounded exactly like someone jumping into the deep end.
From steady, even
My eyes opened
movement to an abrupt
immediately.
zip forward.
I held still,
Then it was back to
listening.
steady movement again.
A few seconds later, I heard the sound of someone swimming,
and I could
literal
tell Charles
strokes
was
through
really
the water.
freaked out too.
My first thought
kept
was
trying to
maybe someone
convince
from the
myself
party
that
stayed
whoever
behind
was
as
down
a
there
joke,
was just
or they just
wandering
woke up
aimlessly through
drunkenly.
the woods.
But I
Again,
knew everyone who
wishful
came.
thinking.
No one
They
would
were
do something
definitely
like
heading
that.
for the tower.
I checked
After
my
about
phone,
10 minutes,
and it was 2
they
a.m.
reached it.
I got out
At
of
that
bed
point,
and
the
walked
light was
slowly to the
directly
window
below
that
us,
overlooks
and
the
I was bracing
backyard.
myself for
I
someone to
didn't
yell
turn
up
on
to
any
us
lights in my
and
room.
announce themselves
I didn't
as
want whoever
police.
was out there to see me
But
before
no,
I saw them.
The light just stopped moving.
I looked down
and
at the
stayed in
pool.
that exact spot right
I
below
saw
us.
there was a guy swimming
From our
calmly
vantage
from one
point
end to the
straight
other.
above, we could see the
At
light
first, I
itself,
tried to
but
recognize
not
him.
whoever was holding
I
it.
knew all 20 or so
Charles and
people
I
who
stared
came
at it
over.
for a while.
This wasn't any of
Suspense
them.
was killing me.
I
It must
leaned
have been
closer
killing
to the
Charles
glass.
even more.
The
'Cause
pool
he
lights
again
lit up
did
his
something I
face
wanted
just
to throw
enough
him
for
off
me
the
to know
tower
for sure. I had
This
never
guy
seen
actually
him before.
yelled, "Hey, are
I
you
yelled
good?"
out the window,
down at
"Who
the
is
light,
that?"
revealing
The
our
swimming
presence.
stopped immediately. I looked at him.
He looked
in
up
horror.
slowly toward my window.
I genuinely couldn't believe
even
he would
from
do
that
something
distance.
so stupid.
I could tell he wasn't
He didn't get a
confused or
response,
startled.
though.
He
The
just
light
stared
didn't
up at
even
me.
move.
Then he started
waited
moving
a
toward the
little
shallow
bit,
end.
and then Charles yelled
He
down
climbed
again,
out of the pool,
but still nothing.
and that's when I saw how tall he was.
There we were. 70
He
feet
stood
up
there
in an
dripping
abandoned
wet for
fire
maybe
tower
2
in the
seconds,
middle of nowhere,
just looking toward the
someone
house.
or something
I
blocking our
expected him
only
to run
exit.
away.
We were
Instead,
completely trapped.
he started walking toward
We
the
must have
sliding
watched
door,
that light for 30 minutes
not
straight,
running or
whispering
hesitating,
to each other every so
just
often.
walking fast and
It never
direct,
moved
like
once.
he already knew where he was
I
going.
wasn't worried about
almost
being
in a
secretive
march.
anymore.
I yelled
Charles had
again,
burned that
"Hey,
bridge
who
a
is
long
that?"
time ago.
He didn't
So
respond.
I did something I should have
I
done
heard
a
the
while
sliding
ago.
door downstairs open.
I grabbed my flashlight.
I know I
and
locked
aimed
it. I'm
straight
positive
down
I
at the
did.
base of the tower.
But I heard it slide
Even
open.
after I did that,
Then it
I
slid
still
shut.
couldn't see the source
I
of
ran
the
to my
light.
bedroom door and locked
Eventually,
it.
we accepted
That's when I
that there
noticed
was
how much
nothing
my
we could
hands were
do.
shaking.
We tried to go back to what
I
we
grabbed
were
my
doing.
phone and texted Mark,
We went
asking
back
him
to
if he
talking,
noticed anyone
and I
stay
made sure
behind
I never
before
took
leaving.
my eyes off that light
But I
for
didn't
more
wait
than a
for a
few
response.
seconds.
I immediately
Charles thought
called
it was some kind
911.
of LED that
I
someone had
whispered
placed
into
there
the
to mess
phone
with
that
us.
there was an intruder in my house.
Who the hell would bother doing
I
that?
gave my address as quietly as I could.
Charles said he was
Then
going
I
to
heard
climb
the
down and
footsteps.
check it out. And I told him that was insane.
They were slow, wet
Not only was that
footsteps on
inviting
hardwood.
trouble, but it was
I could hear
downright
the slight
stupid
stick
and
of his
dangerous.
feet lifting off the floor.
As we were arguing
He
about
wasn't
it,
rushing,
I glanced down
nor was he
and
searching
realized that I
randomly.
couldn't see the
He was
light
walking
anymore.
directly toward the
There was just
stairs.
darkness and
Each
more
step on the
darkness down
stairs
there
creaked,
again.
one at a
I
time.
frantically scanned the
He reached the
emptiness
top.
below us with my
The
eyes.
hallway floor
looking
outside
for the
my room
light,
creaked.
but it wasn't there anymore.
He stopped right outside my bedroom
Charles
door.
seemed relieved.
I
but
could hear
I was
water
the
dripping
opposite.
onto the floor.
He kept telling me
Then
to
the handle
relax,
moved.
saying whoever
He
had
tried
been
opening
there
it
had probably
once,
left.
then twice,
but I was more
then a
freaked
third
out than I
time,
had been when
harder
the light
each
was
time.
just sitting there
When
motionlessly.
he realized it was locked,
The
there
thought
was a
that
long
someone could be
pause.
down there, and now we couldn't
The
even see
911
them,
operator was saying
terrifying to
something,
me.
but I had the phone
Charles
set down.
reassured me that
I
we'd
could barely
obviously be
focus
able
on
to
what she
hear
was
if anyone
saying.
tried to climb the ladder.
Then the guy
which I
knocked
guessed
on the
was
door.
True,
3
but I
slow
was still
knocks.
really unsettled.
I picked up the
Suddenly, I
phone
didn't
and
want
put
to
it
be
on
in the open air
speaker.
anymore.
My
I
voice was
suggested that we
shaking,
wait out
but
the
I
rest
said
of the night
loudly that I was
inside
on the phone
cab.
with the
He
police
agreed.
and they were on their way.
So we went inside and
There was
set up
another
our
long
sleeping
pause.
bags.
Then a
Neither
man's
of us
voice
were
from the
gonna
other
sleep,
side of the
though.
door
That was
said,
suicide.
very low and calm,
Staying
"It's
awake
me.
turned out to be the
Open
right
the door."
decision. Because not
He sounded
20
like a
minutes
grown
after going
man in his
inside,
30s.
he started hearing noises.
I said, I know that I
First
don't know
ones
you.
were all
Leave
metallic
now.
clangs that echoed up
There
through
was
the steel
silence
frame
again.
of the tower.
5 seconds,
They weren't
maybe
footsteps,
more.
which I
Then
wanted
I
to
heard him
crystal
turn
clear
and
about,
walk away
because I was
quickly.
listening specifically
I heard
for
his wet
footsteps.
footsteps go
And
back
this
down the
was not
hallway,
that.
then down the stairs.
It sounded more like
a few
someone
seconds
struck
later,
one of the support
I heard the
beams
front
with a
door
wrench or
downstairs
a
open
crowbar.
and slam shut.
A few minutes later,
I didn't
another
move
one
until the
came.
police arrived.
This one was more
When
of
I
a
finally
grinding
went downstairs
sound,
with
like
them.
metal being
There was a
twisted
clear
against
trail
metal,
of water
and it
leading
lasted
from the
for a
back
good few
door
seconds
up the
before
stairs
stopping.
all the way to the bedroom door.
Charles and I kept looking
After
at each
searching
other
the
like
entire
we were
house,
expecting the other one
that
to
was
do
the only
something.
proof that he had
There was
ever been
nothing we
there.
could do.
I texted
Sounds
everyone
kept
I
coming from
invited,
what
asking
sounded
if
like
they
different
stayed behind
spots,
or
which was
noticed
what
anyone
really
else
got
stay
me,
behind.
because it meant whatever
Anyone
was
who was
causing
still
them
awake
was
said
moving
no.
down there.
The rest texted back
The
in the
sounds
morning
continued
saying
on
no.
and off for a while.
It was a
I
complete
kept trying to map
stranger.
out the sounds in my
And
head.
I have a feeling
figure
that
out where
cough
they
I
were
heard in the
coming
woods
from,
earlier
how
that
many
day
sources
was
there
that
were,
man.
whether they were getting
I don't
closer
know how he
or
got the
staying
door
at the same
unlocked.
level.
Maybe he slipped in
couldn't
during the
make
party
sense of
when
any
people
of
were
it.
going in and out.
Charles and I were
As for
whispering to
motive,
each other
I
about
have
what
no
we'd
idea.
do if we started
I
hearing
just
someone
know that if I
walking
didn't
up.
wake up when I did,
I was sitting
or
against
if
the
I
far
opened that
wall of
bedroom
the cab,
door,
facing the
I don't know
windows
what
on the
he would have
opposite
done.
side. Charles was on the opposite side, looking over my shoulder. There were so many windows in there that we didn't feel safe and wanted to be able to see out of all of them. There wasn't much to see though. They were all pretty dark, with the only light being from the stars and the moon. But then I saw something. A dark outline moved across the glass. My
I'm the
brain
middle
couldn't
sibling of
process
3.
what I was seeing
I have
fast
2
enough.
brothers,
But then
they
it
both
passed in
grew up
front of
as
the next
scouts.
pane over.
My older
That's what
brother
did
made
it.
it to Eagle Scout.
I couldn't
My
help
little
but
brother
yell.
quit some time
Charles
in Boy
scrambled
Scouts.
away from the window.
But for whatever reason,
The two of us
my parents
immediately
never
ran
forced
over to
me
the
to
door
become a
and
scout
pressed our
when I was a
backs
kid.
against it.
Which is
If
weird,
someone tried to
because
come
I
through that
remember
door,
always being
they
really
were gonna have to
jealous of
push
my
through
older
both of
brother
us.
Scott when my mom would bring me
I kept
along to the
looking for the
Pinewood
figure
Derby
through the windows,
contests,
but I
and
couldn't see
celebrations and
anything.
such.
That was
But the thing that I was
impossible,
always the
unless
most
they were
jealous that
crawling
I
on
missed
all
out on
fours,
were
I
the
should have been able
campouts.
to see them.
When the troops would go
Charles
out
and I
into the
sat up like
wilderness
that
and
for
camp
a
out
really
for a whole
long time,
weekend.
and I could hear
I
him
went along for the
hyperventilating.
drive once or twice,
What followed
and I
was
saw
the
them
most
all
tense
setting up,
and
doing
terrifying few
campfires and
hours of my
such.
life.
But being younger
Charles
and
and I
also
sat
not
there
part of the
in that
troop,
exact
I
position
don't think
like
I
our
was
lives
allowed to
depended
stay.
on it.
So
By
I'd
the
go
time
home
the
with my
sun started
parents.
coming up, I was
My
completely
jealousy of these
exhausted.
campouts was
When it
mainly
was
towards my
finally light
older
enough to
brother
see,
because I was
counted
growing
to
up
3
watching him
and then
prepare for
swung
these
the door
camping
open
trips.
violently.
Before
expecting
every
someone to
trip,
be crouching
he'd be
behind
given a
it,
tent to take
but there
home
was
and
no one
practice
there.
setting up in the backyard.
Charles and I ran around
Even
the
though
side
I
of
was
it to
only
confirm
like
that.
7 or 8,
It was clear.
I remember so clearly
down
how
to the base
eager
of
I
the
was
tower.
when I
There was
hatched
nothing
the idea
down
to
there
do a little
either.
backyard
We
camping.
grabbed our stuff and started
Basically, we
descending
set
as
up the
fast as
tent
we
in the
could.
backyard and sleep in it
We made it
overnight.
about 3/4
To my
of the
little
way down the
mind,
staircase
that was the most
before Charles
exciting
stopped in
idea
front of
ever.
me.
Also, our backyard wasn't really a traditional backyard. Our childhood house was in a very spacious neighborhood where yards just kind of all meshed together, and there weren't many fences. More so large patches of trees and brush separating yards, which added to the camping feel. Our backyard was also huge, and we had a fire pit, so our parents played along and set up the fire pit in our backyard for us so we could get the full camping experience.
That must have been what
my little brother roasted marshmallows with us too, but our parents weren't going to let him sleep in the tent. He was only like 4 at the time, and it wasn't a good idea.
They really crossed that
and no,
gap
he wasn't a
twice?
scout yet, obviously. He was 4.
No way.
After it got a little late, our parents brought him in and told us it was time to start getting ready for sleep.
That would have been a lot louder than a few.
At this time in my life, the Game Boy SP was the handheld console.
Trying to figure out.
So after getting into our sleeping bags, Scott and I whipped out our Game Boys and played our respective games. I was playing Super Mario Bros. 2, a game I was obsessed with, yet could never beat as a child.
That was that.
After getting a little more tired,
waiting for us at the
I turned to my side and tried to
sleep.
sleep.
Nothing there at all.
But I remember not being able to sleep. Like, I was tired, but restless.
Granted,
maybe because I'd never slept in a sleeping bag before.
It didn't make any sense.
Quite frankly, it wasn't comfortable.
Around.
A lot of time passed, and I mean a lot, before I finally nodded off.
Not the sounds, not the
And
figure
then
I saw
I
outside
woke
the
up
window.
probably
And
confused
definitely
about
not how
where I
someone
was at
managed to
first,
remove an entire
not
section of
recognizing
steel
my
staircase
surroundings.
in the middle of the night.
I remember looking around the dark tent.
Every time I see
and then
Charles,
noticing something.
This is something we still talk
Scott
about.
was gone. His sleeping bag was empty. The tent zipper was closed, though. He must have went inside because he couldn't sleep. I was suddenly too scared to be in the tent alone. So I got up
camping
and unzipped
alone
the
a few
tent.
times a year.
But before crawling out,
doing it
I
since
did
I
a
was in
little
my
innocent
20s.
peek
At this
outside,
point, I'm in
simply
my
because I was
late
too
30s.
scared to run out
So
through the
close to
backyard
15
without
years
checking
of
if the
solo
coast was
trips at this
clear.
point.
But
I know
it
the
was
risks,
not.
which is why I
I
carry a
saw
rifle.
someone sitting by the
This
fire
happened
pit
about
in
2 years
darkness.
ago in the Daniel Boone National
wasn't
Forest in
Scott.
eastern Kentucky.
It was a grown
It's a
man.
massive stretch of
He was
forest,
facing the
over
tent.
700,000
Surely he had to have
acres.
seen me.
And if you know where to go,
Yes,
you can
I
hike
zipped
for
the
days
tent back
without
up
seeing
and crawled
another
back
person.
into my sleeping bag, as
I
if
had a
that
rough
piece of
stretch
cloth
of
was
work,
any
and
form
my
of
head wasn't
protection.
in a great place.
I
and
stayed
felt like I just
completely
needed
still
a few
inside
days
my
away from
sleeping bag.
everything.
The tent was
I
almost
drove out on a
completely
Thursday
dark.
morning,
Just a faint
parked
gray
at a
from
trailhead
moonlight
off
coming
a
through the
Forest Service
fabric.
road and
I
started
don't know
hiking.
what was going through my mind at
The plan
that
was
point,
simple.
but I do
3
know
nights in
that
the
I wanted to call
backcountry.
out Dad.
That was pretty
just
much
hoping
it.
that it was my dad.
I had my tent,
but
my
I knew
pack,
it wasn't.
enough food and water
I
for
got to
4
look
days,
at the man,
my
even just
308
briefly.
bolt action
And if
that I
it were
always
my
bring on
dad,
solo
he'd have
trips.
acknowledged me poking my head out
First
of the
day
tent.
was exactly what I needed.
And that's when I heard the
I
chair by
covered
the
about
fire
7
pit
miles
shift.
before finding
I
a
was
flat
shitting
spot
bricks,
near a
hoping the
creek
man
bed
didn't
that
get
looked
up.
like a good place
And
to
if he
camp.
did, that he wasn't
Set up
coming
my
towards the
tent,
tent.
gathered some wood,
But
and had a
I could
fire
see a
going
shadow
by the
now
time
on the
sun
other side of the
started
tent,
going down.
blocking some of the moonlight.
I cooked some food,
He was
drank
right
a beer,
outside.
and sat by the fire
Somehow,
until it
I
burned
thought if I
down to
didn't move,
embers.
maybe he would
The
think
whole
the tent was
time,
empty.
I didn't see a single
Then
person.
I heard the zipper,
I fell
very
asleep around
slowly
10.
dragging downward.
I woke up
It
at
only
some
moved
point
a few
in the middle
inches.
of the night.
The opening
Not
was
sure what
small,
woke me.
but it was enough.
It was more like
I
my
couldn't
brain
help
just
it.
switched on
I
for
turned
no
my head
reason.
just slightly.
The way it does
There's a small
sometimes when
gap at
you're
the bottom of
sleeping
most
somewhere
tents where the
unfamiliar.
zipper doesn't fully
I
seal.
lay there for a
I
minute
had never
and
noticed
stared
it
at the
before
ceiling
that
of my
night.
tent. But
An
as my
eye
eyes
was pressed
adjusted,
against that gap.
I noticed
Just
something.
one eye, looking
There was a
directly
faint
at me.
orangey glow coming through the walls of my
I
tent.
could see the white of it in the
I
dark.
unzipped the tent flap
I couldn't even
and looked
scream
out.
at first.
Maybe
Not for a few
200
seconds
yards
at
away,
least,
through
because
the
I was
trees,
paralyzed.
there was a fire.
Then the eye
Not a
squinted
big
again,
one.
as if
It
the
was about
person
the size
was
of a
smiling a
campfire.
smile that I couldn't
It was
see.
definitely there.
The zipper moved another
It was
inch,
flickering, which is
and that's
how
when
I knew it
finally
was a fire.
screamed. I
watched
scrambled
it for a
backwards,
few minutes,
kicking
waiting to
out of
hear
my
talking
sleeping
or
bag,
something.
knocking into the
I
tent
wanted to
poles.
confirm it wasn't some
I heard
random
footsteps
forest
immediately
fire.
take off through
But
the
after
yard.
a while of looking at
Our
it,
back porch
I couldn't
light
see
flipped
or
on,
hear anything
which I
beyond
could
the
see
fire.
through the tent fabric.
Watched
My
it a
dad
little
burst
while
out the
longer
back door
just to see
yelling.
if it would grow out
I
of
could hear him
control,
running
but
across
it
the
didn't.
grass. By the
I
time
figured
he
it was
reached the
another
fire
camper
pit
set
area,
up nearby that
whoever
I
it
just hadn't
was
noticed
already
during the
gone.
day. It
My
wasn't
parents called the
impossible,
police, of
especially
course.
since I had gone
I
to
don't
sleep
remember what
relatively
happened
early.
after my parents talked to the
I figured
cops.
whoever it was
I
had
know
gone
I
to
went to my
sleep and
parents'
left
room
their
with my
fire
mom,
going, which
and
is
eventually the police
irresponsible,
did their
but not
thing,
uncommon.
likely searching the
Watched it
immediate
for
area.
about 5 more
It
minutes.
was an absolute
then zipped my
nightmare.
tent back up and
I
went to
slept in
sleep.
my parents' bed that
didn't
night.
bother me
I was
too
emotionally
much.
scarred for a while.
I woke up the next morning.
Just as things
The
might have
fire
been
was the
going back
first
to
thing
normal.
I thought about.
I think it
Not
was a
because
few
it had
weeks to a
scared
month
me,
later.
but because I was curious.
This part is what really hammers
I
the
wanted
nail
to
in
see
the
who else
coffin
was
for
out
this
there,
experience
maybe
being
say
something
hi,
I can never
but
forget.
mostly to satisfy my
I went to
curiosity.
Catholic school, and during
I
lunch
packed up
we'd have
my
a short
campsite and
recess in
hiked
the
in the
schoolyard,
direction where
which
the
was all
fire had been.
concrete. The far end of the schoolyard was fenced off and looked towards the street.
I was pretty confident I had the right spot.
We were playing some game, maybe red light, green light or something.
Lined up with the angle
this
I'd been
part I
looking
genuinely
from.
don't remember.
But when I got
all
there,
I know is I had to run to the fence to be considered safe from whatever the threat in the game was.
Nor was there a ring of stones
while I was on the
pile
fence,
of ash
next to some other kids, mind you,
charred
man
wood,
says hey
nothing.
from the other side of the fence.
The ground was completely undisturbed,
and it's a man asking me for directions to some place I don't even remember.
Someone had been there.
I said I don't know.
Signs of life
we
whatsoever.
weren't even supposed to talk to strangers outside of the schoolyard.
I stood there for a while, genuinely
your name's Chris, right?
I was certain I'd seen a fire.
Is implanted
it had been
in
a campfire burning
his voice,
for
the
at
look
least
on his
5
face,
minutes while I watched
my heart
it.
dropping.
And yet the ground
I
where
said
it should
no,
have been
lying
like
to
no
him.
one had set foot
he
there
then
in
smiled
months.
and said, "You don't remember
I
me,
considered
do
the
you?"
possibility that I
At
had
this
the wrong
point,
spot.
I ran
but
towards
there
one of the
wasn't another
recess
clearing
chaperones
anywhere
and pointed
near the
over
right
at the
distance
fence.
or direction.
But the man was gone.
There wasn't much I
One
could
of the
do
kids
beyond
next
that,
to me
though.
told me he
So I
saw
just
the man
moved on.
too.
I
The
still had
recess
2 more
ladies called the
nights
recess
planned.
in
I wasn't
short.
about to cut my
The
trip
school
short
called
over
my
something
parents.
silly like that.
I was sure it was that man
I
from the
hiked for
backyard.
most of the day.
I was
The
taken
terrain
home
changed
early that
as I
day.
moved deeper into the
I know my
forest.
parents were so sick
creek
and
bed
worried
fell
after
away
this.
behind me, and the
It was a
ground
hellish
started
month.
climbing.
We lived
By
in such a nice
mid-afternoon,
area
I
too.
was in a denser,
to almost be
older
chased
section
out of the neighborhood
forest where
because
the
of
trees
this
were taller
was just
and
a
the canopy
nightmare.
was thick enough to block out
After
most
months
of the
of
sky.
me being under tight supervision from
quieter
my
in there,
parents,
which was nice.
things went back to normal.
I found a good
I
campsite
can't express
around 4.
enough, though, how much
That
it
evening
still
was
pains me in my
uneventful.
chest.
It doused
thinking
my
about
fire
how I
a
could be
little
dead
after night
today
and
if
turned
that
into
man
the
had
night.
somehow successfully taken
I don't know what time
and it
it
makes me
was when the
sick,
sound
wondering
woke
if
me
he was
up,
ever
but it was
successful
loud enough
in
to pull
whatever
me
he
out
was
of a
trying to
dead
do
sleep.
with someone
I
else.
woke up to this distant, enormous cracking sound, like a thick branch being snapped in half, except it kept going.
I grew up
It
in
was
Salem,
violent.
Oregon.
It lasted for maybe
a quaint
3
little
or 4
small town
seconds.
feeling place.
At the tail end
I
of
moved
it,
out
there was
when I
a
was
deep,
21,
resonant
buying my
thud
first
that I could
house
quite
about
literally
50
feel
miles
in the
out
ground
from
beneath
Salem.
me.
I furnished my
I
first
instantly
house
knew
with a
what
mix
it
of
was.
stuff for my parents,
A tree had
their
fallen
friends, and
somewhere
a bunch of
deeper in
stuff
the
off
woods,
online
or at the very
marketplaces
least,
and apps.
a very large branch.
I was driving a Ford Raptor.
If you've ever
at
heard
the
the sound of a
time,
tree
so lugging
falling
stuff
before,
around was
which I
thankfully
do
very
understand
easy.
is kind of a rare occurrence.
On Facebook Marketplace
it's amazing
one day,
and terrifying
I found a
at the same
listing
time.
selling a bunch of good-looking
It didn't
stuff.
scare me per se.
The ones in the
but
listing
deafening
that caught
force
my
and
eye were
scale
this
of it gave me
cream-colored
this crazy
sectional
adrenaline
couch that
rush.
looked pristine.
I lay there in
this
my
Cannondale
sleeping bag,
brand
trying
mountain
to figure
bike.
out what had just caused it.
I didn't have a bike at the
The
time.
more I thought about it,
and where my
the
house
less sense
is,
it
having
made.
one is perfect for
It wasn't
exercise.
storming. There was barely
The other
any
stuff
wind.
on the listing
There was
didn't really
nothing I could
interest me.
think of that would have
The
brought a
listing
tree down
itself
on a
was
night
just
like
sort of a
this.
digital yard
There was
sale.
also nothing I could do.
I contacted the
I couldn't fall
seller, and
asleep
we
at
did a
that
little
point
typical
either.
back and forth.
My heart was still
He
racing.
was pretty short
The
and
adrenaline
straight to the
had me
point with
awake.
his answers.
So I just kind of
and
closed my
surprisingly
eyes
easy
and
to
waited for it
negotiate.
to wear off.
He agreed
Then,
to a slightly
not 10
lower
minutes
price,
later,
and he
it
said I could
happened
come pick
again.
the stuff up later
This
that
time,
night.
it was much
Days
louder.
are long in Oregon in the summer, so I'd still be showing up with some sunlight.
That
I banked on having to do a couple
crackling
trips to
sound, followed by
transport
a
the
crash
sectional
of
couch
branches
due
and
to
a
its
deafening
size.
thud. But
I
this one
set
was
out on my
close.
way to the house.
Not right
The
on
address
top
was
of me,
right on
but
the
close
coast.
enough that the sound was almost
I checked the satellite
disorienting,
view on the
and it
map
came
just
from
to
a
confirm it was
completely
bringing me
different
to a
direction than the
house,
first
and it
one.
was.
The
Based
first
on the
tree
map,
had fallen
there
somewhere
was a
to
long
the south,
trail or
and the second
driveway
one was
that
to my
veered off the
northwest.
road towards a
I
huge
sat up
open property
immediately.
with a big looking house.
Now I was actually
And then in
scared.
the backyard was
Two
a literal
trees falling
drop
on the
off to
same
the
night
ocean.
in 2 different parts of the
All
forest.
I could think
with no
was,
wind
no
and
wonder
no
these
storm.
people were selling all
That
this
was
stuff for so cheap.
inconceivable.
With that
I kept
kind
trying
of
to come
money,
up
I
with an
wondered why they weren't
explanation
just
that made
giving it
sense.
away.
The most
I headed
logical
out that
thought
way,
was that the
and it
first
didn't
one had
take
caused
long
some
to
kind
get
of
there.
chain reaction.
I could tell the
But that
closer I got to the
hypothesis didn't
shore,
account for
the
the
nicer
fact
the
that the
properties
trees fell in
got.
completely different parts
And
of
I
the
turned
forest.
onto the last road
Whatever
before
brought
I'd
down
be
the
turning
first
onto the
tree
driveway
had
for the
nothing to do
house.
with the second one.
This road was
They were
long.
two different events.
It was lined with woods
That
on
was
each
even more
side,
inconceivable.
and then I'd pass the occasional
I was
driveway
sitting there
leading to
processing
probably
all
a
this,
cliffside
when I heard
mansion.
something new.
Eventually,
Something that
I
took my
made it
fear
to the
from a medium
turnoff.
5
It was
to
a
resounding
tree-lined
10.
dirt road, or the
It was
driveway, I
slow
guess you
and
would call it.
continuous rumbling sound
About
that
10
I could only
seconds in
describe
of driving
as
down
a
this
cross between a
driveway,
groan and
it
a
opened
growl,
to this massive
like a
clearing.
person clearing their
The
throat.
driveway went on a
Except it
slight
didn't stop.
incline leading to the
It
house at
wasn't
the
an
top of
animal
this
sound
hill.
I recognized.
I
I've
pulled
heard
up next to
bears,
this
I've heard
older
elk,
sedan.
I've heard
It
bobcats.
was like a Mercury
This wasn't
disable or something. It did not match the house at all.
The noise on purpose.
Like this house looked like it belonged to a millionaire.
Like a full minute without
this car was a piece of
variation.
I went up to the front door, ready to ring the bell.
I grabbed
there was
my
a yellow post-it note
around
as
quietly as I could,
and it said on it,
at the
doorbell
flap.
broken. Please use back door.
I was full on
Weird,
panicking
because I could have just knocked.
Must have sat like that for 20 minutes.
As I walked down the front porch, I messaged the guy on Messenger that I arrived and was going around back.
Making it had moved further
walked around the side of the
just
house,
like that,
looking at each window as I passed. But the blinds all seemed to be closed.
I don't think I would have
got
been able
to the backyard
if I tried.
and it was crazy.
It was the worst
It
night
actually
of my
overlooked
life.
the Pacific Ocean.
As soon as I saw
I
daylight,
walked up the
I got out
back
of the
deck to
town.
go knock on the back door.
I packed up as quickly as
It was a
possible.
sliding glass
still
door.
spooked and
But
extremely
there was some kind of
unsettled
sliding
despite being
blind
able
that
to
was
see.
closed, so I couldn't
Once
see
everything was in my
inside.
pack, I started
knocked on
walking
the glass.
in the direction of the second tree.
I stood there for a minute,
the louder and closer
knocked
one.
again.
I needed to
look down at my phone to see if he answered or read my message. Neither.
I had my rifle ready.
I went to go sit on one of the chairs on the deck.
I found the tree
and spun it around to
10 minutes.
stare at the sunset and the view of the Pacific.
Its trunk was lying at an angle
was a
across
surreal
a shallow
view.
slope.
I kept checking my messenger
branches
app
and
and
debris were
following up with
scattered
the guy,
all around it,
but he wasn't answering.
So it was real.
I triple checked
couldn't
that I had the
believe
right address.
I'd been trying to
and I
convince
did.
myself I had just
Plus,
imagined
the note on the
everything
front
from the
door
night before,
confirmed that.
But there it was.
I decided if he
I
was in the
needed to keep
shower or
investigating.
occupied or something,
I wouldn't
I'd at
have
least
been
go walk
satisfied
over to the
leaving
cliffside and get a
without knowing what
picture
had
of the
caused the
view.
fall.
I did
I
just
walked
that.
over the stump, which
I
was
walked
about
down the
3
deck,
feet high.
then down the seemingly
The
freshly
wood
cut
where it
grass
had
to the
broken was
cliffside.
pale and fresh.
Taking
but the
in the
break
view,
wasn't clean.
I daydreamed
wasn't
about
the kind
one
of
day
jagged
being able to
splintered
afford a place
fracture
like
you get
this.
from wind stress or
I
root
started
failure.
walking back up to the house.
The wood around the break point had
stopped
been
maybe
torn
3
apart in
steps
a way that I had never
I
seen
realized
before.
every single
Parts
window
of the
now
stump
had their
looked like
blinds
they'd been
open,
gouged.
and there was a person
don't know
standing
how
at
else to
each
describe
window,
it.
standing
There were
as
long,
still as
irregular
statues.
grooves running through the wood.
I didn't
at
know if
different
what I was
angles.
looking at was
It
some
looked
kind
like
of
some of
prank or
them were
not.
up to an inch deep.
I walked a
at
little
least.
closer, and the moment
wood
I said,
genuinely
nope, I've
looked
seen
like it had
enough,
been stripped
was
and
when I
chewed
realized
rather than
every
cut
single
or
face
snapped.
was smiling.
The more I looked, the more
I
I
honestly
noticed.
couldn't tell if they were
Some of the
mannequins
bark
or
around the
not.
base had been peeled
That's how
away
still
in
they
long
were.
strips. The
I decided
exposed
I
wood
just needed
underneath
to
had
get
that
to the
same
car.
gouged
I did a
and
light
chewed up
jog
look.
around the side of the house
Can't
again.
pretend I knew what
and
I
that
was looking
side
at
window that
because
I
I
mentioned
didn't.
that also had its
I'd
blind
seen
shut
beaver damage
before is
This
now
was
too
not bad.
lifted.
Beavers leave
There
clean
was someone at this
cuts.
window as well.
I'd seen woodpecker damage.
I didn't know
and this
what was
wasn't
going
bad
on
either.
here, but I had to
This was
get out.
aggressive, messy,
As I got to the
and
front,
covered
I
way
got
too
back in
much
my car,
surface area to be
and I
any
didn't even
animal I
look
could
at the
think
front
of.
windows. I
The tree
didn't even
hadn't
want to know
fallen
if there were
because it was
people at
dead
these
or
windows
because the
too.
wind knocked it over.
I reversed all the
Something
way
had
down the
worked on that
driveway,
trunk until it
and
came
regrettably,
down.
I
And
did at one
suddenly,
point
I
take
felt
a
this
curious
really
look
nasty
ahead of
feeling
the
in my
house.
gut.
The front
I
door
needed
was
to leave.
open, and there was a person
I stopped
standing on the front
examining the
porch
tree
with his
and
hands in
started
his
backing
pockets,
away.
watching me
But
drive
as I was
away.
turning to leave,
It didn't
something in
matter.
one of the tree
Everything about
branches
this
caught
was a
my
red
eye.
flag.
There
I was
was a
out of
small
there in a
cluster of
minute
items
and down the
sitting on the
road.
ground.
The guy never
Weren't for the
opened
fact
or
that they looked
responded to my
man-made,
message still.
I wouldn't have even
I
bothered
decided to
checking
turn
them
into
out.
the closest neighbor's
As
house
soon as I saw
driveway
what they
and
were,
knock on the
I
door.
lost my shit.
They answered,
There was a blue
and
bandana
I explained the
and a
bizarre and
carabiner,
disturbing
and they were
situation I
both
just
my
encountered,
items.
and I pressed them about any info on
I
their
instantly
neighbor.
started digging
The
through
man
my
who
pack
answered,
and
who
confirmed
I'll
those
call
2 items
Tom,
were
was
missing.
shocked.
In that
Because he's
moment,
close
I
friends
grabbed
with the
my
guy
stuff,
next door,
shoved it in my
and he said
backpack
he's
and
hardly
ran.
ever in town,
I
that he
didn't know
wouldn't
if
set up
running
some
was the
kind
right
of elaborate
decision.
prank
That
like
would have
that.
attracted attention
He
to
called
me,
his neighbor
but
on the
I did
spot,
anyway.
and the guy picked
I
up.
just needed to get out of
Basically,
those
the
woods.
conversation went as follows.
I got
from what I
tired after a
remember.
while under the weight of
Hey
all my
Jim,
stuff.
it's Tom next
I moved
door.
as fast as
Listen,
I
I
could.
got someone at my front
The
door
hike
right
back
now
took me
saying
most
you
of the
invited
day.
him to your house
The
to tie
entire
stuff,
time,
but
I
you
felt
pulled
like I
some
was
kind of
being
scary
stalked
prank
or
on him with the
watched.
windows and
I
stuff.
felt like something was going to jump out
And
from
there was a
somewhere any
pause before
second.
the Tom guy said,
I kept my
"What
rifle
are
in
you
my hands
talking
the
about?"
entire time.
From here, I
made it
stepped
back to
in
my
and
car
explained
around 3 in
everything
the
from the
afternoon.
Facebook ad
I drove
to
out of
my
there so
arrival
fast,
there to the
despite
people
my
at the
exhaustion.
windows.
The first
He now
thing I did
sounded
when I
very
got to a safe
concerned
distance away
because he said
was
he
call
wasn't
the
home
police.
this week.
I
I
don't
did
think
my
they took
best
me
to
very
describe
seriously,
every
but I
detail,
didn't
including
care.
what the man
I
on the
also
front
knew there
porch looked
probably
like,
wasn't much they could
as well
do,
as the sketchy
but I didn't
car.
care about that either.
He asked me to take his
I was pretty
number
messed
so he
up
could
for days
contact me after
afterward.
the police
None of it made
investigated.
any sense whatsoever.
After that, I left.
What I couldn't get over
I went
was the
home.
fact that my
I
stuff
really
had been
didn't have it in me
rummaged
to
through.
commit 2 hours to
Something
some
had either
police
stalked me
investigation
through
that
the
didn't
woods
concern me,
or knew
truth
where
be
I
told.
was the entire time.
But I did hear from the guy
That
later that
unexplainable
night.
fire from the
He
first
called
night must
me
have had
and asked
something
me to
do
send
with
him
it.
the Facebook
There's
listing.
no way that was a coincidence.
But it was removed.
And those trees.
I did send him
still
the
have no
details of the
explanation for
profile
what
that I
could
was
have cut them
messaging on
down.
the messenger app.
I genuinely
But
don't
it was
think
now
it was
a blank
anything
profile.
human. But as for what
He
animal
thanked me
it
for
could have
that
been,
and would give it to
I
the
have no
police
idea.
anyway. When I
still
asked him
go
what the
camping,
cops
believe it or
found,
not.
he
But
told
this
me
is
they
something that I
found
think
nothing
will hang over
stolen
me
as far as he
forever.
knew at that time, and that all the blinds were once again closed, and there was no sedan in the driveway, but that all 3 doors in the house were unlocked. Now the scary part for me is the way they were all standing at the windows, smiling, trying to scare me. And I have to wonder, what use was I going to be of to them? And why did they want me in the backyard? One of those stories I've been sitting on for a really long time.
I'm just glad I left
back
when
I was maybe 25 or 26, way before I met my wife and way before we had kids. I was a completely different person back then. Not in a bad way, just in the sense that I had the kind of free time and risk tolerance that I genuinely
My
can't
parents were
relate to
gone one
anymore.
weekend, so I
I
decided
decided
I
I
was
was
going
going
to
to
have a
solo
bunch of people
backpacking
over in the
trips a few
backyard
times
for
a
mini
year,
pool parties.
usually somewhere in
We
the
have a pool house
Appalachians.
and an in-ground pool
I'd drive
back
out
there.
to some
It's
remote
perfect
trailhead,
for parties,
hike
even
deep
though I
into the
rarely get a
backcountry,
chance to throw
way
anything.
off the trail, The rest of the backyard is a little bit of grass and then the woods behind the pool house.
No other people.
It's a very private backyard.
I loved it.
Usually.
My friends thought I was insane, and honestly, I kind of was.
So the little party I planned was for Saturday night.
Was in the Cherokee
Earlier
National
that day,
Forest.
I was setting up
changed
outside.
how I see backpacking.
It was a little
forever.
cloudy out, but since it was going to be a
I'd been out
night
there for 2
party,
days,
that didn't
and
really
everything
matter.
had been going perfectly.
The woods behind the
Weather
pool
had been
house
great,
are pretty
the
big.
trail was quiet.
They go at
and I
least
hadn't
half a
seen
mile
another
back
person
before they
since the
reach
first
another
morning.
backyard.
That changed pretty
So there
quickly,
should really be
though.
no one walking through
On
them.
the afternoon of the
It's
second
also our
day,
property.
I noticed
There are
dark
no
storm
trails
clouds
or any
building up
reason
to the
for anyone to
west.
be back there.
I wasn't too
I
worried.
was bringing
at
out
first.
folding
I'd
tables
hiked
for
through
beer
rain
pong and
plenty of
refreshments
times,
and
it was
setting
never
them
a
up.
big deal.
When I heard a
But
cough
within
come
about
from
an
the
hour,
woods,
I realized it wasn't going
it
to
was
be a
clearly a
passing shower.
slow throat
The
clearing
wind
kind
picked
of
up
cough.
hard, and the temperature
someone
dropped
trying to get
fast
something
enough
out of
that I
their
actually
throat.
stopped to put on another
It was
layer.
definitely a man.
By the time the rain
I
started,
froze with the
I
table
was
still
already
in my
looking for a
hands.
spot to hunker
I just
down.
stood there listening.
The problem was that I was in a pretty
The wind
exposed
was barely
section of
moving
the
the
trail.
leaves, so the
As
sound
I
carried
predicted,
really clearly.
It wasn't a light
It
rain.
came from just
It went
inside the
from
tree
windy
line,
to full
not
on
deep in the
downpour in
woods.
minutes.
Close enough that whoever
Wind was
made it could
bending
definitely
smaller
see me.
trees sideways, and I could hear
slowly
branches
set the table
cracking and
down
falling
and
in the
looked out
canopy
toward the
above
trees.
me. I started
Confused
getting
is one
genuinely
word to
concerned
use,
about my
but
safety.
unsettled would be a better
Lightning
one.
was striking pretty close
No
by.
one should be in those
I was
woods,
hiking at
ever.
elevation with a
I
metal
scanned the
framed
tree
pack
line
on
and
my
called
back.
out, "Who is that?"
Not ideal.
There was no answer.
I kept pushing forward,
Not even any
completely
movement.
soaked at that
No
point.
footsteps or
I was
branches
scanning the
snapping
woods
or
on either
anything.
side of the trail for
That almost
anything
made
that
it
could pass
worse.
as shelter.
If it was some random
As if
guy
by some
walking
miracle,
through, I
I
should have
actually
heard
saw
him
a
moving
structure
away.
through the trees off to
But
my
it was
left.
just quiet.
It was small
I got that
and dark
feeling in my
and
chest,
partially
like
hidden
I
by
was
the
being
forest,
watched.
but it was
Like someone was
unmistakably
standing
man-made.
perfectly still just
As I
behind
got
a tree,
closer,
staring
I realized
at me.
it was a tiny
I stood
one-story
there for
cabin.
maybe 20 seconds
It
just
looked
listening.
extremely old.
The longer
like
I
it could
stood
have been
there,
a
the
hunting
more
cabin
uncomfortable
or
I
a
felt.
homesteader's shelter from
Eventually,
decades
I
ago.
just grabbed the rest of the stuff
There was
and
a
brought
single
it back
window
inside
on the
for a
side
bit.
I was approaching.
I didn't want to just stand out
Can't
there alone
overstate how
anymore.
relieved I was.
I called my good
practically
friend Mark to
sprinted
come
over
over
to the
early
thing
and help me
pushed the
set
door
up.
open.
I decided not to
Inside,
mention the
it was
cough.
dim, but
I didn't want
dry.
to sound paranoid
There
before
wasn't
the
much
party
in
even
there.
started.
Just a chair, a small
Mark came
table,
over
and
around
what
6
looked like
p.m.
a cot frame pushed
He
against
brought some
the far
drinks
wall.
and helped me finish setting
There
up.
was a stone fireplace.
I kept
on the
glancing
right
at the
side that
woods
was
while
clogged
we were
with
out
old
there,
ash and debris.
but everything looked normal.
The place honestly
Nothing
smelled
moved.
really bad.
If
But
someone
I
had
didn't
been
care
there
about
earlier,
anything
they
other
were
than
gone.
stripping out of my
The
soaked
rest of my
clothes
friends
and
started
laying
showing
down.
up around 7 to 8.
There wasn't a couch
At the
or
peak of
anything
the
in
party, there were at
so I
least
literally
20
just picked a
people.
spot on the floor.
Nothing
and lied
insane,
down.
but it was a good time.
It was in survival
There was
mode
music
at that
playing,
point,
people
not
in the
exploration
pool,
mode.
lights around the patio
All I
on.
cared about was
With
that I
that
was
many
out of the
people
store.
there, the woods didn't feel
It wasn't
creepy
until I'd
anymore.
been inside for maybe
A
10
couple
or
times during the
15
night,
minutes
I caught
that
myself
started
looking
actually
toward the
looking
tree
around,
line.
though. With
I
the
don't even
storm
know
raging
why.
outside,
I guess
there
that
wasn't
cough
much
just
else to
stuck
do
with me.
besides flick on a flashlight.
Things
and
started
sleep.
dying down
So
around
that's
midnight.
exactly what I did.
By 1 a.m., the last
There
of
was
the
more
guests
stuff
had
in that
left.
cabin than I had
I
initially
figured
realized.
I would leave the mess to
For
clean up for
starters,
tomorrow.
There was a sleeping
I was
bag
tired
rolled up
and ready
in the
for
corner
bed.
near the cot frame.
Before going inside,
It didn't look
I
ancient
did
like the
one
rest of
last
the
slow
place,
sweep
which
of the
confused me.
backyard. I
There
walked
were
around the
also a couple
pool,
of cans
checked
and
behind the
water
pool
jugs
house,
on the table,
looked toward
which
the
made
woods
me think
again.
someone had been using the
Everything
place
seemed
as a
normal.
base camp of sorts.
The water in the pool was
Maybe
still,
another
the lights
backpacker or
reflected
a
off of it.
hunter.
No one was
It
out
wasn't
there.
unusual to find stuff like
I locked
that
the
in
back
remote
sliding door
cabins.
and went
The more
upstairs
I
to
looked
brush my
around,
teeth and
the
go to
more
bed.
things started bothering
I was
me.
in bed scrolling on my
There were
phone for
marks on
maybe
the
half
wall
an
near
hour
the door.
before putting it
At
down.
first, I thought they were just damaged.
Probably
from
took
age or
another
weather.
half hour
When I
laying
got
there
closer
trying
to
to sleep.
inspect them, I could
I
see
heard a
they were
splash.
scratches. There
Not
were
a small
dozens of
one.
them, some
Not like
shallow
something
and
falling
some
in.
deeper.
It sounded
There was no
exactly like
pattern
someone
or order
jumping
to
into the deep
marks,
end.
At least not when I
My
could
eyes
see.
opened immediately.
I stepped back.
I held
and looked
still,
at the door
listening.
itself.
A few seconds
handle
later,
was a simple
I heard the
latch,
sound of
which
someone
wasn't
swimming.
unusual.
Literal
Despite
strokes
the
through the
storm,
water.
I opened the door
My
just
first
to get a
thought
look
was
at the
maybe someone
mechanism.
from the party stayed
There
behind
was
as
a
a
metal
joke,
bracket on
where
the
they just
outside of
woke
the
up
frame,
drunkenly.
which looked like it was
But I knew
designed to
everyone
hold
who
a
came.
padlock.
No one would do
The
something
bracket was
like
on the
that.
outside.
I checked my
There
phone.
was no
It was
corresponding latch on the inside. I got out of bed and walked slowly to the window that overlooks the backyard. I didn't turn on any lights in my room. I didn't want whoever was out there to see me before I saw them. The only thing I looked down at the pool was the window. I saw there was a guy swimming calmly from one end to the other. Was still perfectly intact. At first, I tried to recognize him, given the apparent I knew all 20 or so people who came over. Then I noticed why. This wasn't any of them. There were screws drilled into the window. I leaned closer to the glass. One in each corner. Cool lights lit up his face, just enough for me to know for sure. From outside, I had never seen the edges of the frame on the inside. I yelled out the window. There were more scratches. The swimming stopped immediately. These were unmistakable. He looked up slowly toward my window. He honestly looked like someone had tried to pry the window open. I could tell he wasn't confused or startled. All of it hit me. He just stared up at me. Someone had then he started moving toward the shallow end. He climbed out of the pool. Their will, and that's when I saw how tall he was. Right then, and I did consider he stood there dripping wet for maybe 2 seconds. I felt like whatever had gone on in that cabin was well in the past. I expected him to run away. Everything in the cabin looked really old. He started walking toward the sliding door, which did look on the newer side, not running or hesitating. was rigid
just
and
walking
dusty.
fast and direct,
Plus,
like
the
he
last
already
thing
knew
I
where
wanted
he
to
was
do
going.
was go back out in
Almost
that
in a
storm
march.
again. So I
I yelled
stayed.
again, "Hey, who is that?"
I'm not sure how much
He didn't
time
respond.
passed. Maybe an
I
hour.
heard the sliding
maybe
door
more.
downstairs open.
The storm wasn't
I
letting
know
up
I
at
locked
all.
it. I'm
If
positive I
anything,
did.
It had gotten
But
worse.
I heard it slide open.
The rain on
and
the
it
roof
slid
was so
shut.
loud that it was
I
hard
ran
to
to my
hear much
bedroom
of
door
anything
and
else.
locked it. That's when I
Probably
noticed how
why it
much
took
my
me
hands
so
were
long to
shaking.
notice the other sounds.
I grabbed my phone and
I picked
texted
up
Mark,
on the
asking him if he
scratching
noticed
or
anyone stay
scraping
behind
noises
before
from
leaving.
outside,
But
somewhere
I didn't
along
wait
the
for a
left wall of the
response.
cabin.
I immediately
At
called
first, I
911.
thought it was a branch.
I
but
whispered
couldn't
into the
remember
phone
if there
that
had
there
been
was an
branches
intruder in
low
my
enough
house.
to even touch the
I
exterior
gave my
of the
address
cabin.
as quietly as I could.
As I was thinking
Then
about
I heard
it,
the footsteps.
I heard two heavy thumps on the porch.
They were slow, wet footsteps
They
of
honestly
hard
didn't
wood.
sound like storm sounds.
I could hear the slight stick of
This
his
time
feet
I
lifting
stood
off
up.
the floor.
I did that
He
thing
wasn't
where you
rushing,
freeze in place
nor
and
was
try
he
to
searching
focus by
randomly.
staring at a
He
random
was walking
spot on the
directly
wall.
toward the stairs.
I was trying to
Each
listen.
step on the stairs
If someone was
creaked,
moving out there,
one at a time.
It would have been impossible
He
to
reached
hear
the top.
over the storm.
The hallway floor
I
outside
started
my
getting
room
paranoid
creaked.
that those sounds I heard were
He
just
stopped
a few
right
of
outside
many,
my bedroom
and that
door.
The rest had been drowned out
I could
by
hear
the rain.
water dripping onto the floor.
My eyes drifted over
Then
to
the handle
window.
moved. He
I
tried
couldn't
opening
bring myself
it once,
to look through
then
it.
twice.
If someone
then
really
the third
was out
time,
there,
harder
he'd
each
probably
time.
be looking through
When he
it.
realized it was locked.
I stayed in that
There was a
position
long
for what
pause.
felt like forever.
The
After a
911
while,
operator was
I
saying
started to
something,
relax
but I had the phone
thinking
set
I'd just
down.
been hearing the storm.
I could barely
or at the
focus
very
on what
worst,
she
an
was
animal
saying.
poking around the cabin.
Then the guy knocked on the
I was
door.
almost ready to
3
forget
slow
about
knocks.
everything when I heard something
I
that
picked
sent
up
me
the
over
phone
the
and
edge.
put it on speaker. My voice was shaking, but I
Pressure
said
on the
loudly
door,
that I was on the
like
phone with
someone
the
was
police
leaning
and they were
full
on their
weight
way.
against it from the other side.
There was another long pause.
The wood creaked,
and a
the
man's
latch
voice from the
rattled
other
once
side of
before
the door
pressure
said,
released.
very low and calm,
My heart rate instantly
me.
shot back
Open the
up,
door.
and that's when something clicked.
He sounded like a grown man.
Why
in
would
his
someone be
30s.
outside in a storm like
I
this?
said, I know that I
circling the
don't know
cabin,
you.
tapping on
Leave
the
now.
walls without just coming
There
in.
was silence again.
The door wasn't locked.
5 seconds,
Nothing was
maybe
stopping
more.
them.
Then I heard him
thought about
turn
what I'd
and
found
walk away
inside the
quickly.
cabin, and it
I heard his
occurred to
wet
me that
footsteps
maybe
go back
whoever
down
was
the
out
hallway,
there didn't
then
want
down
to
the
come
stairs.
inside.
A
Maybe
few
they wanted
seconds
me to
later,
stay inside.
I heard the front door downstairs
Maybe the whole point
open
was to
and
keep
slam
me in
shut.
there.
I
I don't
didn't
know
move
if that
until
was the
the
right
police
conclusion
arrived.
or if my mind was
When I
just
finally went
spiraling.
downstairs with
but I
them,
decided I was
there was a
leaving
clear
right
trail
then.
of water
I
leading
didn't
from
care
the back
about the
door,
storm.
up
I
the
started
stairs,
moving
all
things
the way
into
to the
my
bedroom
backpack
door.
as fast as I could.
After searching the entire
I had a
house,
sickening feeling
that was the
something
only
really
proof that
bad
he had
was
ever
about to
been there.
happen. And I was
I
right.
texted everyone I
The next
invited,
few moments
asking
were
if they
a
stayed
blur.
behind or
I
noticed
was
anyone
maybe
else
30
stay behind.
seconds from walking out the
Anyone
door
who was still
when I heard
awake
the
said
sound
no.
of glass
The
shattering
rest
behind
texted
me.
back in the morning saying no.
I spun around just in time
was
to see
a
something
complete
come through the
stranger.
window.
And
That
I
was
have
all
a
I could
feeling
see
that cough
before
I heard in the
whole
woods
room
earlier
erupted
that
in
day
flames.
was that man.
The flames spread
I
so
don't know
fast
how
that
he
I
got
couldn't
the
even
door
process
unlocked.
what was happening.
Maybe he slipped in during the
One
party
second
when
I was
people were
standing
going
in
in
a
and
dark
out.
room, and the next
As for a
second the
motive,
walls were on
I have
fire.
no idea.
The heat
I just
hit
know
me
that
like
if
a
I didn't
physical
wake up
wall,
when I
and
did,
the door wouldn't
or
budge.
if I opened
It was
that bedroom
jammed from the
door
outside.
I don't know what he would have
I
done.
slammed into it with all my might, and it gave. It collapsed off its hinges, and me with it. I scrambled to get back on my feet, and I just ran. I couldn't even see. I was just running wildly through the woods and rain, trying to put as much distance between myself and that cabin. But before I could get a safe distance away, I felt something tackle me
I'm
from
the
behind.
middle sibling of
and I
3.
was back on the ground.
I have 2 brothers.
There was a
they
person
both grew
on
up
top
as
of me,
scouts.
and suddenly I was fighting
my
for
older
my
brother
life.
made it to Eagle Scout.
I clawed
my little
and kicked
brother
and
quit some time in
screamed,
Boy
but this guy
Scouts.
wouldn't get off
But
me.
for whatever reason,
He was yelling
my parents
too,
never forced
and he
me
kept
to become
trying
a
to get me
scout
in a
when I was a
chokehold.
kid. Which is
He was
weird,
gouging at my
because I
eyes
remember
and
always
pulling
being
my
really
hair,
jealous
and I
of my
started
older
to feel
brother
dizzy.
Scott when my mom
But I
would bring me
managed to
along to
push
the
him
Pinewood
off.
Derby contests
I got
and
back up and
celebrations
kept
and
running.
such.
And whoever had just
But the
tried
thing
to
that I
kill
was
me was
always the most
screaming like a
jealous that I
maniac.
missed out on were the
I looked back
campouts.
twice.
When the troops would go
I
out
couldn't
into
see
the
my
wilderness
attacker,
and camp
but
out
I
for a
did see
whole
the
weekend.
cabin, which was
I
fully
went along
engulfed
for
in
the drive
flames.
once or twice.
I think
and
the
I
picture
saw
of
them
that
all setting
fireball
up, doing
was burned into
campfires
my
and
brain
such.
forever.
But being younger
The
and
second
also
time I
not part
looked
of the
back,
troop,
the glow was
I don't think I
smaller,
was
but
allowed
still
to stay.
visible through the woods.
So I'd go home
But
with
I just
my
kept
parents.
running. For
My
all I
jealousy
knew, I
of
was
these
being
campouts scouts was mainly towards my older brother because I was growing up watching him prepare for these camping trips.
A couple of large
Before
trees
every
had fallen
trip,
against each other.
he'd be given a tent to take home and practice setting up in the backyard. Even
I
though I
crawled
was
under
only
there
like
and just
7 or
collapsed.
8, I remember so
feel my
clearly
body.
how
I don't know if
eager
it
I
was the
was
fire,
when I
the
hatched
pain,
the
or
idea
the
to do a
attack.
little backyard
Maybe all
camping.
three. But I was
Basically,
completely
we set
numb.
up the tent in the backyard
All
and
I
sleep
did was
in it
sit in that
overnight.
crouched position
To my
and
little
try to keep
mind,
breathing.
that was the most
I don't know how
exciting
many
idea
hours
ever.
passed under those trees.
Also, our
The time
backyard
lost all
wasn't really a
meaning.
traditional backyard.
Eventually, I
Our
felt some
childhood
feelings
house
start
was
to
in a
re-enter
very
my
spacious
body,
neighborhood
and I told
where
myself
yards
it was
just kind of all
move or
meshed
die.
together, and there
Whoever
weren't
was
many
out there was
fences,
probably looking
more
for
so
me,
large
and
patches
couldn't
of
have been that
trees and
far
brush
away.
separating
So I
yards,
got up and started
which added
moving
to the
through the
camping
woods.
feel. Our
I didn't
backyard
know
was
where the
also
trail
huge,
was, but I
and
didn't
we had
really
a fire
care.
pit,
I honestly
so our
can't
parents
tell you
played
how I
along
survived
and
that
set up
night.
the fire pit
I
in our backyard for us so we
stumbled
could get
onto
the
a
full
random
camping
trail and
experience.
just followed it.
My little
I
brother
was
roasted
soaked and
marshmallows
probably
with us
bleeding
too.
from multiple
But our
places.
parents weren't going
I
to let
just
him
kept
sleep in the
trudging
tent.
on.
He was only like 4
Eventually,
at the time,
the
and it
rain
wasn't a good
subsided a
idea.
bit.
And no,
he wasn't a scout yet, obviously. He was 4. I made it to some
After
random
it got a little
trailhead.
late,
By that
parents
point,
brought
the
him in
storm
and
had
told us
passed.
it was time to start getting ready
I
for
don't remember
sleep.
too much after that.
At this time in
All
my
I
life,
remember is
the
that
Game
the
Boy
first person
SP
I
was
saw
the
drove me to
handheld
a
console. So
I had
after getting into our
second-degree
sleeping
burns on my left
bags,
forearm
Scott and
the
I
back of
whipped
my
out our
neck.
Game Boys and
Doctors
played our
told me I was
respective
lucky I
games.
hadn't inhaled more smoke
I was
than
playing
I did.
Super Mario Bros.
None
2,
of it was
a
permanent,
game I was
but it hurt
obsessed
like hell
with,
for a
yet
long
could never
time
beat as a
afterwards.
child.
By
After
the
getting
time
a
I
little
was
more
healed and
tired,
safe
though,
at home,
I turned to
I
my
told
side
myself
and
I would
tried
never
to sleep.
camp or hike alone
I remember
again.
not being able to sleep.
Someone had intentionally
Like,
set that
I was
cabin on
tired,
fire
but
to kill me.
restless.
That's the only thing
Maybe
that makes
because
any
I'd never
sense.
slept in a sleeping
It was
bag
pouring
before,
rain,
and quite
full-blown
frankly, it wasn't
thunderstorm, and the
comfortable.
roof was metal.
A
There's
lot
no
of
way
time
wooden
passed,
structure
and I
goes
mean
up
a
like
lot,
that
before I
fast
finally
unless
nodded
the wood
off.
had been treated with something
And
beforehand.
then I woke up,
I gave the
probably
police
confused
everything,
about where
or
I
as
was
much
at
as I
first,
could. But I could
not
tell they weren't
recognizing
really
my
gonna do anything.
surroundings.
And to be fair,
I remember
wasn't
looking
in
around the
charted
dark
part of
tent,
the woods,
and then
so it would have
noticing
been silly
something.
to hound them.
Scott was gone.
The only thing I
His
don't
sleeping
understand
bag was
is
empty.
the timing of everything.
The tent zipper was
My
closed,
wife would
though.
probably tell you
He
I
must have
stopped
went
doing
inside
solo
because he
trips
couldn't
because I
sleep.
grew up and got
I was
more
suddenly too
responsible.
scared to be in
She's
the
not
tent
entirely
alone.
wrong.
So I got
I
up
honestly
and
never
unzipped the
told her
tent.
about this
But
incident.
before crawling out,
And I know
I did
I'll
a
never
little
go
innocent
backcountry
peek
trekking
outside,
again
simply
alone.
because I was too scared to run out through the backyard without checking if the coast was clear. But it was not. I saw someone sitting by the fire pit in the darkness. It wasn't Scott.
My name is James.
It was a
This
grown
happened
man.
maybe 7
He
or
was
8
facing
years
the
ago.
tent.
Back when I
And
was in
surely
my
he
early
had to have
20s
seen
and still
me.
doing stuff that I probably shouldn't have
zipped
been
the
doing.
tent back up and crawled
I
back
had
into
this
my
friend
sleeping
Charles,
bag.
who was
as
kind
if
of
that piece of
notorious in
cloth
our
was
friend
any
group
form
for
of
finding
protection.
cool places to explore.
I stayed
like
completely
abandoned
still inside
buildings
my
and old
sleeping bag.
factories.
The tent was almost
If it was
completely
somewhere
dark.
you weren't supposed to
Just
be,
a faint
Charles
gray
had
from the moonlight
probably
coming
already
through the
been there
fabric.
and tell you exactly
I don't know
how to
what was
get
going
in.
through my mind at that point.
He spent a
but I
weird
do
amount of
know
time
that I
on
wanted to
Google
call
Earth
out
and
Dad,
these niche
just hoping
urbex
that it was my
forums.
dad.
And he'd always
But I
be
knew it
hitting the
wasn't.
group chat with
I
screenshots
got a
of
look at
random
the
places
man,
he
even
wanted
just
to check
briefly.
out.
And if
Most
it were
of us
my
would
dad,
entertain his
he'd have
ideas,
acknowledged
but
me
never
poking
actually
my head out
followed
of the
through.
tent.
I was
And that's
usually
when I
the
heard the chair
exception.
by the fire pit
Charles
shift.
and I had been
I
friends
was
since high
shitting
school.
bricks, hoping
and
the
I
man
think the
didn't
reason
get
we
up.
got along so
And if
well
he
was
did,
that we had
then he
similar
wasn't coming
thresholds for
towards the
risk.
tent.
While
But
most of
I
our
could
friends
see a
would
shadow
hear his
now on the
pitches
other
and
side
go,
of the tent,
"That sounds
blocking some of the
insane."
moonlight.
I'd hear them and go,
He was
"When are
right
we going?"
outside.
It was
Somehow,
a dynamic
I
that
thought
led
if I
to some
didn't
great
move,
memories.
maybe
and a
he
few
would think the tent
situations
was
that I
empty.
look back on now and
Then I heard the
genuinely
zipper
wonder how we made it
very
out
slowly
unscathed.
dragging downward.
This story is about
It
one of
only
those
moved a few
situations.
inches. The opening
One
was
weekend,
small. but it was
Charles
enough.
texted me about a fire
couldn't help
lookout
it.
tower he'd
I
found
turned
deep
my
in
head
some
just
forest
slightly.
not far away
There's a
from
small
us.
gap at the bottom
I
of
really
most
wish I
tents
could
where the
remember the
zipper
name of
doesn't
the
fully
forest,
seal.
but I can't.
I had never noticed
Charles
it before
said
that
it
night.
had been decommissioned
An
years
eye
ago.
was pressed
It was
against
sitting
that
out there in
gap.
the middle of
Just
nowhere,
one eye,
completely
looking
untouched.
directly at me.
He didn't tell me how he'd found it, but I
I
didn't
could
want to
see the
know.
white of it in the
He was
dark.
convinced we could
I
hike
couldn't
out
even
to it,
scream at
climb
first.
it, and spend
Not
the
for a
night
few
up there.
seconds at least, because I
I
was
was more
paralyzed.
skeptical.
Then the eye
feels like that are
squinted
usually
again, as if
fenced
the
off
person was
where at least
smiling a
protect
smile that I
somehow.
couldn't see.
But I promised him
The
I'd
zipper
at least
moved
come and
another
check it
inch,
out.
and that's when I
To
finally
be fair,
screamed.
the idea of being
I
70
scrambled
feet or so
backwards,
up in the middle of a
kicking out
forest
of my
with a
sleeping bag,
360
knocking into the
degree
tent
view
poles.
sounded incredible to
I
me.
heard footsteps immediately
We picked
take
a
off
random
through the
weekend
yard.
and made it happen.
Our back porch light
Charles
flipped
planned the
on,
entire thing
which I could
out,
see through the
including
tent
drive,
fabric.
what to pack,
My dad
and how to
burst out
find
the
the
back
tower
door
once we were
yelling.
in the woods.
I could hear him running across
It was
the
a
grass.
3-hour drive away.
By the time he
and
reached
Charles
the fire
told me
pit
the hike
area,
would be off the
whoever
trail.
it was
pretty
was already
short,
gone.
about 4 miles or so.
My parents called the police, of
We
course.
drove out early in the
I don't
morning
remember
on
what
Friday
happened after
and
my
made it
parents
into the
talked
woods
to the
sometime
cops.
in the afternoon.
I know I went to my
For some
parents'
reason,
room with my
I
mom.
was kind of expecting
and
us to
eventually
get
the
lost,
police did their
or at
thing,
the very least not
likely
find
searching
the
the
tower,
immediate
which is
area.
exactly
It
why
was
I
an
was all the
absolute
more
nightmare.
astonished when we actually
I
did.
slept in my parents' bed
Seeing
that
it through
night.
the trees
I was
for the first
emotionally
time was
scarred
an
for a
insane
while.
sight. I
Just
remember
as things
blurting
might have
out
been
no
going back to
way
normal.
when I saw how
I
tall
think it was a few weeks to a
I was
month
even
later.
more astonished when we got
This
to the
part
base
is
of
what really hammers the nail in the coffin for this
unprotected,
experience being
fenced
something
off.
I can never
He
forget.
was just sitting there in the
I went
middle
to
of the
Catholic
woods,
school,
waiting for us to
and during
find
lunch
him.
we'd have a short
The cab
recess
at
in the
top
schoolyard,
was this
which was all
small square
concrete.
room with windows
The far
on all
end of
four
the schoolyard
sides.
was fenced
There was a
off
metal
and looked
staircase
towards the
that
street.
zigzagged up the frame.
We were playing
with a
some
section
game,
of vertical
maybe
ladder
red
for the
light,
final
green light, or
stretch up to the
something.
cab.
This part I
The whole
genuinely
thing
don't
looked like it
remember.
hadn't been touched
All
in
I know is I had
decades.
to run to the fence
Some
to
of
be
the lower
considered
railing
safe from whatever the
were
threat in the
missing,
game was.
and there was graffiti on
While
the
I was on the
support beams
fence,
near the base.
next to some other
To be
kids, mind
completely
you,
honest, it
a man
did
says
not look
hey
like the
from
type
the other
of
side of the
structure
fence.
anyone would be eager to
I
climb.
turn,
But
and it's a
Charles
man
was
asking me for
practically
directions
giddy.
to some place I don't
While
even
I was
remember.
hesitating and
I
debating
said I
whether
don't
I
know.
should try convincing
We
him
weren't
to
even
back
supposed
out,
to talk to
he had
strangers
already
outside
started
the
climbing.
schoolyard.
I
Then
yelled
he
at him
said,
to be careful.
"Your name's Chris,
and that
right?"
got him to slow down.
And that
I figured,
moment
what
is
the hell?
implanted
Told
in my
myself
brain.
to stop bitching.
His voice, the
The two
look
of
on
us
his
made our
face,
way up carefully,
my heart
checking the
dropping.
stairs as we went.
I said no.
Most of
lying
them
to
felt
him.
solid enough.
He then
but
smiled
there were a
and
few
said,
spots
"You don't
where the
remember
bolts had
me, do
rusted
you?"
through and the steps
At this
wobbled.
point, I ran towards one of the
vertical
recess
ladder
chaperones
section near
and
the
pointed
top
over
was
at
the
the fence.
sketchiest part.
But the
It
man was gone.
20-something feet of straight
One of the kids
climbing
next to
with
me
nothing
told me
but
he
a
saw the
narrow
man
metal
too.
cage around it.
The recess ladies
The
called the
adrenaline rush
recess
was
in short,
insane, but
and the
that's
school
what
called
Charles
my
lived
parents.
for.
I was sure it was that man from the backyard.
The view from
I
the
was
cab
taken home
unreal.
early that day.
You could see for miles.
I know my
in every
parents were
direction.
so sick and worried
We had also
after this.
timed it perfectly.
It was a hellish
The
month.
sun was maybe an hour from
We lived
setting.
in such a nice area,
Our plan
too.
was to camp out for
to
the
almost
night
be
and catch
chased
the
out of the
sunrise.
neighborhood because of this.
There was a
just
decently wide
nightmare.
wraparound walkway
After
out there,
months
which
of
is
me
where
being
we
under
decided
tight
to chill,
supervision from my
at least
parents,
initially.
things went back to
We
normal.
cracked a few beers.
I
and
can't
just
express
enjoyed the
enough,
view
though,
and some conversation.
how much it still pains me
The
in my
sun
chest
eventually went down.
thinking about
The
how
sky
I could
went
be
from
dead
orange
today
to
if
purple
that man had
to
somehow
dark blue in a
successfully
matter of
taken me.
minutes.
And it makes me
Once the
sick,
light was
wondering
gone,
if he was
the
ever
forest below us
successful
was
in
just
whatever
a
he was
black
trying to
mass
do
in every
with
direction.
someone else.
There wasn't a single light in sight. The stars were incredible, easily the best I've ever seen. But being alone out there in the dark was freaking me out a little.
I grew up
It
in
was just
Salem,
weird
Oregon,
not being able to see
a quaint
anything,
little small
despite
town
knowing
feeling
there was a whole
place.
forest below us.
I moved out when I was 21.
Charles could tell I
buying
was
my
getting
first
a little
house
antsy.
about 50
He
miles
started
out from
messing with
Salem.
me, grabbing my
I
shoulder
furnished
and
my
stuff
first
like
house
that.
with a mix of
But the
stuff
thing
for
that
my
pissed me off
parents,
the most
their
was when he
friends, and a
smacked
bunch
his
of
metal
stuff
water
off
bottle
online
against the side of the
marketplaces and
tower.
apps.
It's
I was
it's
driving a
incredibly
Ford Raptor
loud,
at the
echoing
time,
clang
so
in every
lugging stuff
direction,
around was thankfully
probably to
very
be heard
easy.
for miles.
On Facebook
The sound
Marketplace
was so
one day,
loud and ominous
I found a
that I actually
listing
got
selling a
mad at
bunch of
him.
good-looking stuff.
I told him I wanted to go
The ones
inside
in the listing
cab,
that caught
and he
my
finally
eye
got
were this
the hint.
cream-colored
There
sectional
wasn't much
couch
in there,
that
by
looked
the way.
pristine.
It had clearly been
This
hollowed out
Cannondale
ages
brand
ago.
mountain bike.
He said he was going to
I didn't
finish
have
his
a bike
beer
at the
before
time.
coming in and joining
And where
me.
my house
And I was
is,
fine
having
with
one
that.
is perfect for
I
exercise.
picked a random corner.
The
and
other
started
stuff on the
setting my
listing
sleeping
didn't really
stuff up.
interest me.
But before I
The
could
listing
finish,
itself was
he
just
told
sort
me
of a
in very
digital
quiet,
yard sale.
serious voice to come
I
back
contacted
outside.
the seller, and we did a
Very
little typical back and
un-Charles-like.
forth.
So
He was
I
pretty
did.
short and straight
I
to the
walked
point
back
with his
around to where he
answers,
was sitting,
and surprisingly
saw that he
easy
was
to
pointing
negotiate.
diagonally downwards.
He agreed to
toward
a
the
slightly
forest
lower
below us.
price, and he said I could come
At
pick the
first, I
stuff
thought he
up
was
later
just
that
messing with
night.
me again.
Days
It
are
only
long
took me
in
a few
Oregon in
seconds
summer,
to realize what he was
so
pointing
I'd still
at.
be showing up with some
There was a
sunlight.
light down there.
I banked
It
on
was
having to
faint
do a
and
couple
pretty
trips
far
to
away,
transport the
but it was
sectional
definitely
couch
down
due to
there.
its size.
It was genuinely
I
horrifying.
set out on my way to the
I
house.
was weaving through the
address
forest
was
at what
right on
seemed
the
like
coast.
walking pace. And
I
my
checked the
first thought was
satellite
that it was
view
a
on the
person
map
who
just to
heard the
confirm it
clang
was
from the
bringing me to
tower.
a house, and it was.
I don't know why I felt the urge
Based
to
on the
whisper,
map,
but I did.
there was a long
Told him
trail
he
or
was stupid for
driveway
doing
that veered
that.
off the
We
road
were probably
towards a
moments
huge
away
open
from getting
property
caught
with a
or
big looking
arrested or
house.
something.
And then in the
He
backyard
looked
was
at
a
me with
literal
this
drop
confused
off to the
expression
ocean.
before saying, "You
All
think
I
that's
could
a
think
person?"
was, no wonder these people
Now
were
it was
selling
my
all this
turn to
stuff
be
for so
confused.
cheap.
What the
With
hell was
that
he
kind of
talking
money,
about?
I wondered why they weren't just
I
giving
asked
it
him
away.
what else it could be.
I headed
He
out
said
that
that
way,
light was
and
moving
it didn't
way
take long
too
to get
evenly.
there. I could
He
tell the
wasn't
closer I
exactly
got to the
wrong.
shore,
The light
the
wasn't
nicer the
swinging
properties
or
got.
wobbling the way you'd expect
And then I
someone
turned
carrying
onto
a
the last
lantern or
road before
flashlight
I'd be
to
turning
do.
onto the
But then
driveway
again,
for the
It was
house.
probably too
This
far
road
away
was
to tell.
long. It was lined
I
with
didn't
woods
say
on each
anything after
side,
that.
and then I'd
Neither
pass the
did
occasional
Charles.
driveway leading
Just
to
kept staring
probably
at
a
this
cliffside
mysterious
mansion.
light as it continued weaving
Eventually,
through
I
the
made it
forest.
to the turnoff.
Part of me thought it was
It was
just
a
some random
tree-lined
hiker
dirt road,
that had nothing
or
to
the
do
driveway,
with
I
us,
guess you would
but
call
I knew
it.
that was wishful
About
thinking.
10 seconds in of
After
driving
a
down
few
this
minutes,
driveway,
it was
it
obvious
opened to
the
this
light was getting
massive
closer.
clearing.
It was
The
also
driveway
much
went on a
clearer
slight
that the light was
incline
moving
leading to the house
perfectly,
at the top of
like
this
it was
hill.
floating or hovering.
I pulled up next to this
Charles
older
asked me
sedan.
what we should do.
It was
and I
like a
didn't have an answer
Mercury
for him.
Sable or something.
There wasn't really anything
It did
we
not
could do.
match the house at
Like,
all.
what were we gonna do?
Like this
climb
house
down?
looked like it belonged to a millionaire.
We were throwing
this
out
car
more
was a piece of
theories.
shit.
The light suddenly
I
zipped
went up to
forward,
the front door,
like it
ready
skipped
to
a
ring the
beat.
bell. But there was
It
a
was
yellow
really
post-it
thick,
note
but
on
for
the
a
front
split
door.
second, that light
and it
went
said
from
on
steady,
it, doorbell
even
broken,
movement to an
please
abrupt
use
zip
back door.
forward. Then it was
Weird,
back to
because
steady
I could have
movement
just
again.
knocked. But
I
I
started
obeyed.
feeling my palms start
As
to
I walked
sweat,
down the
and I
front
could tell
porch,
Charles was really
I
freaked
messaged
out
the guy
too.
on Messenger that I
I kept
arrived
trying to
and was
convince
going around
myself
back.
that whoever was down there
I walked
was
around the
just
side of the
wandering
house,
aimlessly through
looking
the
at
woods.
each window as
But
I
again,
passed.
wishful
But
thinking.
the blinds all seemed
They
to
were
be
definitely
closed.
heading for the tower.
I got to
and
the
after
backyard,
about 10 minutes,
and it was
they reached
crazy. It actually
At that
overlooked
point,
the
light was
Pacific
directly
Ocean.
below us.
I
and I was
walked up the
bracing
back
myself
deck
for
to go
someone to
knock
yell
on
up
the
to
back
us
door.
and announce announced themselves as
sliding
police.
glass door, but there was some kind of
the light
sliding
just stopped
blind that was
moving and
closed,
stayed in that
so I
exact
couldn't see
spot
inside.
right below us.
I knocked on
From
the
our
glass.
vantage point straight above,
I stood there for a
you
minute.
could see the light
then
itself,
knocked again.
but not whoever was
I
holding it.
looked down at my phone to see if he
Charles and I
answered or
stared
read
at it
my
for a
message.
The suspense
Neither.
was killing me.
I went to
It
go
must have
sit
been
on one of the
killing
chairs
Charles
on the
even more,
deck and spun
because
it
he
around
again
to
did
stare at the
something I wanted to
sunset
throw
and
him
the
off
view
the
of the
tower for.
Pacific. It was
This
a
guy
surreal
actually
view.
yelled, "Hey, are you
I
good?"
kept checking my
down at the
messenger
light,
app and following up
revealing
with
our
the
presence.
guys, but he wasn't
I
answering.
looked at him in horror.
I triple checked that I had the right
Genuinely couldn't believe
address,
he would do
and
something
I
so
did.
stupid.
Plus, the note
He
on the
didn't
front
get a
door
response,
confirmed
though,
that.
and the light didn't even
I decided
move.
if he was in the
We
shower
waited a
or
little
occupied
bit,
or something,
then Charles
I'd at
yelled
least go
down
walk
again.
over to the cliffside and get a
Still
picture of the
nothing.
view.
So
I
there we
did
were,
just that.
70 feet
I
up
walked
in
down
an
the
abandoned
deck
fire
and down
tower
the
in the
seemingly
middle of
freshly
nowhere,
cut grass to
with
the
someone
cliffside.
or something blocking our
Taking in the
only
view,
exit.
I daydreamed
We're
about one day
completely
being able
trapped.
to afford a
We
place
must
like
have watched
this.
that light for 30
I
minutes
started
straight,
walking back up
whispering
to the
each
house,
other every so
but
often.
stopped maybe 3
never
steps
moved
in
once.
when I realized every
Wasn't
single
worried about
window
being
now had their
secretive
blinds
anymore.
open.
Charles
and there was
had
a
burned that
person
bridge a
standing
long
at
time
each
ago.
window.
So I did
standing
something I
as
should have
still
done a while
as
ago.
statues.
I grabbed my
I didn't know if
flashlight
what I was looking
and
at was some kind of
down
prank
at the
or
base
not.
of the tower.
I walked a little closer.
Even after I did that,
the moment I said
still
nope,
couldn't see
I've
the
seen
source of
enough,
the light.
was when I realized
Eventually,
every single
we
face
accepted
was
that there was
smiling.
nothing we could do, and tried to
I
go back
honestly
to what
couldn't
we
tell
were
if they were
doing.
mannequins or not.
We went back to
That's
talking,
how still they
and I
were.
made sure I never took my
I
eyes off
decided
that
I just
light
needed
for
to
more
get to
than
the
a few
car.
seconds.
I did a light jog
Charles
around
thought
the
it was
side
some
of the
kind
house
LED
again.
that someone
And
had
that
placed there
side
to
window
mess
that I
with us.
mentioned that also had its
Who the
blind
hell
shut
would bother
before
doing that?
was now too lifted.
At some point, Charles said
there
he
was
was going
someone
to
at
climb
this
down
window
and
as
check
well.
it out. And I told
I
him
didn't
that
know what was
insane.
going on here.
Not only
but
was
I
that
had to get
inviting
out.
trouble, but
As
it
I
was
got to the
downright
front, I
stupid
got
and
back in my
dangerous.
car, and I
As
didn't
we
even
were
look at the
arguing
front
about it,
windows.
I glanced
I didn't
down
even want to
and
know if there were
realized that I
people
couldn't
at
see
these
the light
windows too.
anymore. There
I
was just
reversed all the way
darkness,
down the
more
driveway,
darkness down there
and
again.
regrettably, I did at
I
one point
frantically
take a
scanned
curious
the emptiness
look
below
ahead at
us
the
with my
house.
eyes,
The
looking
front
for the
door was
light,
open,
but it
and
wasn't
there was a
there
person
anymore.
standing on the front porch with
Charles
his hands in
seemed
his
relieved,
pockets, watching me
I was
drive
the
away.
opposite.
It
He
didn't
kept telling
matter.
me to relax,
Everything about this was a
saying
red
whoever
flag.
had been there had
I
probably
was out of there
left,
in a minute
but I
and
was
down
more
the road.
freaked out than I had been when
The guy
the light
never
was just
opened
sitting
or
there
responded to my
motionlessly.
message still.
The thought
I
that
decided to turn into the closest neighbor's house driveway and knock on the door.
To me.
They answered,
Charles reassured
and I
me
explained
that
the
we'd obviously
bizarre
be
and
able to
disturbing
hear if anyone
situation
tried
I
to
just
climb the
encountered,
ladder, which
and
I
I
guess
pressed
was
them
true,
about any
but I
info
was
on
still
their
really
neighbor.
unsettled.
The man who answered,
Suddenly, I didn't
who I'll
want to
call
be in the
Tom,
open air
was
anymore.
shocked
I suggested that
because
we
he's
wait out
close
the rest
friends
of
with the
the
guy
night
next
inside
door,
the cab.
and he said he's hardly ever in town,
So we went
and that he
inside
wouldn't
and
set
set
up
up
some
our
kind of
sleeping
elaborate
bags.
prank like that.
Neither of us were going
He
to
called
sleep,
his
though.
neighbor
That
on the
was
spot,
suicide.
and the guy picked up.
Staying
Basically,
awake
the
turned out to be the
conversation
right
went as
decision.
follows from what I
It was
remember.
not 20 minutes after going
Hey
inside.
Jim,
we
it's
started
Tom next
hearing
door.
noises.
Listen, I got someone at my
First
front
ones
door
were
right
all
now
metallic
saying you
clangs
invited him
that
to your
echoed
house
up
to
through
buy
the
stuff,
steel
but
frame
you
of
pulled
the
some
tower.
kind of scary prank
They
on
weren't
him with the
footsteps,
windows and
which
stuff.
I want to be crystal clear about.
There was a
because I
pause
was
before the
listening
Tom guy
specifically
said,
for footsteps.
"What are you talking
This
about?"
was not that.
From here, I
It
stepped
sounded
in
more
and
like
explained
someone struck
everything
one of the
from the
support beams
Facebook
with a
ad
wrench
to my
or a
arrival
crowbar.
there to the
A few
people at the
minutes later,
windows.
another one came.
He now sounded
This
very
one was
concerned
more of a grinding
because he
sound,
said he wasn't
like
home
metal
this
being
week.
twisted against metal.
I did my best
It
to
lasted
describe
for a
every
good few
detail,
seconds
including
before
what the man
stopping.
on the front porch looked like,
Charles and I kept
as
looking
well as
at
the
each
sketchy
other
car.
Like we were expecting the other
He
one
asked
to
me
do
to take his
something,
number
but
so
there
he
was
could
nothing we
contact
could
me
do.
after the police
The
investigated.
sounds kept coming from what
After
sounded
that,
like different
I left.
spots, which
I
was
went
what
home.
really got me.
I really didn't
because
have it in me to
whatever was
commit
causing
2 hours to
was
some
moving
police
down there.
investigation that didn't concern
The
me.
sounds
truth be
continued on
told.
and off for a while.
But I did hear from the guy
kept trying to
later
map
that
out
night.
the sounds in my head.
He called me
figure out
and
where
asked
they
me
were
to
coming
send him
from,
the Facebook
how many
listing,
sources there were,
but it
whether
was
they were
removed.
getting closer or
I did
staying
send
at
him the
same
details
level.
of the profile that I was
Couldn't make
messaging on the
sense of
Messenger
any of
app.
it.
But it
Charles
was
and I
now
were
a blank
whispering to each
profile.
other about what we'd
He
do
thanked
if
me
we
for
started
that
hearing
and would
someone
give it to the
walking
police
up.
anyway.
I was
When
sitting
I asked him
against
what the cops
far wall
found,
of the cab.
he told me
facing
they
the
found
windows on
nothing
the opposite
stolen,
side.
as far as he knew
Charles
at
was
that
on the
time.
opposite side,
That all the
looking over my
blinds were once
shoulder.
again closed.
There were so many
and
windows
there was no
in there that
sedan
we
in the
didn't feel
driveway,
safe and wanted
but
to be
that
able
all
to see
3
out of
doors
all
in the
of them.
house were unlocked.
There wasn't much to see though.
Now the scary
They were all
part for
pretty
me
dark, with
is
the
the way
only
they were
light
all
being from the
standing at
stars
the
and the
windows,
moon.
smiling, trying to
But then
scare me.
I saw something.
And I have to wonder,
A dark
what use
outline
was I
moved
going to
across
be
the
of
glass.
to them?
My
Why
brain
did they want
couldn't
me in the
process what I
backyard?
was seeing fast
Scary
enough.
thoughts,
But then
honestly.
it passed in front of the next
Just
pane
glad I
over,
left when I
and
did.
that's what did it. I couldn't help but yell, and Charles scrambled away from the window. The two of us immediately ran over to the door and pressed our backs against it. If someone tried to
I
come
lived
through
with
that
my
door,
parents
they
in
were going to have to
Murraysville,
push through both of
Pennsylvania.
us.
My parents were
kept
gone
looking
one
for the
weekend,
figures
so
through
I
the
decided
windows,
I was
but I
going to have a
couldn't
bunch
see
of people
anything.
over in the
That
backyard
was
for a mini
impossible,
pool
though,
party.
unless they were
They
crawling
have a
on all
pool house
fours,
and
so
an
I should have
in-ground
been
pool
able to
back
see
there.
them.
It's perfect for
Charles
parties,
and I sat up
even
like
though I
that for
rarely
a
get a
really
chance
long
to
time.
throw
I
anything.
could hear him hyperventilating.
The rest of the backyard is a little bit of
Followed
grass
the
and
most
then the
tense
woods
and
behind the
terrifying
pool
few
house.
hours of my life.
It's a very private backyard.
Charles and I sat there in that
Usually.
exact
You'll
position
see
like
what I
our
mean
lives
soon.
depended on it. By
So
the
the
time
little
sun
party I
started
planned
coming
was
up,
for
I was
Saturday night.
completely exhausted.
Earlier that day,
When it was
I
finally
setting up
light enough to outside. Up to see.
It was a little cloudy out, swung the door. It was going to be a night party. That didn't really matter.
Someone to be crouching behind it.
The woods behind the pool house are pretty big. They go at least half a mile back before they reach another backyard. So there should really be no one walking through them.
And there was nothing down there either.
It's also our property.
We grabbed our trails or any reason for anyone to be back there.
I was bringing out folding tables for beer bong and refreshments
before Charles stopped in front of me.
When I heard a cough,
he just stood on the landing, staring down at the next section of
stairs.
Clearly
a slow, throat-clearing kind of cough.
Saw it immediately,
like someone trying to get
something out of
their throat.
The entire section of the staircase was gone.
It was definitely a man.
It wasn't just a few steps.
I froze.
Talking about an entire section of stairs.
I just stood there listening.
Missing. It was impossible.
The wind was barely moving leaves, so the sound carried really clearly.
An entire section
came from just inside the tree line, not deep in the woods. Close enough that whoever made it could definitely see me.
But that didn't make sense.
I slowly set the table down and looked out toward the trees.
I had seen the person up there.
Confused is one word
to
use,
crossed that gap
but
twice.
Unsettled would be a better word. No one should be in those woods.
There's absolutely no chance.
I scanned the tree line and called out, "Who is that?"
That would have been a lot louder than a few clangs here and
there. Not even any movement.
We stood on that landing for a while, trying to figure out what to do.
That almost made it
Jump
worse.
across.
If it was some random guy
walking
walking
still
through,
scary.
I should have heard him moving
Charles
away.
ended up twisting his ankle,
was just
but I
quiet.
was fine.
I got
We
that
made it the
feeling
rest
in
of
my
the way
chest,
down.
like I was being
That was
watched.
that.
Like someone was
No one
standing
waiting for
perfectly
us at the
still
bottom.
just behind a
There was
tree,
actually nothing
staring
there at
at
all,
me.
including the metal
I
steps
stood
that
there
had
for
been
maybe
removed,
20 seconds
at
just
least as far
listening.
as we could tell.
The longer I stood there,
Granted,
the more
we
uncomfortable
didn't look
I
around
felt.
too much.
Eventually, I just grabbed the rest of the stuff and brought it back inside for a bit. I didn't want to just stand out there alone anymore.
Not the light.
I called
not
my
the
good
sounds,
friend Mark to
not
come
the
over
figure I
early
saw
and help me
outside the
set
window.
up.
And
I
definitely
decided
not how
not to
someone
mention
managed
cough.
to remove an
I
entire
didn't want to
section
sound
of steel
paranoid before the
staircase
party
in the middle
even
of the night
started.
without us hearing it.
Mark came over
Every
around
time
6
I see
p.m.
Charles, this
He
is
brought some
something we still
drinks
talk
and helped
about.
me finish setting up. I kept glancing at the woods while we were out there, but everything looked normal. Nothing moved. If someone had been there earlier, they were gone. The rest of my friends started showing up around 7 to 8.
I've been doing
At the
it
peak
since
of
I
the
was in my
party, there were at
20s.
least 20
At this point,
people.
I'm in my late 30s.
Nothing insane,
so
but it was a
close to
good time.
15 years of
There
solo
was
trips
music
at this
playing,
point.
people in the pool,
I know the risks,
lights around the
which is why I
patio
carry
on.
a rifle.
With that many people
This happened
there,
about 2
the
years
woods didn't
ago
feel
in the Daniel
creepy anymore.
Boone National Forest in
A couple
eastern
times during the
Kentucky.
night, I
It's
caught
a
myself
massive
looking
stretch
toward the
of
tree line,
forest,
though.
over 700,000
I don't even know
acres.
why.
And if
I
you know
guess
where
that
to
cough
go,
just stuck
you
with
can hike
me.
for days without seeing
Things
another
started
person.
dying down around midnight.
I had a rough
And by
stretch
1
of
a.m.,
work,
the last
and
of
my
the
head
guests
wasn't in
had
a great
left.
place, and I felt
I
like I just
figured
needed
I would
a
leave
few
the
days
mess
away
to
from
clean up for
everything.
tomorrow. I was
drove
tired
out
and
on a
ready for
Thursday
bed.
morning.
Before going
a
inside,
trailhead off a forest
I did
service
one
road
last
and
slow
started
sweep of the
hiking.
backyard.
The plan was
I walked
simple.
around the pool,
3 nights in
checked
the
behind the pool
backcountry.
house.
That was pretty
looked
much
toward
it.
the woods again.
I had my tent,
Everything
my
seemed
pack,
normal.
enough food and
The
water
water
for
in the
4
pool
days.
was still,
my
the lights
308
reflected
bolt
off of
action
it.
that I always
No
bring
one
on
was out
solo
there.
trips.
I locked the
The
back
first day was
sliding door
exactly what I
and went
needed.
upstairs to brush my
I
teeth
covered
and
about
go to
7
bed.
miles before
I
finding
was
a
in bed
flat spot
scrolling on
near
my
a
phone
creek
for
bed
maybe
that
half
looked
an
like a
hour
good
before
place to
putting it
camp.
down.
I set up my
It probably
tent,
took
gathered
another
some
half
wood,
hour of
and had
laying
a
there
fire
trying to
going
sleep.
by the time the sun started
I
to
heard
go
a
down.
splash.
I cooked
Not a
some
small
food,
one.
drank a beer,
Not like
and
something
sat by the
falling
fire
in.
until it burned
It
down
sounded
to
exactly
embers.
like someone jumping
The whole
into the
time,
deep
I
end.
didn't see a single person.
My eyes opened immediately.
I fell asleep around 10.
I held still, listening.
I woke up at some point
A few
in the middle
seconds
of the
later,
night.
I heard the sound of
Not
someone
sure what woke
swimming.
me.
Literal
More
strokes
like my
through the
brain
water.
just switched on for no
My
reason.
first thought was maybe
The way it
someone
does
from the party
sometimes
stayed
when you're
behind as a
sleeping
joke,
somewhere
or they just
unfamiliar.
woke up drunkenly.
I lay there for a
But
minute
I knew
and
everyone
stared
who
at the
came.
ceiling of my tent.
No one would do something
As my
like
eyes
that.
adjusted,
I checked
I
my
noticed
phone.
something.
It was 2 a.m.
There was a faint
I got out of
orangey
bed
glow
and walked
coming
slowly
through
to the
walls of
window
my
that
tent.
overlooks the backyard.
I unzipped the
I didn't
tent
turn on
flap
any
and
lights in
looked
the
out.
room. I didn't want
Maybe
whoever was out there to
200 yards
see
away
me
through
before I
the
saw them.
trees. There was a fire.
I looked down at the pool.
Not a big one. It was
I saw
about the
there was
size
a
of a
guy
campfire.
swimming calmly from
But it
one
was
end to the
definitely
other.
there. It
At
was
first, I
flickering,
tried to
which is
recognize
how I knew
him.
it was a fire.
I knew all 20 or
I
so
watched
people
it for
who
a
came
few
over.
minutes, waiting to
This
hear
wasn't
talking
any
or
of them.
something.
I wanted
leaned
to closer
confirm
to the
it wasn't
glass.
some random
The
forest
pool
fire.
lights lit up his
But
face
after a
just
while
enough
of
for me to
looking
know
at
for
it,
sure.
I couldn't see or
I had
hear
never
anything
seen him
beyond the
before.
fire.
I yelled out the window.
Watched it a
"Who is
little
that?"
while longer.
The
just to
swimming
see if it
stopped
would grow out of
immediately.
control. But
He
it
looked
didn't.
up slowly toward my window.
Figured it was another
Even
camper
from
set
that
up
distance,
nearby that I just
I could
hadn't
tell he
noticed
wasn't
during the
confused
day.
or startled.
It wasn't
He just
impossible,
stared up at me.
especially since I had
Then
gone
he
to
started
sleep
moving toward the
relatively
shallow
early.
end. He
Figured
climbed out of
whoever
the
it
pool,
was had gone to sleep
and that's when I
and
saw
left
how
their fire
tall he
going,
was.
which is irresponsible.
He stood
but
there
not
dripping
uncommon.
wet for maybe 2 seconds.
I watched it for
just looking
about
toward
5
the
more
house.
minutes, and then
I
zipped my
expected
tent
him
back
to
up
run
and
away.
went to sleep.
Instead,
It didn't bother
he
me
started
too
walking
much.
toward the sliding door.
When I woke up the next
Not
morning,
running or
the
hesitating.
fire was the first thing I
just
thought
walking
about.
fast and
Not
direct,
because it had
like he
scared
already
me,
knew where he
but
was
because
going.
I was curious.
Almost in a march.
I wanted to see
I yelled
who else
again,
was out
"Hey,
there.
who is that?"
Maybe say hi.
He didn't
or
respond.
mostly to satisfy
I
my
heard the
curiosity.
sliding door downstairs open.
I packed up my
I know I
campsite
locked
and
it.
hiked
I'm
in the
positive
direction
I
where
did.
the fire had been.
But I heard it slide
It took
open.
me about 10 minutes to
Then it
reach
slid
the area.
shut. I ran to my
I was pretty
bedroom door
confident
and
I had the
locked
right
it.
spot.
That's when I
It
noticed
was a
how much
natural
my hands were
clearing
shaking.
that lined up with the angle
I
I'd
grabbed
been
my
looking
phone
from.
and texted Mark,
But when I
asking him
got
if he
there,
noticed anyone stay
I
behind
stopped.
before leaving.
anything. There was no
I didn't
fire
wait for a
pit,
response.
nor was there a
I
ring of
immediately called
stones or a
911.
pile of ash or
I whispered into the
ground,
phone that there was an
charred
intruder in my
wood,
house.
Nothing.
I gave
The
my
ground was
address as
completely
quietly as I
undisturbed.
could. Then I heard the
walked
footsteps.
the whole clearing, checking for any sign that someone
They
had
were
been there.
slow,
but
wet
there was no
footsteps
signs
on
of life
hardwood.
whatsoever.
I could hear the
area
slight
was
stick of his
pristine.
feet lifting off the
I
floor.
stood there for a while.
He wasn't
genuinely
rushing,
confused.
nor was he searching
I was
randomly.
certain I'd seen
he
a
was
fire.
walking directly
It had
toward
been
the
a campfire
stairs.
burning clearly
Each step on the
for at
stairs
least 5
creaked,
minutes while I
one at a
watched it.
time.
And yet the
He
ground
reached the
where
top.
it should have been.
The
looked
hallway
like no
floor
one had set
outside
foot
my
there
room
in months.
creaked. He
I
stopped
considered
right
the
outside my
possibility
bedroom
that
door.
I had the wrong spot.
I could
but
hear
there
water
wasn't another
dripping onto the
clearing
floor.
anywhere near the right
Then the
distance
handle
or
moved.
direction.
He tried opening
There
it
wasn't
once,
much I could do beyond
then
that,
twice,
though, so I
then
just
a
moved
third
on.
time, harder
I
each
still
time.
had 2 more nights planned.
When he realized
I wasn't
it was
about
locked,
to cut my trip short
was a
over
long
something
pause.
silly like that.
The
I
911
hiked for most
operator
of
was
the
saying
day.
something, but
The
I had the
terrain
phone set
changed
down.
as I moved deeper into
I could
the
barely
forest.
focus on what she was
The
saying.
creek bed fell away behind
Then
me,
the guy
and the ground
knocked on the
started
door.
climbing.
3 slow knocks.
At mid-afternoon, I was in a denser, older section of the forest where the trees were taller and the canopy was thick enough to block out the phone with the police,
and they were on their way.
It was quieter in there.
There was another long pause. I found a man's voice from the other side of the door said, very low and calm,
uneventful.
"It's me."
I doused my
Opened the
fire
door.
a little after 9 and
He
turned
sounded
in
like
for
a
the
grown
night.
man in his 30s.
I don't know what time it was.
I said,
when the
"I
sound
know that
woke
I
me
don't
up,
know you.
but it was
Leave
loud enough
now."
to pull me out of a dead sleep.
There was silence again.
I woke up to this
5
distant,
seconds,
enormous
maybe
cracking
more.
sound.
Then
like
I heard
a
him
thick
turn
branch
and
being
walk away
snapped in
quickly.
half, except it
I heard
kept
his wet
going.
footsteps go back down the hallway, then down the stairs.
It was
A
violent.
few seconds
It
later,
lasted for maybe
I heard the
3
front
or
door
4
downstairs
seconds.
open and slam shut.
At the tail end of it, there was a
I didn't
deep,
move until the
resonant
police
thud
arrived.
that I could quite
When
literally
I finally
feel
went
in the
downstairs
ground
with
beneath
them.
me.
There was a clear trail
I
of
instantly
water
knew
leading
what
from
it
the back
was.
door,
A
up the
tree had
stairs,
fallen
all the way to the
somewhere deeper
bedroom
in the
door.
woods, or at the
After
very
searching
least,
the
a
entire
very
house,
large branch.
that was the only proof
If
that
you've
he had
ever
ever
heard the
been
sound
there.
of a tree falling before,
I texted
which I
everyone
do
I
understand
invited,
is kind
asking
of a
if
rare
they stayed
occurrence.
behind or
It's
noticed
amazing
anyone else
and
stay
terrifying
behind.
at the same time.
Anyone who was still awake
It
said
didn't
no.
scare me per
The rest
se,
texted
but
back in the
deafening
morning
force
saying
and
no.
scale of it gave me this
It was
crazy
a complete
adrenaline rush.
stranger. And I have
I
a
lay there in
feeling
my
that cough
sleeping
I heard in the
bag,
woods
trying to
earlier
figure
that
out what
day
had just
was
caused
that
it.
man.
The more I thought
I don't
about
know
it,
how he got the
less
door
sense it
unlocked.
made.
Maybe he
It wasn't
slipped in during the
storming.
party when
There was
people were
barely
going
any
in and
wind.
out.
There was
As for
nothing I
motive,
could think of
I have
that
no
would have
idea.
brought a tree down on a
I just
night
know
like
that if I
this.
didn't wake up when
There
I
was
did,
also nothing I could
or
do.
if I opened that
I
bedroom
couldn't fall
door,
asleep at that point
I don't know
either.
what he would have done.
My heart was still racing, and the adrenaline had me awake, so I just kind of closed my eyes and waited for it to wear off. But then, not 10 minutes later, it happened again. Only this time, it was much louder. That same gruesome crackling sound, followed by a crash of branches
The middle
and a
sibling
deafening
of
thud.
three. I have
This
two
one was
brothers.
close.
They both grew up as
Not
scouts.
right on top of me, but
my older
close enough
brother
that
made
the
it to
sound was
Eagle
almost
Scout.
disorienting.
My little brother
And he
quit
came
some
from a
time in Boy
completely
Scouts.
different direction than the
But
first
for whatever
one.
reason, my
The
parents
first tree
never
had
forced
fallen
me to
somewhere
become a
to the
scout when
south.
I was a
The
kid.
second one was to
Which
my
is weird,
northwest.
because I remember always
I sat
being
up
really jealous of
immediately.
my older brother
Now I
Scott
was
when my
actually
mom would bring me
scared.
along to the
Two
Pinewood
trees
Derby
falling on the
contests
same night in
and
two
celebrations
different parts
and
of the
such.
forest with no
But the
wind
thing that
and
I
no
was always the
storm.
most jealous
That
that I
was
missed out on
inconceivable.
were the campouts.
I kept trying to come
When
up
the
with an
troops would
explanation
go out
that
into
made
the wilderness
sense.
and camp
The
out
most
for a whole
logical
weekend.
thought was that the
I went
first one
along
had
for the
caused some
drive
kind of
once or
chain
twice,
reaction,
and I saw
but
them
that
all setting
hypothesis
up,
didn't
doing
account for the
campfires
fact
and
that the trees
such,
fell in
but
completely
being
different
younger
parts of
and
the
also
forest.
not part of the troop,
Whatever brought down
I
the
don't think
first
I was
tree
allowed
had
to
nothing
stay.
to do with the second
So
one.
I'd go home with my
They were
parents.
two different events.
My
That
jealousy
was
of
even
these
more
campouts was
inconceivable.
mainly towards my older
I was
brother
sitting there
because I was
processing
growing
all
up
this
watching him
when I
prepare for
heard
these
something
camping
new.
trips.
Something that
Before
took my
every
fear from a
trip,
medium
he'd
5
be given a
to
tent to take
resounding
home
10.
and practice setting up in the
It was this
backyard.
low and continuous
Even though I was
rumbling
only
sound
like
that I can
7
only
or 8,
describe as a
I
cross
remember
between a
so
groan
clearly
and a
how
growl,
eager I was
like a
when I
person
hatched the
clearing
idea
their
to do a
throat,
little
except
backyard
it didn't
camping.
stop.
Basically,
an
we
animal
set up
sound
the
I
tent in the
recognized.
backyard
I've
and
heard
sleep in it
bears, I've heard
overnight.
elk,
To my
I've heard
little
bobcats.
mind, that was the most
This wasn't any
exciting
of
idea
those.
ever.
It sounded
Also,
like something
our
was
backyard
making the
wasn't
noise
really
on
a traditional
purpose.
backyard.
It went on for what felt
Our
like
childhood
a full
house
minute
was in a
without
very
any break
spacious
or
neighborhood
variation.
where yards just kind of
I
all
did the
meshed
only thing I
together,
could think to
and there
do.
weren't many
I
fences.
grabbed my rifle,
More so
chambered
large
around
patches
as
of
quietly
trees
as I
and
could,
brush separating
aimed it at
yards,
the tent
which
flap.
added to the camping feel.
At that point, I
Our
was
backyard
full-on
was also
panicking.
huge, and
Must
we had
have
a
sat
fire
like that
pit,
for 20
so our
minutes.
parents played along and
sound
set up the
eventually
fire
tapered
pit in our
off.
backyard for
It
us
didn't
so we
stop
could get the full
abruptly. It
camping
kind of faded
experience.
out, like whatever was
My little
making it
brother
move
roasted
further
marshmallows
away.
with us
And
too.
just like that,
But our
the
parents
forest
weren't going to
was
let him
quiet
sleep
again.
in the tent. He was
I didn't
only
sleep
like
the
4
rest
at
of
the
the
time,
night.
and it wasn't
I
a
don't
good
think I
idea.
would have been able to
And no,
if I
he wasn't a
tried.
scout yet, obviously.
It was
He
the worst
4.
night of my life.
After it got a little
As soon
late,
as I saw
our parents
daylight,
brought
I
him
got
in
out of
and
the
told
tent.
us it was time to start
Packed
getting
up
ready
as
for
quickly
sleep.
as possible.
At
Still
this time in my
spooked and
life,
extremely
the Game
unsettled
Boy SP
despite
was the
being able to see.
handheld console.
Once everything
So
was in
after
my
getting
pack,
into our sleeping
I started
bags,
walking in the direction
Scott and
of
I
the
whipped
second
out our
tree,
Game Boys
the
and
louder
played our
and
respective
closer one.
games.
I needed to
I was
see
playing
it,
Super
if only
Mario
to
Bros.
confirm
2,
that I hadn't
a game
imagined
I
the
was
whole thing.
obsessed with, yet
I
could
had
never
my
beat
rifle
as a
ready in
child.
my hands.
After getting
So
a
I
little
found
more
the tree
tired,
after
though,
about 10
I
minutes.
turned to my side
The
and
thing
tried
was
to
massive,
sleep.
and its trunk was
I
lying
remember
at an
not
angle
being able
across a shallow slope.
Like I was tired,
branches
but
and
restless.
debris were scattered all
Maybe
around
because
it.
I'd never slept
So
in
it
a
was
sleeping
real.
bag before.
I really
quite
couldn't believe
frankly,
it.
it wasn't
I'd
comfortable.
been trying to convince myself
a
I
lot
just
of time
imagined
passed,
everything
and
from
I
the
mean
night
a
before.
lot, but
There
then I
it
finally
was.
nodded off.
I needed to keep
And
investigating.
then I woke up
I wouldn't have been
probably
satisfied
confused
leaving
about where I
without
was
knowing
at
what had
first,
caused the fall.
not recognizing
I
my
walked over the
surroundings.
stump, which was about 3 feet
I remember
high.
looking around the dark tent,
The wood where it had
and then
broken
noticing
was pale
something.
and fresh, but the
Scott
break
was
wasn't
gone.
clean.
His
It wasn't
sleeping
the
bag
kind of
was
jagged,
empty.
splintered
The
fracture
tent
you
zipper
get
was
from
closed,
wind stress
though.
or root
He
failure.
must have went inside because
The
he
wood
couldn't
around the
sleep.
break point had been torn
I was
apart in
suddenly
a way
too
that I
scared
had
to
never
leave the
seen
tent
before.
alone. So I
Parts of
got
the
up
stump
and
looked like
unzipped
they'd
the
been
tent.
gouged.
But before
I really don't
crawling
know how
out,
else to
I did
describe
a
it.
little innocent
There
peek
were long,
outside, simply
irregular
because I was
grooves
too
running
scared to
through the
run
wood
out
at
through the
different
backyard
angles.
without checking
It
if
looked
the
like
coast
some
was
of them
clear.
were up to an inch deep.
But
at
it was
least.
not.
The
I
wood
saw someone
genuinely
sitting
looked
by
like
the
it
fire
had been
pit in
stripped and
darkness.
chewed rather than cut or snapped.
It wasn't
The more I
Scott.
looked, the more
He
I
was a grown
noticed.
man.
Some of the bark around the base had been peeled away.
Surely
he
had to have seen me.
The exposed wood underneath had that same
tent back up and crawled back into my
look.
sleeping bag.
I can't pretend I knew what I was
was
looking
any
at
form of
because I
protection.
I'd
I
seen
stayed
beaver damage
completely
before,
still
and this
inside
was
my
not
sleeping
that.
bag.
Beavers leave
The tent
clean
was almost
cuts.
completely dark.
I'd seen
Just
woodpecker
a faint
damage,
gray
and
from
this
the
wasn't
moonlight
that
coming
either.
through the fabric.
This was
I don't know what was going
aggressive,
through my mind at
and
that
covered
point,
way too much
but I do
surface
know
area
that I
be
wanted to
any
call
animal I
out
could
Dad,
think of.
just hoping that it was my
The
dad.
tree hadn't fallen
But I
because
knew
it was
it
dead
wasn't.
or because the wind
I
knocked
gotta
it
look at
over.
the man, even
Something
just
had worked on that
briefly.
trunk until
If it were
came
my
down.
dad, he'd have
Suddenly,
acknowledged me
I felt
poking
this
my head
really
out of the
nasty
tent.
feeling in my gut,
And that's when I heard the
I
chair by
needed
the
to
fire
leave.
pit shift. I
I
was
stopped
shitting
examining
bricks,
the tree
hoping the man
and
didn't
started
get up.
backing away.
And if he did,
But as I was
then
turning
he wasn't
to
coming
leave,
towards the
something
tent.
near one of the tree branches
But
caught my
I could
eye.
see a shadow now on the
There
other
was a
side
small
of the tent,
cluster of
blocking some of
items
the
sitting on
moonlight.
the ground. If it
He was
weren't
right
for the fact that
outside.
they looked man-made,
Somehow, I thought if I didn't
bothered
move,
checking them
maybe
out.
he would think the tent was empty.
As soon as I saw what they were,
Then I heard the
lost
zipper
my shit.
very slowly
It was a
dragging
blue bandana
downward.
and a carabiner.
It only moved a
and they
few
were both
inches.
my items.
The opening was small, but it was enough.
I instantly
couldn't help
started
it.
digging through my
I
pack.
turned my head
and
just
confirmed
slightly.
Those two items
There's
were
a small
missing.
gap at the bottom of
In that
most
moment,
tents
I
where the
grabbed my
zipper doesn't
stuff,
fully
shoved
seal.
it in my backpack,
I had never
and ran.
noticed it before that night.
I didn't know if running was
An
the right
eye was
decision.
pressed against
that
that
would have
gap.
attracted attention
Just
to
one
me,
eye,
but I
looking
did
directly
anyway.
at me.
I just needed to get out of those woods.
I could see the white
I
of
got
it in
tired
the dark.
after a while.
I
under the
couldn't
weight
even
of all my
scream
stuff,
at first,
but I moved
not
as
for a few
fast as I
seconds at
could.
least, because I was
The hike back
paralyzed.
took me most of
Then
the day.
the eye squinted
the entire
a bit,
time
as if
I
the
felt
person
like I
was
was being
smiling a
stalked
smile
or
that I couldn't
watched.
see.
I felt like
The zipper
something was
moved
going to
another
jump out
inch,
from somewhere any
and that's when I
second.
finally screamed.
I kept my rifle in my
I
hands
scrambled
the entire
backwards,
time.
kicking out of my
I made it back
sleeping
to my
bag,
car
knocking
around
into the
3 in
tent
afternoon.
poles.
I drove
heard
out of there so
footsteps
fast,
immediately take off
despite
through
my
the yard.
exhaustion.
Our back
First
porch
thing I
light
did when I
flipped
got to
on,
a safe
which I could
distance
see
away
through the
was
tent
call the
fabric.
police.
My dad burst
I don't
out the
think they
back
took me
door
very
yelling.
seriously, but
I could hear
didn't
him
care.
running across
I
the
also
grass.
knew there probably
By
wasn't
the time
much
he
they could
reached the
do,
fire pit
but I
area,
didn't care about
whoever
that
it
either.
was already
It was
gone.
pretty messed up for days
My parents
afterward.
called the police, of
None of it
course.
made any
I
sense
don't remember
whatsoever.
what happened after my
What I
parents
couldn't get
talked to
over
the
was
cops.
the fact that my stuff
I
had
know
been
I went to my
rummaged
parents'
through.
room with my mom.
Something had either
and eventually
stalked me
the
through
police
the
did their
woods
thing,
or knew where I
likely
was the
searching the
entire
immediate
time.
area.
That
It was an
unexplainable
absolute
fire from the
nightmare.
first night must have had
I
something
slept
to
in
do
my
with
parents'
it.
bed that
There's no
night.
way that
I
was
was
a
emotionally
coincidence.
scarred for a while.
Those trees.
Just
Still
as
have
things
no
might have been going
explanation
back
for
to
what could have
normal.
cut them down.
I think it was a few weeks
Genuinely
to a
don't
month
think it was
later.
anything human.
This part
As
is
for
what really
animal it
hammers
could
the
have
nail
been,
in the
I
coffin
have
for
no
this
idea.
experience being something I can
I
never
still go
forget.
camping, believe it or not.
I went to
This
Catholic
is something
school,
that I think will
and during
hang over
lunch
me
we'd have a
forever.
short recess in the schoolyard, which was all concrete. The far end of the schoolyard was fenced off and looked towards the street. We were playing some game, maybe red light, green light or something. This part I genuinely don't remember. All I know is I had to run to the fence to be considered safe from whatever the threat in the game was. And while I was on the fence, next to some other kids, mind
stories
you,
I've been sitting
a man
on
says
for a
hey
really
from the
long
other side of
time.
the fence.
It happened back when I was maybe 25
and it's a man
or
asking me for
26,
directions
way
to some
before I
place
met
I
my
don't even
wife,
remember.
way before we
I
had
said I don't
kids.
know. We weren't
was a
even supposed to
completely
talk to
different person
strangers
back
outside
then.
of the schoolyard.
Not in a bad way.
Then he said,
just in the sense
"Your
that I had
name's
the kind of
Chris,
free
right?"
time and risk tolerance that I
That
genuinely
moment is
can't relate to
implanted in my
anymore.
brain. His
I used
voice,
to do these solo
the look on his
backpacking
face,
trips a few
my
times
heart
a year,
dropping.
usually
I
somewhere
said
in the
no,
Appalachians.
lying to him.
I
He
drive
then
out to
smiled
some
and
remote
said,
trailhead,
"You don't remember me,
hiking
do you?"
deep into the backcountry.
And at this point,
way
I
off
ran
the
towards
trail,
one of the recess
spend a few
chaperones
days
and pointed
completely
over
off
at the
grid.
fence.
No
But the man
cell
was
service,
gone.
no other people.
One of the kids
nothing.
next to me told me he
I
saw the
loved
man
it.
too.
My
The
friends
recess
thought I
ladies
was
called the
insane,
recess
and
in
honestly,
short.
I kind of
The
was.
school called my parents.
This particular
I was
trip
sure
was
it was
in the
that man
Cherokee
from the
National
backyard.
Forest, and it
I was
changed
taken
how I
home
see
early that
backpacking
day.
forever.
I know my parents were
I had
so
been out there
sick
for
and
2
worried
days,
after
and
this.
everything had been
It was
going
a hellish
perfectly.
month.
The weather
We
had
lived
been
in
great,
such a nice
the trail
area
was
too,
quiet, and I
to
hadn't
almost
seen
be
another
chased out of the
person since
neighborhood
the
because
first
of
morning.
this was just a
That
nightmare.
changed pretty quickly, though.
After months of me
On the
being under
afternoon
tight
of the
supervision
second
from my
day,
parents,
I noticed dark
things
storm
went back to
clouds
normal.
building up to the west.
I can't express enough, though,
I wasn't too worried
how much
at
it
first.
still pains
I'd
me in my
hiked through
chest,
rain plenty of
thinking about how
times,
I
and it
could
was
be
never a
dead
big
today
deal.
if that man had
But
somehow
within about an
successfully
hour,
taken me.
I realized it
And
wasn't
makes
going
me
to be a
sick,
passing
wondering
shower.
if he was ever
The
successful
wind
in
picked
whatever
up
he was
hard,
trying to
and
do.
The temperature dropped
someone
fast
else.
enough that I actually stopped to put on another layer. By the time the rain started, I was already looking for a spot to hunker down. The problem was that I was in a pretty
I
exposed
grew up in
section
Salem,
of the trail.
Oregon, a
As I
quaint little
predicted,
small town.
It wasn't a light
place.
rain.
I moved out when I was
windy to
21,
full-on
buying my
downpour
first
in
house
minutes.
about 50 miles
When
out
it was
from
bending
Salem.
smaller trees
I
sideways.
furnished my first
and I
house
could
with
hear
a mix of
branches
stuff from my
cracking and falling
parents,
in the canopy
their
above
friends,
me.
and a bunch of stuff
I
off
started
online
getting
marketplaces
genuinely
and
concerned
apps.
about my safety.
I was driving a Ford
Lightning was
Raptor
striking
at the
pretty
time,
close
so
by.
lugging stuff
I was
around
hiking
was
at
thankfully
elevation
very
with a
easy.
metal-framed pack on my
On
back.
Facebook Marketplace
Not
one day,
ideal.
I found a
I kept
listing
pushing
selling a bunch
forward,
of good-looking
completely
stuff.
soaked at that
The
point.
ones in the listing that
I was
caught my
scanning
eye
the woods
were
on
this
either side of the
cream-colored
trail for
sectional
anything that
couch
could
that
pass
looked
as shelter.
pristine, and this Cannondale brand mountain bike.
I actually saw a structure.
I didn't have a
through
bike
the trees off to my left,
and where my house is,
it was
having
small
one is
and
perfect
dark
for
and
exercise.
partially hidden by the forest.
The other stuff on the listing didn't really
man-made.
interest me.
As
The
I got
listing
closer,
itself was just
I
sort of a
realized it was
digital
tiny
yard sale.
one-story cabin.
I contacted the
They
seller.
looked
and we
extremely
did a little
old,
typical
like
back
it could
and
have been a
forth.
hunting cabin or a
He was pretty
homesteader
short and
shelter
straight
from
to the point
decades
with his
ago.
answers, and
There was a
surprisingly
single
easy to
window on the side
negotiate.
I was approaching.
He agreed
I
to a
can't
slightly
overstate
lower
how
price,
relieved I
and he
was.
said I could come pick the
practically
stuff up
sprinted
later
over
that
to the
night.
thing and pushed the door
Days are
open.
long in Oregon in the summer.
Inside, it was
so
dim,
I'd still be
but
showing
dry.
up with some sunlight.
There wasn't much in there.
I banked on having
Just
to do a
chair,
couple
small
trips to
table,
transport the
and what
sectional
looked like a
couch
cot
due to
frame
its
pushed against
size.
the far wall.
I set out on my
There
way
was
to
a
the
stone
house.
fireplace on the right
address
side
was
that
right
was
on the
clogged with
coast.
old ash and debris.
I checked the satellite view
place
on the map
honestly
just to
smelled
confirm
really
it was
bad,
bringing me to a
but
house.
I didn't
and
care
it
about
was.
anything other than
Based on the
stripping
map,
out of my soaked
there was a
clothes
long
and laying
trail
down.
or driveway that veered
There
off
wasn't
the
a couch
road
or anything
towards a
in there,
huge open
so I
property
literally just
with a
picked a spot
big-looking
on the
house.
floor and lied
And
down.
then in the backyard was a
I
literal
was in
drop-off to
survival
the
mode
ocean.
at that point, not
All I could
exploration
think
mode.
was, no wonder these
All I
people
cared
were
about
selling all
was
this
that I was
stuff
out
for
of
so
the
cheap.
storm.
With that kind
It
of
wasn't
money,
until
I
I'd
wondered
been
why they
inside
weren't
for
just
maybe
giving it
10
away.
or 15 minutes
I headed
that I
out that
started
way.
actually looking
It didn't take
around.
long to get there.
With the
I
storm
could tell the
raging
closer I
outside,
got to the
there
shore,
wasn't much else
the
to
nicer
do
the
besides
properties
flick
got.
on a flashlight and
then I
snoop.
turned onto the
So
last
that's exactly
road
what
before
I
I'd be
did.
turning onto the driveway
There
for
was
the
more
house.
stuff in that cabin
This
than I
road
had
was
initially
long.
realized.
It was lined
For
with woods on
starters,
each side.
there was a sleeping
and then I
bag rolled
passed
up
the
in the
occasional
corner near the
driveway
cot
leading
frame.
to probably a
It didn't
cliffside
look
mansion.
ancient like the rest of the place.
Eventually,
which
I made it
confused
to
me.
the turnoff.
There were also
It was
a
a
couple
tree-lined
of
dirt
cans and
road,
water jugs
or
on
the
the
driveway,
table,
I guess you
which
would
made
call
me
it.
think someone had been using
About
the
10
place as a
seconds
base
in of
camp
driving
of
down this
sorts.
driveway,
Maybe another
it opened to this
backpacker or
massive
a hunter.
clearing. The
It
driveway
wasn't
went on this
unusual to
slight
find stuff
incline
like that
leading
in
to the
remote
house at the top
cabins.
of this hill.
But the more I looked around,
I pulled up
the
next
more
to this
things
older
started bothering
sedan.
me.
It was like a
There were marks
Mercury
on the wall
Sable
near
or
the door.
something.
At first,
it did
I
not
thought they were
match
just
the house
damage
at
from
all.
age or weather.
Like this house
But when
looked
I
like
got
it belonged
closer
to a
inspect them,
millionaire.
I could
and
see
this
there
car
were
was a piece of
scratches.
shit.
There were dozens
Went up
of
to the
them,
front door,
some
ready to
shallow
ring the
and some
bell.
deeper.
But there was a yellow
There was no
post-it note on
pattern
the front
or
door,
order to the marks.
and it said on
At
it,
least not what I
"Doorbell
could see.
broken. Please use
I
back
stepped
door."
back and looked at the
Weird,
door
because
itself.
I could have just knocked.
The handle was a
But I
simple
obeyed.
latch, which wasn't
As I
unusual.
walked down the front porch,
Despite the storm,
I messaged the guy
I
on
opened the door
Messenger
just
that
to
I
get a look at
arrived
the
and was going
mechanism.
around back.
There was a metal
Walked
bracket
around
on
the side of
outside
the house,
frame,
looking at
which
each
looked like
window
it was
as I
designed to
passed.
hold a padlock.
But the blinds all seemed to be
The bracket was
closed.
on the outside.
I got to the backyard.
There was no corresponding
It was
latch on the
crazy.
inside.
It actually
That meant
overlooked the
door could only
Pacific
be locked
Ocean.
from the outside.
I walked up the back deck to
Things
go
only
knock on the
got
back
stranger.
door.
I
It was
shut
a
the
sliding
door and
glass
started
door.
looking around the cabin.
There was some kind of sliding
Only
blind
thing
that
I
was
hadn't
closed,
checked out yet
so I
was
couldn't
the
see
window.
inside.
So I walked over to
I
it.
knocked on the glass.
The glass was still
stood there for a
perfectly
minute,
intact,
then knocked
which
again.
surprised me given the
I
apparent
looked down
age
at my
of the
phone to
place.
see if he answered or
But then I
read my
noticed
message.
why.
Neither.
There were screws
I
drilled
went to
into
go
the
sit
window
on one of the
frame,
chairs on the
one
deck
in
and
each
spun
corner,
it around
securing
to
it
stare at the
shut.
sunset
Those
and
had
the view
also
of the
been driven in
Pacific.
from outside.
It was a
And around the
surreal
edges
view.
of the frame on the
I
inside.
kept checking my
there were more
messenger app and
scratches,
following up with the
deep
guy,
ones.
but he wasn't answering.
These were unmistakable.
I triple checked
They
that
honestly
I had the
looked
right
like someone had
address.
tried to
and
pry
I
the
did.
window open with their
Plus,
bare
the note on the
hands.
front door
All
confirmed
of it
that.
hit me at once.
I decided if he
Someone
was in
had
the
been kept
shower
in this
or
cabin,
occupied or something,
trapped,
I'd at least go
as in
walk
kept
over to the
against their
cliffside and
will.
get a picture of the view.
I should have left
I
right
did
then.
just that.
I did consider
I walked
that.
down the deck.
There was a
then
good
down
part
the
of me
seemingly
that felt
freshly
like
cut
whatever had
grass
gone
to the
on in that
cliffside.
cabin was well in the past.
Taking in the view,
Everything
I
in the cabin
daydreamed
looked
about
really
one day
old.
being able to afford
Even
a
the
place
sleeping
like
bag,
this.
which did look on the
I
newer
started
side,
walking back up to the
admittedly,
house.
was rigid
It
and
stopped
dusty.
maybe 3 steps
Plus,
in.
the last
and
thing I
realized
wanted to do
every
was go
single
back out in
window
that
now
storm
had their
again.
blinds open,
So I stayed.
and there was a person standing at
I'm
each
not
window,
sure how much time passed.
standing as
Maybe an
still
hour,
as
maybe more.
statues.
The storm
I didn't know
wasn't
if what
letting
I was
up at
looking
all.
at was some
If
kind of prank
anything,
or not.
It had gotten worse.
I walked a little closer.
The rain
the
on the
moment I
roof
said
was so
nope,
loud
I've
that
seen
it was
enough.
hard to hear much of
was when I
anything
realized
else.
every single face
That's
was
probably
smiling.
why it took me so long to notice.
I
the
honestly
other
couldn't
sounds.
tell if they were mannequins
Picked
or
up
not.
on the scratching
That's how
or
still they were.
scraping noises from outside.
I decided I just
Somewhere
needed to
along
get
the
to the
left wall
car.
of the cabin.
I did a light jog around the
first,
side
I
of the
thought it
house
was a
again.
branch.
And
I
that
couldn't
side
remember
window
if
that
there
I
had
mentioned
been
that also had
branches
its
low enough
blind
to
shut
touch the
before
exterior of
was
the
now
cabin.
too lifted.
As I was thinking
There was someone
about
at this window
I
as
heard
well.
two heavy thumps on the porch.
I didn't know what was going on here, but I had to
honestly
get
didn't
out.
sound like storm
As I got to the
sounds.
front, I got back
This
in my
time
car.
I stood up.
And I didn't even look
I did
at the
that
front
thing where you
windows.
freeze in
I
place
didn't
and try
even
to
want to know
focus
if there
by
were people
staring
at
at a
these
random
windows
spot
too.
on the wall.
I reversed all the
I was
way down
trying
the
to listen,
driveway.
but if
and
someone was
regrettably,
moving out there,
I did at
it
one
would have
point
been
take a
impossible to
curious
hear
look
over the
ahead of
storm.
the house.
I
The front
started
door
getting
was
paranoid
open.
that those
There
sounds
was
I
a
heard
person
were just a
standing
few
on the
of
front
many,
porch with
and
his
the
hands
rest
in his
had been
pockets,
drowned out by
watching
the
me
rain.
drive away.
My
It
eyes
didn't
drifted
matter.
over to the
Everything
window.
about this was a red flag.
I couldn't bring myself
I was
to look
out of there
through.
in a minute
If
and down the
someone really
road.
was out there,
The guy
they'd
never
probably
opened
be
or
looking
responded
through
to
it.
my message still.
I stayed in that
I
position.
decided
for
to
what
turn
felt
into the
like
closest
forever.
neighbor's house driveway
After a while,
and knock on the
I
door.
started to relax a bit.
They
thinking
answered,
I'd just been hearing
and
a
I
storm,
explained the
or
bizarre
at the
and
very worst,
disturbing
an animal
situation I
poking
just
around the
encountered,
cabin.
and I pressed them
Almost
about
ready to
any
forget
info
about
on their
everything
neighbor.
when I heard
The man
something
who
that sent me
answered,
over the
who I'll
edge.
call Tom, was shocked. because he's close friends with the guy next door.
Like someone
he said he's hardly ever in town, and that he wouldn't set up some kind of elaborate prank like that.
And the latch rattled.
He called his neighbor on the spot, and the guy picked up.
My heart rate
basically, the conversation went as follows from what I remember. Hey,
why would someone be outside
Tom next door
like this?
Listen, I got someone at my front door right now saying you invited it to your house to buy stuff, but you pulled some kind of scary prank on him with the windows and stuff.
And then I thought about what I'd found.
There was a pause before the Tom guy said,
it occurred to me that
what are you talking
whoever
about?
was out there didn't
From
want
here,
to come inside.
I stepped in and explained everything from the Facebook ad to my arrival there to the people at the windows.
I don't know if that was the right
He now
conclusion
sounded very
or if my mind
concerned
was just spiraling.
because he said he wasn't
I
homeless.
decided I was leaving right then.
I did my best to
I didn't
describe
care about
every
the story.
detail,
I
including
started
what the
moving
man on the
things
front
into my
porch
backpack
looked
as
like,
fast as I could.
as well as the sketchy car.
I had the sickening feeling.
He asked me to
that
take his
something really
number
bad
so he
was
could
about to
contact me after the
And I
police
was right.
investigated.
The next few
After
moments
that,
were a blur.
I left. I went home.
Maybe 30
I really
seconds
didn't
from
have it in
walking
me
out
to
the
commit
door.
2 hours
I heard
to
the
some
sound of
police
glass
investigation
shattering
that
behind
didn't
me.
concern me, truth be
I
told.
spun around just in
But I
time
did
to
hear
see
from the
something
guy
come
later
through the
that
window.
night.
That was
He
all I
called
could
me
see.
and asked
before
me
the
to
whole
send him
room
the
erupted
Facebook
in
listings,
flames.
but it was
The flames
removed.
spread so fast that I
I
couldn't
did send him
even
the
process
details
what was
of the
happening.
profile that I was messaging
One
on the
second I was
Messenger app.
standing in a dark room.
It was now
and the
a
next
blank
second the
profile.
walls were on fire.
He thanked me for
The
that
heat
and
hit
would give
me
it
like
to
a
the police
physical
anyway.
wall, and the door wouldn't
When I asked him what
budge.
the cops
It was
found,
jammed from the
he
outside.
told me they found nothing
I
stolen
slammed
as
into
far
it
as
with
he
all
knew
my
at that
might,
time.
and it gave.
That all the
It
blinds
collapsed
were
off
once
its
again
hinges,
closed,
and me with it.
There was no sedan in the
I scrambled
driveway.
to get back on my feet.
That all
and I
three
just
doors in the
ran.
house were
I
unlocked.
couldn't even see.
Now the
I was
scary
just
part for
running
me
wildly
is
through
the way they
woods
were
and
all
rain,
standing at
trying
the
to put
windows,
as much
smiling,
distance
trying
between
to scare
myself
me.
and that cabin.
And I have to wonder,
Before I could get a safe
what use
distance
was I going
away,
to be
I
of
felt
to
something
them?
tackle me from
Why
behind.
did they want me in the
I was
backyard?
back on the ground.
Scary thoughts,
There was a
honestly.
person on top of me.
I'm just glad
Suddenly
I
was
left when I
fighting for my
did.
life. I clawed and kicked and screamed, but this guy wouldn't get off me. He was yelling too, and he kept trying to get me in a chokehold. He was gouging at my
I
eyes
lived with
and
my
pulling
parents
my
in
hair,
Murraysville,
and I started to feel
Pennsylvania.
dizzy.
My
But I
parents were
managed to
gone
push
one
him off.
weekend, so I decided
I
I was
got
going to
back
have
up
a
and
bunch of
kept
people
running.
over in the
And
backyard.
whoever just
for
tried to
mini
kill
pool
me was
party.
screaming like a
We have a
maniac.
pool house and an in-ground
Looked
pool
back
back
twice.
there. It's perfect for parties.
I couldn't see my
even
attacker,
though I rarely
but
get
I
a
did
chance
see
to
the
throw
cabin,
anything.
which was fully engulfed
The
in
rest of the
flames.
backyard is a little bit of
think the
grass
picture of
and
that
then the woods
fireball
behind the
is
pool
burned
house.
into my brain
It's a
forever.
very private
The
backyard.
second time I looked
Usually,
back, the glow was
you'll see what
smaller,
I mean
but still
soon.
visible through the woods.
So the little
But I just
party I
kept
planned
running.
was for Saturday
For
night.
all I knew, I was being
Earlier
chased.
that day, I was setting
I
up
didn't
outside.
stop until my legs
It
gave
was a
out.
little cloudy out,
I
but
found
since it was going to be a night
couple of
party,
large
that didn't
trees
really
had fallen
matter.
against each other.
The woods
There was a
behind the
narrow
pool
gap
house are
underneath
pretty
that
big.
blocked most of the
They
rain.
go at least half a mile
crawled
back
under there
before they
and just
reach another
collapsed.
backyard.
I couldn't feel
So
my
there should
body.
really be
I
no
don't know
one
if it was
walking
the fire,
through them.
the rain, or
It's
the
also our
attack.
property.
Maybe all three.
There are no trails
And I was
or any
completely
reason for
numb.
anyone to be back there.
All I did
I
was
was
sit in
bringing
that
out
crouched
folding
position
tables for
and try
beer
to
pong
keep
and
breathing.
refreshments and
I don't know how
setting them
many
up.
hours passed under
When I heard a
those
cough
trees,
come from
but
the
time
woods.
lost all meaning.
It was
Eventually,
clearly a
I
slow,
felt some feelings start to
throat-clearing kind
re-enter
of
my
cough,
body, and I
like
told
someone
myself
trying to
it
get
was
something
move
out of
or
their
die.
throat.
Whoever was
It was
out there was
definitely
probably
a man.
looking for me, and
I
it couldn't have
froze
been
with
that
the
far
table
away.
still in my hands.
So I got up and
I
started
just stood
moving
there
through the
listening.
woods. I
The
didn't know
wind
where
was
the trail
barely moving
was,
the
but
leaves,
I didn't really care.
so the sound
I
carried
honestly
really
can't tell you
clearly.
how I survived that
It came
night,
from
but
just
I did.
inside the tree line,
I stumbled
not
onto
deep
a
in the
random
woods.
trail and just
Close
followed
enough
it.
that whoever made it
I
could
was
definitely
soaked
see
and probably
me.
bleeding from
I
multiple
slowly
places,
set the table
but I
down
just kept
and looked
trudging
out
on.
toward the trees.
Eventually,
Confused
the rain
is
subsided
one word
a
to
bit,
use,
at least
but
enough for me to
unsettled would
figure
be a
out
better
where I
one.
was.
No one
I made
should
it
be
to
in
some
those
random
woods
trailhead.
ever.
By that
I scanned the
point,
tree
storm
line
had
and called
passed.
out, "Who is that?"
I don't remember
There
too
was no
much
answer.
after. All I
Not even
remember
any
is that the
movement.
first person I saw
No
drove me
footsteps
to
or
a
branches
hospital.
snapping or
I
anything.
had second-degree
That
burns
almost
on my
made
left
it worse.
forearm and the back of my
If
neck.
it was some random
Doctors
guy
told me I
walking
was
through,
lucky I hadn't
I should have
inhaled
heard
more
him
smoke
moving
than I
away.
did.
But it was
None
just
of it was
quiet.
permanent, but it hurt
I
like
got
hell
that
for
feeling
a
in
long
my
time
chest, like I
afterwards.
was being watched.
By the time
Like
I was
someone was
healed and
standing
safe
perfectly
at home,
still,
I told
just behind
myself
a
I
tree,
would never camp
staring
or hike
at me.
alone again.
I stood there for
Someone
maybe
had
20
intentionally
seconds
set
just
that cabin on
listening.
fire to
The
kill
longer
me.
I stood
That's the
there,
only
the more
thing that makes
uncomfortable
any
I
sense.
felt.
It was pouring
Eventually,
rain.
I just grabbed the rest of the stuff and brought
was
back
metal.
inside for a bit.
There's no way
I didn't want to just stand out there alone
that
anymore.
fast unless the wood had
I
been
called my
treated
good
with
friend
something
Mark to come
beforehand.
over early and help me set up.
I gave the police everything.
I decided not to
or as
mention
much
the
as I
cough.
could.
I didn't want to sound
really
paranoid
do
before the
anything.
party even
And
started.
To be fair, I wasn't in a charted
Mark
part
came
of the
over
woods,
around 6 p.m.
so it would have been silly
He
to
brought
hound
some
them.
drinks and helped me finish
The
setting
only
up.
thing I don't understand
I kept
is the
glancing at
timing
the
of
woods while we
everything.
were out there.
My wife would probably
Everything
tell
looked
you I
normal.
stopped doing solo
Nothing
trips
moved.
because I grew up and got
someone
more
had been there
responsible,
earlier,
and she's
they
not
were gone.
entirely wrong.
The rest
But
of
I
my friends
honestly
started
never told
showing
her
up
about
around
this
7 to
incident.
8.
And
At
I
the
know
peak of
I'll
the
never go
party, there were at
backcountry
least
trekking
20
again
people.
alone.
Nothing insane, but it was a good time. There was music playing, people in the pool, lights around the patio on. With that many people there, the woods didn't feel creepy anymore.
My
A
name
couple
is
times
James.
during the night,
This
I caught
happened
myself
maybe
looking
7
toward the
or
tree
8
line,
years
though.
ago, back when I was
I
in
don't
my
even know
early
why.
20s and still
I
doing
guess
stuff
that
that I
cough just
probably
stuck with
shouldn't have
me.
been doing.
Things started dying down around midnight.
Who was kind of notorious.
By 1 a.m., the last of the guests had left.
To explore.
I figured I would leave the mess to clean up for tomorrow. I was tired and ready for bed.
You weren't supposed to be.
Before going inside,
probably already been there.
One last slow sweep of the backyard. I walked around the
weird
pool,
amount of time on
behind the
Google
pool
Earth
house,
and these niche
looked toward the woods again.
Forums. And he'd always be hitting the group chat with screenshots of random places he wanted to check out.
The lights reflected off of it.
Most of us would entertain his ideas, but never actually
locked the back sliding door.
I was
upstairs
usually
to brush my
exception.
teeth and go to bed.
Charles and I had been friends
since high
since high
school,
scrolling
on my phone.
And I think the reason we got along so well was that we had similar thresholds.
It probably
for risk.
took another half hour.
While
of
most of our
there
friends
trying
would
to
hear his
sleep.
pitches and go,
I heard a
that sounds
splash.
insane. I'd hear
not
them
a small
go,
one.
When are we going?
Not like something falling.
It was
in.
a dynamic that led to
sounded
some
exactly
great memories,
like someone
a few
jumping into
situations
the
that I
deep
look
end.
back on now and
eyes
genuinely
opened
wonder how we
immediately.
made it out unscathed.
I held still.
This
listening.
story is about one of those
A few
situations.
seconds later, I heard the sound of
One
someone
weekend,
swimming.
Charles texted
Literal
me about a
strokes
fire
through the
lookout
water.
tower he'd found
My
deep
first
in some
thought was
forest
maybe
not
someone
far
from
away
the party
us.
stayed behind as
I
a
really
joke,
wish I
or
could
they just
remember the
woke
name
up
of the
drunkenly.
forest, but I can't.
But I knew everyone who
Charles
came.
said it had been
do
decommissioned
something
years
like
ago
that.
and was just sitting
I
out there
checked
in the
my
middle
phone,
of nowhere.
and it was 2
completely
a.m.
untouched.
I got
He
out of
didn't
bed
tell me
and
how
walked
he'd found
slowly
it,
to the
but
window
I
that
didn't wanna
overlooks the
know.
backyard.
He was
I
convinced
didn't turn
we could
on
hike
any
out to
lights in
it,
my room.
climb it,
I
and
didn't
spend
want
the
whoever
night
was
up
out there
there.
to see me before I
I
saw
was
them.
more skeptical.
And I looked down at the
things like
pool.
that are usually fenced
Saw
off.
there was a
or at
guy
least
swimming
protected
calmly
somehow.
from one
I
end to the
promised him
other.
I'd at least come and
At
check
first,
it
I
out.
tried to recognize him.
To be fair,
I knew
the
all
idea of
20
being
or so
70
people
feet
who
or
came
so
over.
up in the middle of a forest
wasn't
with a
any of them.
360-degree
I
view
leaned closer
sounded
to the
incredible
glass.
to me.
The pool lights
We
lit
picked a
up his
random
face
weekend
just
and
enough
made
for
it
me to
happen.
know for sure.
Charles planned
I
the
had never
entire
seen
thing
him
out,
before.
including the drive,
I yelled out the
what to
window,
pack,
"Who is
how
that?"
to find the tower
The
once we
swimming
were in the
stopped
woods.
immediately. He
It
looked
was a
up
3-hour
slowly
drive
toward my
away,
window.
and Charles told
Even
me
from
the
that
hike would be
distance,
off the trail.
I
but
could tell
pretty
he wasn't
short,
confused
about
or
4
startled.
miles or so.
He just stared up at me.
We drove out early
Then
in
he
the
started
morning
moving
on
toward the
Friday,
shallow
made
end.
it into the woods
He
sometime
climbed out
in
of
the
the pool.
afternoon.
And
For
that's
some
when I
reason,
saw how
I
tall
was
he
kind of
was.
expecting us to get lost.
He stood there
or at the
dripping
very
wet
least
for maybe
not
2
find the
seconds,
tower,
just
which
looking
is
toward the
exactly
house.
why I was all the more
I
astonished
expected him
when
to
we
run
actually
away.
did.
Instead,
Seeing it through the trees
he started
for the
walking
first
toward
time
the
was an
sliding
insane
door.
sight.
Not
I
running
remember
or
blurting out
hesitating.
no fucking way.
Just
when I
walking
saw how
fast
tall
and
it
direct,
was.
like he
I was
already
even
knew
more
where he was
astonished
going.
when we got to the
Almost
base
in a
of it
march.
and realized it was
I yelled
completely
again,
unprotected
"Hey, who is
or
that?"
fenced off.
He didn't
It
respond.
was just sitting there
I
in the
heard the
middle
sliding
of the
door
woods, waiting
downstairs
for us to
open.
find it.
I know I
The
locked
cab
it.
at the
I'm
top
positive
was
I
the
did.
small square
But
room
I heard it
with
slide
windows on
open.
all 4 sides.
Then it slid
There was a
shut.
metal staircase
I ran to my
that
bedroom
zigzagged
door
up the
and
frame
locked it.
with a section of
That's when I
vertical
noticed
ladder
how
for
much
the
my
final
hands were
stretch up to
shaking.
the cab.
I grabbed my
whole
phone and
thing looked
texted
like it
Mark
hadn't been
asking him if
touched
he
in
noticed
decades.
anyone stay behind before
Some
leaving.
of the lower railing,
But I didn't wait for a
missing,
response.
and there was
I
graffiti on the
immediately
support
called
beams near
911.
the base.
I whispered
To be
into the phone
completely
that there
honest,
was an
it
intruder
did
in
not
my
look
house.
like the type of structure
I gave my
anyone would
address
be
as
eager to
quietly
climb.
as I could.
But Charles
Then
was
I heard the
practically
footsteps.
giddy. While I was
were
hesitating
slow,
and debating
wet
whether I should
footsteps
try
in
convincing
hardwood.
him to back out,
I could hear
he
the
had
slight
already
stick of
started
his feet
climbing.
lifting off the floor.
I yelled at him to be
He
careful.
wasn't rushing,
and that got
nor
him
was
to
he
slow
searching
down.
randomly.
I
He was
figured, what
walking
the hell?
directly toward
Told
the
myself
stairs.
to stop bitching.
Each step on the
The two
stairs
of us made our way up carefully,
one at a time,
checking the stairs as
we
we
reached
went.
the top.
Most
The
of them
hallway
felt
floor
solid
outside
enough,
my room
but there were a
creaked.
few spots where the bolts
stopped
had rusted
right outside
through
my
and the
bedroom
steps
door.
wobbled.
I could hear water
The vertical
dripping onto
ladder
the floor.
section near the top was the
Then the
sketchy
handle
part.
moved.
It was
Tried
20-something
opening it
feet
once,
of straight
then
climbing,
twice,
with nothing but a
then
narrow
third
metal
time,
cage around
harder
it.
each time.
The adrenaline
When he
rush
realized
was
it was
insane,
locked,
but that's what
there
Charles
was a long
lived for.
pause.
He made it up without
The
any
911
issues.
operator was saying
The
something,
view from the
but I
cab
had the
was
phone
unreal.
set down.
You could see for
I
miles
could barely
in every
focus
direction.
on what she was saying.
We had also timed it
Then the
perfectly.
guy knocked on the door.
The sun was maybe
3
an hour
slow
from
knocks.
setting. Our plan was
I
to
picked
camp
up the
out for the
phone
night
and put it
catch
on
the
speaker.
sunrise.
My voice
There
was
was a
shaking,
decently
but I
wide
said
wraparound
loudly that I
walkway
was on the
up
phone with the
there, which is
police
where we
and they were
decided
on
to
their
chill.
way.
At least
There was
initially.
another long pause.
We cracked a few
Then a
beers
man's voice
and
from
just
the other
enjoyed
side of the
view
door
and some
said,
conversation.
very low and calm,
The sun eventually
"It's
went
me.
down.
Open
the
the
sky
door."
went from orange to purple
sounded like a
to
grown
dark
man
blue
in
in a
his
matter of
30s.
minutes.
I
Once
said,
the light
"I know
was
that
gone,
I don't know
the
you.
forest below
Leave
us
now."
was just a black mass in
There
every
was silence
direction.
again.
There wasn't a single
5
light in
seconds,
sight.
maybe more.
The stars
Then I heard
were
him turn
incredible,
and walk
easily
away
the best I've
quickly.
ever seen.
I heard his wet
Being alone
footsteps
out there
go
in the
back down the
dark was
hallway,
freaking me out
and
a
down the
little.
stairs.
It was
And
just
a few
weird
seconds
not
later,
being able to see
I heard the
anything,
front door
despite
downstairs
knowing
open
there was a
and
whole
slam
forest
shut.
below us.
I didn't move
Charles
until the
could tell
police
I was
arrived.
getting a little antsy.
When I finally
He
went
started
downstairs
messing
with
with
them,
me.
there was a
grabbing my
clear
shoulder and
trail
stuff
of
like
water
that.
leading from the
But
back
the thing
door
that pissed me off
up
the
the
most
stairs
was when
all
he
the way to
smacked
the
his
bedroom
metal
door.
water bottle against the side
After
of the
searching
tower.
the entire house,
It sent this
that was the only
incredibly
proof that
loud,
he had ever been
echoing
there.
clang in every direction.
I texted
probably
everyone I
to be heard
invited,
for
asking if they
miles.
stayed behind
The
or
sound was
noticed
so
anyone
loud
else
and
stay
ominous
behind.
that I actually
Anyone
got
who
mad
was
at
still
him.
awake said no.
I told him I
The
wanted
rest
to go
texted
inside the
back in
cab,
the morning
and he
saying
finally
no.
got the hint.
It was
There
a
wasn't
complete
much in it, by
stranger.
the way. It
And
had
I have a
clearly
feeling
been
that
hollowed
cough
out
I heard in
ages
the woods
ago.
earlier that day
He said he was going to
that
finish
man.
his beer before coming in.
I
and
don't know how
joining
he
me,
got the door
and I was
unlocked.
fine with that. that.
Maybe he slipped in during the party when people were going in and
started
out.
setting my sleeping
As
stuff
for a
up.
motive, I have no idea.
Before I could finish,
I just know that if I didn't wake up when I did,
serious voice
or
to come
if I
back
opened that
outside.
bedroom door,
Very
I don't know what he would have
un-Charles-like.
done.
So I did. I walked back around to where he was sitting and saw that he was pointing diagonally downwards toward the forest below us. At first, I thought he was just messing with me again, but it only took me a few seconds to realize what he was pointing at. There was a light down there. It was faint and pretty far away, but it was definitely
I'm the
down
middle sibling of
there, and it
three.
was genuinely
I have
horrifying.
2 brothers. They both grew up
Weaving
as
through the
scouts.
forest at what seemed
My
like
older
walking
brother made it
pace,
to Eagle
and
Scout.
My first thought
My
was
little
that it was
brother
a person
quit some
who heard
time
the
in
clang
Boy
from the
Scouts.
tower.
But for whatever
I don't know
reason,
why I felt the
my
urge to
parents never
whisper,
forced
but I
me
did.
to become a scout when I was a
told him he was
kid.
stupid for doing
Which is
that,
weird,
and we were
because I
probably
remember always
moments
being
away
really
from getting
jealous
caught
of my
or
older brother
arrested or
Scott when
something.
my mom would bring me along to
He
the
looked at
Pinewood
me with this
Derby
confused
contests
expression
and
before
celebrations
saying,
and
"You think
such.
that's a person?"
But the thing that I was always
Now
the most
it was
jealous
my
that I
turn to be
missed out on
confused.
were the campouts.
What the hell was he talking about?
When the troops would go out into
I
the
asked him what
wilderness and
else it
camp
could
out
be.
for a whole weekend.
He said that light was
I went
moving
along
way
for the
too
drive
evenly.
once or twice.
He wasn't
I saw them all
exactly
setting
wrong.
up, doing
The light wasn't
campfires and
swinging
such,
or wobbling
but
the way
being
you'd
younger
expect
and
someone
also
carrying
not
a
part of the
lantern or
troop,
flashlight to
I don't
be.
think I was allowed
Then
to
again,
stay.
it was probably
so I'd
too
go
far
home
away
with my
to tell.
parents.
I
My
didn't
jealousy
say
of these
anything after that.
campouts was mainly
Neither
towards
did
my
Charles.
older brother because I
Just
was
kept
growing
staring
up
at
watching
this
him prepare
mysterious
for these
light as
camping
it
trips.
continued weaving through the
Before
forest.
every trip,
Part of me
he'd be
thought
given
it
a
was
tent
just
to
some
take
random
home
hiker
and
that
practice
had
setting
nothing
up in
to
the
do with
backyard.
us. But I knew
Even
that
though
was
I was
wishful
only like
thinking.
7 or 8,
After a
I
few
remember
minutes,
so
it was
clearly how
obvious that
eager
the
I
light was getting
was
closer.
when I hatched the
It
idea
was
to do a
also
little
much
backyard
clearer that
camping.
the light was moving perfectly.
Basically, we
like
set
it was
up the tent in
floating
the
or
backyard
hovering.
and sleep in it overnight.
Charles asked me what we
To
should
my
do,
little mind,
and I didn't
that
have
was
an
the most
answer for him.
exciting idea ever.
There wasn't really anything
Also,
we could do.
our backyard
Like,
wasn't
what were we
really a
gonna do,
traditional
climb down?
backyard. Our childhood
As we were
house was in
throwing
a
out
very
more
spacious
theories,
neighborhood
the light
where
suddenly
yards just
zipped
kind of all
forward,
meshed
like it
together,
skipped a
and there
beat.
weren't many fences.
It was really
more so
thick,
large
but for a
patches of
split
trees
second,
and
that
brush
light went from
separating
steady,
yards,
even
which
movement
added to the
to an
camping
abrupt
feel.
zip forward.
Our backyard
Then it
was
was back
also
to steady
huge,
movement again.
and we had a fire pit.
I started
so our
feeling
parents
my
played
palms start
along
to
and
sweat,
set up the
and I could
fire
tell
pit in our
Charles was
backyard
really
for us
freaked
so
out
we could
too.
get the full camping
I
experience.
kept trying to convince myself
My
that
little
whoever
brother
was down
roasted
there was
marshmallows
just
with us
wandering
too,
aimlessly through the
but our
woods.
parents weren't going to
But
let him
again,
sleep in the
wishful
tent.
thinking.
He was only like
They
4
were
at the
definitely
time.
heading
It wasn't
for
a
the
good
tower.
idea.
And after
no,
about
he
10
wasn't a
minutes,
scout yet,
they
obviously.
reached it.
He was 4.
At that point, the light was
After it got a
directly
little
below
late,
us.
our parents
I was
brought him
bracing
in
myself
and told
for
us
someone
it was
to yell
time
up
to start
us
getting ready
and
for
announce
sleep.
themselves as police.
This time in my life,
But no,
the Game Boy
the light
SP
just
was
stopped
the
moving and
handheld
stayed in
console.
that exact spot
So
right
after
below
getting
us.
into our sleeping bags,
From our vantage
Scott and I
point
whipped
straight
out our
above,
Game
you
Boys
could
and
see
played
the
our
light
respective
itself,
games.
but not whoever was holding
I was
it.
playing Super Mario Bros.
Charles and I
2,
stared at
a
it
game
for a
I was
while.
obsessed
The
with, yet
suspense
could
was
never
killing
beat
me.
as a
It
child.
must have been killing Charles
After getting a
even
little more tired, though,
because he again
I
did
turned to
something
my
I wanted
side
to
and
throw
tried
him
to
off the
sleep.
tower for.
But I remember not
This
being
guy
able to
actually
sleep.
yelled, "Hey, are you
Like,
good?"
I was tired,
down at the
but
light,
restless.
revealing our presence.
Maybe because I'd never slept in
I
a
looked at
sleeping
him in
bag
horror,
before, and quite frankly, it
couldn't
wasn't
believe he would
comfortable.
do something so stupid.
A lot of time passed,
We didn't
and
get
I
a
mean a
response,
lot,
though.
before I
The light
finally
didn't
nodded
even
off.
move. We waited a
And
little
then
bit,
I
and
woke
then Charles
up
yelled down
probably
again.
confused about where I was
Still
at
nothing.
first, not
So there we
recognizing
were,
my surroundings.
70 feet up in an
I
abandoned
remember
fire
looking around
tower
the dark
in the middle
tent,
of nowhere,
and then
with
noticing
someone or
something.
something blocking our
Scott
only
was
exit.
gone.
We
His
were
sleeping bag
completely
was
trapped.
empty. The
We
tent
must have
zipper
watched
was
that light
closed,
for
though.
30 minutes
He
straight,
must have went
whispering
inside
to
because
each
he
other
couldn't
every
sleep.
so often.
I was
It
suddenly
never
too
moved
scared
once.
to be in the tent alone.
I wasn't worried
so I
about
got
being
up and
secretive
unzipped the
anymore.
tent.
Charles had
Before
burned that bridge
crawling
a
out,
long time
I
ago.
did a little
So I
innocent
did
peek
something I should have
outside
done a while
simply
ago.
because I was too scared to run
Grabbed
out
my
through the
flashlight
backyard
and
without
aimed it
checking if the
straight
coast
down
was
at the
clear.
base of the tower.
But it was
But
not.
even after I did that,
I saw
still
someone
couldn't
sitting
see
by
the
the
source of
fire
the
pit
light.
in the darkness.
Eventually, we accepted that there was
wasn't
nothing we
Scott.
could do and tried
He
to
was
go
a
back to
grown
what
man.
we were doing.
He was facing the
We
tent.
went back to
and
talking.
surely he
I
had
made
to have
sure I
seen
never
me.
took my eyes off
I
that light
gasped
for more than
and
a
zipped
few
the tent
seconds.
back up and crawled back into
Charles
my
thought it
sleeping
was some
bag
kind of
as if that
LED
piece
that
of
someone had
cloth was
placed
any
there to
form
mess
of
with us.
protection.
But who
I
the hell would
stayed
bother doing
completely
that?
still inside my sleeping
At some
bag.
point, Charles
The
said
tent
he
was
was
almost
climb down
completely
and
dark.
check it out.
Just a
And I
faint
told him that
gray
was
from the
insane.
moonlight coming through the fabric.
Not only was that inviting
I don't know
trouble,
what was going
but
through
it
my
was
mind at
downright
that
stupid
point.
and dangerous.
But I do know that I wanted to
As
call
we were
out
arguing
Dad,
about
just
it,
hoping that
I
it was my
glanced down
dad,
and realized
but
that I
knew it
couldn't see the
wasn't.
light anymore.
I gotta look
There
at
was
the
just
man,
darkness
even just
and
briefly.
more darkness down
If it
there
were my
again.
dad, he'd have acknowledged me
Frantically
poking my
scanned
head
the
out of the
emptiness
tent.
below us with my eyes.
And that's when I heard the
looking
chair
for
by
light,
the fire pit shift.
But it wasn't there anymore.
I was shitting bricks, hoping the man
Charles
didn't
seemed
get up.
relieved,
And
but
if he
I
did,
was the
that
opposite.
he wasn't coming towards
He
the
kept
tent.
telling me to relax,
But
saying
I could see
whoever
a
had
shadow
been there
now
had
on the other
probably
side of
left.
the tent, blocking
but I
some
was
of the
more
moonlight.
freaked out than I had been when the light was
right
just sitting
outside.
there motionlessly.
Somehow, I thought if I
The
didn't
thought
move,
that someone could be
maybe
down
he would
there.
think the tent
Now
was
we
empty.
couldn't even see them.
Then
was
I heard the
terrifying to
zipper
me.
very slowly
Charles
dragging
reassured me that
downward.
we'd obviously be
It
able
only
to
moved
hear
a
if
few
anyone tried to
inches.
climb the ladder.
The opening
which
was
I guess
small,
was true,
but it was enough.
But I was still really
I couldn't help
unsettled.
it. I turned my head just slightly. There's a small gap at the bottom of most tents where the zipper doesn't fully seal. I had never noticed it before that night.
We went inside and set up our sleeping
eye was pressed against that gap.
Neither of us were
just one eye,
though. That was
looking directly at me.
Staying awake turned out to be the right decision.
I could see the white of it in the dark.
Not 20 minutes after going inside,
scream at first.
Started hearing
not
noises.
for a few seconds at least, because I was paralyzed.
Metallic
Then the eye squinted a bit,
steel
as if
frame
the person
was
smiling a smile that I couldn't see.
Which
I wanted to move another inch,
because I was listening
finally
specifically for footsteps.
I scrambled backwards, kicking out of my sleeping bag, knocking into the tent poles.
Support beams with a wrench
I heard footsteps immediately take off through the yard.
Later, another one
Our back
came.
porch light flipped on,
was more of
which
a
I could see
grinding
through the
sound,
tent fabric.
Metal being twisted
My dad
against
burst
metal.
out the back door yelling.
For a good few
I
seconds
could hear him
before
running across the
stopping.
grass. By
Charles
the
and I
time he
kept
reached the
looking at
fire
each
pit
other
area,
like we were
whoever
expecting
it
the other one
was
to
was
do
already
something,
gone.
but there was nothing we
My
could
parents
do.
called the police, of course.
Sounds kept
I
coming
don't
from
remember
what
what
sounded
happened
like
after my
different
parents
spots,
talked to the
which was
cops.
what really got me.
I know I
because
went to
it
my
meant whatever
parents'
was
room with my
causing
mom,
was moving
and
down
eventually
there.
the police did their thing.
The sounds continued on
likely
and off for
searching
a
the
while.
immediate area.
I kept trying to
It was
map
an
out the sounds in my
absolute
head,
nightmare.
figure out where
I
they were
slept in
coming
my
from,
parents' bed that
how many
night.
sources
I was
there were,
emotionally
whether
scarred
they
for
were
a
getting
while.
closer or staying
Just
at the
as
same
things
level.
might have been going back to normal.
Couldn't make sense of
I
any
think
of
it was a few weeks to a
Charles
month
and I
later.
were whispering to each other.
This
about
part is what
we'd
really
do if we
hammers the
started
nail in
hearing
the
someone
coffin for
walking
this
up.
experience being
I
something
was
I can
sitting
never
against
forget.
the far wall of the cabin.
I went to Catholic
facing
school.
the windows on the
During
opposite
lunch,
side.
we'd have a short
Charles
recess
was on
in
the
the
opposite
schoolyard,
side,
which was
looking
all
over my
concrete.
shoulder.
The far end of the
So many
schoolyard
windows
was
in there,
fenced
we didn't
off
feel
and looked
safe
towards the
and wanted to
street.
be able to see out of
We
all
were
of
playing
them.
some game.
There
Maybe
wasn't
red
much
light,
to see,
green
though.
light, or something.
They were all pretty dark.
This part I
The only
genuinely
light
don't
being from the
remember.
stars and the moon.
All I know is I had to run to the
Then
fence to be
I saw
considered
something.
safe from whatever the threat in the
Dark
game
outline
was.
moved across the glass.
While I was on the fence,
My brain
next to
couldn't
some other
process
kids,
what I was
mind
seeing
you,
fast enough.
a man says, "Hey,"
But then
from
it
the other
passed in
side
front
of the
next
fence.
pane over.
I turn,
That's what
and
did
it's a
it.
man asking me
I
for
couldn't help but
directions
yell.
to some place I don't
Charles
even remember.
scrambled away from the window.
I said, "I don't know."
The two of us
We weren't even
immediately ran
supposed to
over
talk
to
to
the door
strangers
and pressed
outside
our
of the
backs
schoolyard.
against it.
Then
If
he
someone
said,
tried to come through
"Your
that
name's
door,
Chris, right?"
they were going to have to push through both of us.
That moment is
I kept
implanted in
looking
my
for the
brain.
figure through the windows,
His voice,
but I couldn't
the
see
look on his
anything.
face, and my
It was
heart
impossible,
dropping.
though, unless they
I
were
said
crawling
no,
on all
lying
fours.
to
I
him.
should have been able to
He
see
then
them.
smiled and said, "You don't
Charles and I
remember,
sat
do
up
you?"
like that for a really
And
long
at this
time.
point, I
could
ran
hear
towards
him
one of the recess
hyperventilating.
chaperones and pointed
What
over at the
followed was
fence.
the most tense
but the
and
man was
terrifying
gone.
few hours of my life.
One of the kids next to me told
Charles
me he
and I
saw the
sat
man
there
too.
in that exact
The recess
position,
ladies
like our
called
lives
the recess
depended
in
on it.
short.
By
The
the
school
time the
called
sun
my
started
parents.
coming up,
I was sure
completely
it was that man
exhausted.
from the backyard.
When it was finally
I
light
was
enough
taken
to
home
see,
early that
I counted
day.
to 3.
I know
and
my
then swung
parents
the
were
door
so
open
sick and
violently,
worried after this.
expecting someone
It
to
was
be
a hellish
crouching behind
month.
it. But
We
there was
lived in
no one
such a
there.
nice area too.
Charles and I
To
ran
almost
around the
be
side of
chased
it
out
to
of the
confirm
neighborhood
that.
because of
It
this
was clear.
just a nightmare.
I looked down to the
After
base of the
months
tower.
of me being under
There was
tight
nothing down there
supervision from
either.
my parents,
We grabbed our
things went
stuff
back to
and
normal.
started descending as fast
I can't
as we
express
could.
enough, though, how much
We
it
made it
still
about
pains me in my
3/4 of the way
chest
down the staircase
thinking about how
before
I could be
Charles
dead
stopped in front
today
of me.
if that man had somehow
just stood on the
successfully
landing,
taken me.
staring down at
And
the
it makes
next
me
section of
sick,
stairs.
wondering if he was ever
past
successful
him
in whatever
and
he
saw
was
it
trying to do
immediately.
with someone
An entire
else.
section of the staircase was gone. It wasn't just a few steps. I'm talking about an entire section of stairs, straight up missing. It was impossible.
I grew up
but
in
we were
Salem,
staring at
Oregon,
it.
a
Someone
quaint
had
little small town
deconstructed an
feeling
entire
place.
section of
I
staircase
moved
during
out
the night
when I was
while we were sitting
21,
directly
buying my
above
first
them.
house about 50
That must have
miles
been what
out
those
from
sounds
Salem.
were.
I
But
furnished
that
my
didn't make
first
sense.
house with a mix of
The
stuff for
noises
my
didn't
parents,
stop until
their
after I had
friends,
seen
and a
the
bunch of
person up
stuff
there.
off online
So had
marketplaces
they really
and
crossed
apps.
that gap twice?
I was driving a Ford
dark?
Raptor at the time,
No
so
way.
lugging stuff around
Plus,
was
there's
thankfully
absolutely
very
no
easy.
chance someone could have done that
On
without us
Facebook
hearing
Marketplace
it.
one
That would have
day,
been a lot
I
louder
found a
than few
listing selling
clangs
a
here
bunch
and
of
there.
good-looking stuff.
We stood on
The
that
ones in the
landing for a
listing that
while,
caught my
trying to
eye
figure
were
out
this
what to do.
cream-colored sectional
We had to
couch
just
that
jump
looked
across.
pristine.
It wasn't
and
that
this
far,
Cannondale
but it was
brand
still
mountain
scary.
bike. I
Charles
didn't have a
ended up
bike at the
twisting his
time.
ankle, but
and
I
where
was
my house
fine.
is, having one
We
is
made it
perfect
the rest
for
of the way down,
exercise.
and that was that.
The other stuff on the listing
There was
didn't
no one
really
waiting
interest
for us
me.
at the bottom.
The listing
There was
itself
actually
was
nothing
just
there
sort
at
of
all,
a digital
including
yard
the metal
sale.
steps that had been
I
removed.
contacted the
At least
seller,
as far
and
as
we
we
did a
could
little
tell.
typical back and forth.
Granted, we didn't look
He
around
was pretty
too much.
short and straight to
It
the
didn't
point
make
with his
any
answers.
sense, but we
And
weren't
surprisingly surprisingly easy to negotiate.
I still don't have
He
an
agreed to a
explanation
slightly
for any of
lower
it.
price, and
Not
he said
the
I could
light,
come
not
pick
the
the stuff
sounds,
up later
not the
that
figure I
night.
saw outside the
Days
window.
are long and Oregon
Definitely
in
not how
summer,
someone managed to
so I'd
remove
still
an
be
entire
showing up
section
with
of
some
steel
sunlight.
staircase in the middle of the
I
night
banked on
without
having
us
to do a
hearing
couple
it.
trips to transport
Every
the
time I
sectional
see
couch
Charles,
due to its
this
size.
is something we still talk about.
I set out on my way to the house. The address was right on the coast. I checked the satellite view on the map just to confirm it was bringing me to a house, and it was. Based on the map, there was a long trail or driveway that veered off the road towards a huge open property with a big-looking house, and then in the backyard was a literal drop-off to the ocean.
At this point.
All I could
know
think
the risks,
was, no
which
wonder
is why
these
I
people
carry
were
a
selling
rifle.
all this stuff for so cheap.
This happened about 2 years
With
ago.
that kind of
Daniel
money, I
Boone
wondered why they
National
weren't just
Forest
giving
in
it
eastern
away.
Kentucky.
I headed
It's
out
a
that
massive
way.
stretch of
It didn't take
forest,
long to
over
get there.
700,000
I could tell the
acres.
closer I got to the
You know
shore,
where to go.
the nicer
You
the
can hike for
properties
days
got.
without seeing another
And
person.
then I turned onto the last road
I had a
before I'd
rough
be turning
stretch
onto
of
the
work,
driveway
and my
for the
head wasn't
house.
in a great place.
This road
I
was
felt
long.
like I just needed a few
it was
days
lined
away
with
from
woods on
everything.
each side. And
I
then I
drove
passed
out on
the
a
occasional
Thursday
driveway
morning.
leading to
I parked at a
probably a
trailhead
cliffside
off a
mansion.
Forest Service road and started
Eventually,
hiking.
I made it to the turnoff.
The plan was simple.
It was a
3 nights
tree-lined
in the
dirt road,
backcountry.
or the
That was
driveway, I
pretty
guess
much
you'd
it.
call it.
I had my
About
tent,
10
my
seconds
pack,
in of
enough
driving
food
down
and
this
water for 4
driveway,
days,
it opened
my
to this
308
massive
bolt
clearing.
action that I always bring
The
on
driveway
solo
went on a
trips.
slight incline leading
The
to the
first
house
day
at
was
the top of
exactly
this
what I
hill.
needed. I
I
covered
pulled
about
up next to
7
this
miles
older
before
sedan.
finding a flat
It
spot
was like
near
a
creek
Mercury
bed that looked
Sable
like a
or
good place to
something.
camp.
It did not match
Set
the
up my
house at
tent,
all.
gathered some
Like
wood,
this house
and
looked
had a
like it
fire
belonged to a
going by the time the
millionaire.
sun started
This
going
car
down.
was a piece of shit.
I cooked some
I
food,
went up to the
drank a
front door
beer,
ready
and
to
sat
ring
by
the bell.
fire until it
But there was a
burned down
yellow
to
post-it
embers.
note on the front door.
The whole time,
And it
I
said
didn't
on
see a
it,
single
doorbell
person.
broken.
I
Please
fell
use
asleep
back
around
door.
10.
Weird,
I
because
woke up
could
at
have
some
just
point
knocked,
in the middle of the night.
but I obeyed.
I'm not sure what
As I
woke
walked
me.
down the front porch,
It was more like my brain
I
just
messaged the guy
switched
on
on for no
Messenger that I
reason.
arrived and
The
was
way it
going
does
around
sometimes
back.
when you're sleeping
I
somewhere
walked around the side of the
unfamiliar.
house, looking
I
at
lay
each
there
window
for a
as I
minute and
passed.
stared at the ceiling
But
of
the
my
blinds
tent.
all seemed to be
As
closed.
my eyes adjusted,
I got to the
I noticed
backyard,
something.
and it was crazy.
There was a faint,
It actually
orangey
overlooked the
glow
Pacific
coming
Ocean.
through the walls of my tent.
I walked up the back
I
deck
unzipped
to
the
go
tent
knock on the
flap
back door.
and looked out.
It was a sliding
Maybe
glass
200
door.
yards away,
but
through
there was
the
some kind of
trees,
sliding
there was a
blind that
fire.
was closed,
Not
so
a
I
big
couldn't see
one.
inside.
It was about the size of a campfire.
I knocked on the glass.
But it was definitely
I
there.
stood there for a minute.
It was flickering.
Then knocked
Which is
again.
how I knew it was a fire.
I looked down at my phone to see
I
if he
watched it
answered
for a
or
few
read my
minutes,
message.
waiting to hear talking
Neither.
or something.
I went to
I
go
wanted
sit on one of the
confirm it
chairs
wasn't
on the
some
deck
random
and spun
forest
it around
fire.
to stare at the
But after a
sunset
while
and
of
the
looking
view of
at
the
it,
Pacific.
I couldn't see or
It
hear
was a
anything
surreal
beyond the
view.
fire.
I kept checking my
Watched it a
messenger
little
app
while
and
longer
following up
just
with
to
the
see
guy.
if it would grow out
He
of
wasn't
control,
answering.
but it didn't.
I triple checked that I had the right
another
address.
camper set up
and I
nearby
did.
that I just hadn't
Plus,
noticed
the
during
note on the
day.
front door confirmed
It
that.
wasn't impossible.
I decided
especially
if he was
since I
in the
had gone to
shower
sleep
or
relatively
occupied or
early.
something, I'd at least
I
go
figured
walk over
whoever
to the
it was
cliffside
had
and
gone
get a
to
picture of
sleep
the
and left
view.
their fire going.
I did
which
just
is
that.
irresponsible.
I walked
but
down the
not
deck,
uncommon.
then down the seemingly
I watched
freshly
it
cut
for
grass
about
to the
5 more
cliffside.
minutes, and then zipped my
Taking
tent
in the
back up
view,
and went to
I
sleep.
daydreamed about
It
one
didn't
day
bother
being
me
able to
too
afford a
much.
place like this.
When I woke up the next
I started
morning,
walking back
the
up to
fire
the
was
house.
the first thing I
but
thought
stopped
about.
maybe 3
Not
steps
because it
in,
had scared
and I
me,
realized that
but
every
because I was
single window
curious.
now had their blinds
I
open.
wanted to see who
and
else
there was a
was out
person
there.
standing at
Maybe
each
say
window,
hi, but mostly to
standing as
satisfy my
still as
curiosity.
statues. I
packed
didn't know
up
if
my
what I was
campsite
looking at
and
was
hiked
some
in
kind
the
of
direction
prank
where
or
the
not.
fire had been.
I walked a little
It took
closer.
me about 10 minutes
The
to
moment I
reach the
said,
area.
"Nope, I've seen enough,"
I was pretty
when I
confident I had
realized
the right
every
spot.
single face was
There was
smiling.
a natural clearing that lined up.
I
with the
honestly
angle I'd
couldn't
been
tell if they
looking
were
from.
mannequins or not,
But when I got
that's
there,
how still they were.
I stopped.
I decided
There
I
was
just
no
needed to
fire
get to the
pit.
car.
Nor was
I
there
did a
ring
light
of
jog around the
stones
side
or
of the
a
house
pile of
again,
ash or
and that
scorched
side
ground,
window that I mentioned that
charred
also had its
wood,
blind shut
nothing.
before
The ground was
now too
completely
lifted.
undisturbed.
And there was someone
I
at
walked
this
the
window
whole
as well.
clearing, checking for any
I
sign
didn't
that
know
someone
what was
had been
going
there.
on here.
There was no
but
signs
I had
of
to get
life
out
whatsoever.
As I got to the front,
area
I
was
got back in
pristine.
my car, and I didn't
stood
even
there
look
for a
at the
while,
front
genuinely
windows.
confused.
I didn't even want to know
I
if
was
there were
certain
people
I'd
at these
seen a
windows
fire.
too.
It had been a
I reversed
campfire
all the way
burning
down the
clearly
driveway,
for at least
and
5
regrettably,
minutes while I
I
watched
did at
it.
one point take
Yet
a
the
curious
ground where
look
it should
ahead
have
of the
been
house.
looked like no one had
The
set
front
foot
door
there
was
in
open,
months.
and there was a person
I
standing on
considered
the
the
front porch with
possibility
his
that I had
hands
the
in his
wrong
pockets,
spot,
watching
but
me
there
drive
wasn't another
away.
clearing anywhere
It
near
didn't
the right
matter.
distance.
Everything
or
about this
direction.
was a red flag.
There wasn't much
I was
I
out
could
of
do
there
beyond
in a
that,
minute
though,
and down
so
the
I just
road.
moved on.
The guy
I
never
still had 2
opened
more
or
nights
responded
planned.
to my message.
I wasn't about
still.
to cut my trip short.
I
over
decided to
something
turn
silly
into the
like that.
closest neighbor's house driveway
I hiked for
and
most
knock
knock on the door. The terrain answered as I moved, and I explained the bizarre and disturbing situation I just encountered, and the ground pressed them about any info on their neighbor. Mid-afternoon, the man who answered, who I'll call Tom, was shocked. The trees were taller because he's close friends with the guy next door, and he said he's hardly ever in town. It was quieter, that he wouldn't set up some kind of elaborate prank like that. I found a good campsite around. He called his neighbor on the spot. That evening was uneventful. Basically, the conversation went as follows from what I remember. For the night. Hey Jim, it's Tom next door. Listen, I got someone at my front door right now saying you invited him to your house to buy stuff, but you pulled some kind of scary prank on him with the windows and stuff. Like a thick branch being snapped in half before the Tom guy said, "What are you talking about?" From here, I stepped in and explained everything from the Facebook ad to my arrival there to the people at the windows. There was a deep, resonant now sounded very concerned because he said he wasn't home this week. I did my best to describe every detail, including what the man on the front porch looked like, as well as the sketchy car. Very large branch. He asked me to take his number so he could contact me after the police investigation, which I do understand is kind of a rare occurrence. It's amazing and terrifying. I really didn't have it in me to commit 2 hours to some police investigation that didn't concern me, truth be told. But I did hear from the guy later that night.
He called
there
me
in my
and
sleeping
asked me to
bag,
send him
trying
the
to figure
Facebook
out what
listing,
had just caused it.
but it was
The
removed.
more I thought about it,
I did
the less
send him the
sense it
details
made.
of the profile that I was
It wasn't
messaging
storming.
on the
There
messenger
was
app,
barely any wind.
but it was now a
There was
blank
nothing I
profile.
could think of that would have
He
brought a
thanked me
tree
for
down
that
on a
and
night
would give
like
it to the
this.
police anyway.
But there was also nothing
And
I
I
could
asked him
do.
what the cops found.
I couldn't fall
He
asleep.
told
at
me
that
they
point
found
either.
nothing stolen, as
My
far
heart
as
was
he knew
still
at that
racing,
time.
and the
Not
adrenaline
all the
had me
blinds were
awake.
once again
So
closed.
I just kind of closed my eyes.
There was no
and waited for
sedan
it
in the
to wear
driveway.
off.
But then all three doors in the house were unlocked.
It happened again.
Now the
Only
scary
this
part
time,
for me
it was much
is the way
louder.
they were all standing at the windows, smiling, trying to scare me. And I have to wonder,
That same
what
gruesome
use was I going to
crackling
be
sound,
of
followed
to
by
them?
a crash of branches
Why did they
and a
want me in the
deafening
backyard?
thud? But this one
Scary
was close.
thoughts, honestly.
Not right on
Just
top
glad
of
I
me,
left when
but
I
close
did.
enough that the sound was almost disorienting, and it came from a completely different direction than the first one. The first tree had fallen somewhere to the south, and the second one was to my northwest.
I lived with my parents
sat up
in Murraysville,
immediately.
Pennsylvania.
Now I was actually
My parents
scared.
were gone one
Two
weekend.
trees
so I
falling on the
decided
same
I was
night
going to
in
have
two
a bunch of
different parts
people
of
over in the
forest with
backyard
no
for a
wind
mini
and
pool
no
party.
storm.
They
That
have
was
a pool house
inconceivable.
and an in-ground pool back
I kept
there.
trying to come
It's
up with an
perfect for
explanation that
parties,
made sense.
even though I rarely
The
get a
most
chance to
logical
throw
thought
anything.
was that the first one had
The
caused
rest
some
of the
kind of chain
backyard is a
reaction.
little bit of grass,
But that
and then the
hypothesis
woods
didn't
behind the
account
pool
for the
house.
fact that the trees
It's
fell
a very
in completely
private
different parts of the
backyard.
forest.
Usually,
Whatever brought down
You'll
the
see what
first
I mean
tree had
soon.
nothing to do with the second one.
So the little party
There
I
were two
planned
different
was for
events.
Saturday night.
That was even more
Earlier that
inconceivable.
day, I was setting up outside.
I was sitting there processing
It was a
all
little
this
cloudy out,
when I heard
since it was going to be a
new.
night party,
Something
that
that
didn't
took
really
my fear
matter.
from a medium 5
The woods
to a
behind the
resounding
pool house
10.
are pretty big.
It was the
They
slow
go at least
and
half a
continuous
mile
rumbling
back before
sound
they
that I
reach
can only
another
describe
backyard.
as a cross between a
So
groan
there should really
and a
be no
growl,
one walking through
like a
them.
person clearing
It's
their
also
throat,
our property.
except it didn't stop.
There are no trails or
It
any
wasn't an
reason
animal
for
sound
anyone
I
to be back there.
recognized. I've heard
I was
bears,
bringing
I've
out
heard
folding
elk,
tables
I've
for
heard
beer pong and
bobcats.
refreshments.
This
and
wasn't
setting
any of
them up.
those.
When I heard a
It sounded
cough
like
come
something
from
was
the
making
woods.
the noise on purpose.
It was
And it
clearly
went on
a
for what
slow,
felt like a full minute
throat-clearing
without
kind of
any
cough,
break or variation.
like someone trying to get
I
something
did
out
the
of
only
their
thing I
throat.
could think to do.
And it was
Grabbed
definitely
my
a
rifle,
man.
chambered around
I
as
froze
quietly
with the
as I
table
could,
still in my hands.
aimed it at the tent
I
flap.
just stood there listening.
At that point, I was full
The
on
wind was
panicking.
barely moving the leaves.
I must have sat like
so the
that for
sound
20
carried
minutes.
really clearly.
The sound
Came from
eventually
just
tapered
inside
off.
the tree line,
It didn't
not
stop
deep in the
abruptly.
woods.
It kind of faded out,
Close
like
enough that
whatever was
whoever made
making
it could
had moved
definitely
further
see
away.
me.
And just like that,
I slowly
the
set
forest
the
was
table
quiet
down
again.
and looked out toward the
I didn't
trees.
sleep the rest of the night.
Confused is
I don't
one
think I
word
would have
to
been able
use,
to if I
but
tried.
Unsettled would be a better
It
one.
was the worst night of
No
my
one
life.
should be in those woods ever.
As soon as I saw daylight,
I scanned the tree
got out of
line
the
and
tent.
called out, "Who is
I
that?"
packed up as quickly as
There was no
possible.
answer.
Still spooked
Not
and
even any
extremely
movement.
unsettled, despite being
No
able to
footsteps
see.
or branches snapping.
Once
or
everything was in my
anything.
pack,
That
I
almost
started
made it
walking in the
worse.
direction of the second
If
tree.
it was some random
the
guy
louder and
walking
closer
through,
one.
I should have heard
I
him
needed
moving
to see
away.
it, if only to
But it was
confirm
just
that I hadn't
quiet.
imagined the whole thing.
I got that feeling in
I
my
had my
chest,
rifle
like I
ready
was
in my
being
hands.
watched. Like
So I
someone
found the
was
tree
standing
after about
perfectly
10
still,
minutes.
just behind a
The thing was
tree,
massive.
staring
Its
at
trunk
me.
was lying at an angle
I
across
stood
a
there for
shallow
maybe
slope.
20 seconds just listening.
Broken branches and
the longer
debris
I
were
stood
scattered
there, the
all
more
around
uncomfortable
it.
I felt.
So it was real.
Eventually, I
really
just
couldn't
grabbed the rest
believe
of the stuff and
I'd
brought
been
it
trying to
back
convince
inside for a
myself
bit.
I had just imagined
I didn't want to
everything
just
from the
stand
night
out there
before,
alone
but
anymore.
there it was.
I called my
I
good
needed
friend
to
Mark
keep
to come over
investigating.
early and help me
I
set
wouldn't
up.
have been satisfied
I decided
leaving
not to
without knowing
mention
what
the
had
cough.
caused the fall.
I didn't want to sound
I walked
paranoid
over
before
the
the
stump,
party
which
even
was about
started.
3 feet high.
Mark came
The
over
wood
around
where it
6
had broken
p.m.
was pale and
He brought
fresh,
some drinks
but the
and helped
break
me
wasn't
finish
clean.
setting up.
It wasn't the kind of
I kept
jagged,
glancing at the
splintered
woods while we
fracture
were
you
out
get
there,
from wind stress
but everything
or root
looked
failure.
normal.
The
Nothing
wood around the
moved.
break point had been torn
If someone
apart
had been
in a way
there
that I had
earlier,
never
they
seen
were gone.
before.
The
Parts
rest
of
of
the
my
stump
friends
looked
started
like they'd
showing
been
up
gouged.
around 7 to 8.
I really don't know how
At
else
the
to
peak of the
describe it.
party, there were at least
There were
20
long,
people.
irregular grooves
Nothing
running
insane
through the wood
but
at
it was a
different
good
angles,
time.
and it looked
There
like
was
some of
music
them were up
playing,
to an
people
inch
in the
deep
pool,
at least.
lights around the patio on.
The wood genuinely
With that
looked
many
like it had
people
been
there,
stripped
the
and
woods
chewed
didn't feel
rather than
creepy
cut
anymore.
or snapped.
A couple times during the
more I
night, I
noticed.
caught myself looking toward
Some
the
of the
tree
bark
line,
around the
though.
base had been peeled away.
I don't
in
even
long
know why.
strips. The
I guess that
exposed
cough
wood
just
underneath
stuck
had
with
that
me.
same gouged,
Things
chipped started dying down around midnight. I can't pretend I knew
by
what
1
I was
a.m.,
looking
the
at
last of the
because I
guests
didn't.
had left.
I'd seen beaver damage
figured
before,
I would
and
leave
this
the
was
mess to
not
clean
that.
up for tomorrow.
Beavers leave clean
I was
cuts.
tired and ready for bed.
I'd seen woodpecker damage.
Before going
and
inside,
this wasn't that either.
I did one last
This
slow
was
sweep of
aggressive,
the backyard.
messy, and covered
I walked
way
around
too
the
much
pool,
surface area
checked
to be
behind
any
the pool
animal I could
house,
think of.
looked toward the woods again.
The tree hadn't fallen
Everything
because it
seemed
was
normal.
dead or because the
The
wind
water in
knocked
the
it
pool
over.
was still,
Something
the
had
lights
worked on that
reflected off
trunk
of it
until it came down.
No one was out there.
And suddenly, I felt
I
this
locked the
really
back
nasty
sliding
feeling
door
in my
and
gut.
went upstairs to brush
I
my
needed
teeth
to
and go to
leave.
bed. I was in
I
bed
stopped
scrolling on
examining
my
the tree
phone for
and
maybe
started
half an
backing
hour
away.
before putting it
But
down.
as I was turning to leave,
It probably
something
took
in one of
another
the
half
tree
hour
branches
of laying
caught my
there
eye.
trying to sleep.
There was a small
I heard a
cluster of
splash.
items sitting on the ground.
Not a small
If it
one.
weren't for the fact
Not
that
like
they looked
something
man-made,
falling in.
I wouldn't have
It sounded
even bothered
exactly
checking
like
them
someone
out.
jumping into the deep
As soon
end.
as I saw what they were,
My eyes
I lost
opened
my shit.
immediately.
It was a
I held
blue
still,
bandana
listening.
and a carabiner.
A few
and they were
seconds
both
later,
my
I
items.
heard the sound of someone swimming. Literal strokes
I instantly
through the
started
water.
digging through my pack.
My first thought was maybe someone from the party stayed behind as a joke, or they just woke up drunkenly.
Shoved it in my backpack.
But I knew
and
everyone
ran.
who came.
I didn't know if
When we
running
do
was the right
something like
decision.
that.
If that would have
I checked my
attracted
phone.
attention to me.
It was 2 a.m.
I did anyway.
I got out of
just
bed
needed
and
to
walked
get out of
slowly
those
to the
woods.
window that overlooks the backyard.
I got tired after a
I didn't
while
turn on
under the
any
weight of
lights
all
in
my
my
stuff.
room.
But
I didn't want
moved as
whoever was
fast
out
as
there
I
to
could.
see me before I saw
The
them.
hike back took me most
When I
of the
looked
day.
down at the pool,
The entire time I
I
felt
saw
like
there
I
was
was
a guy
being
swimming
stalked or
calmly from
watched.
one end to the
I
other.
felt like something was going to jump out
First, I
from
tried to
somewhere and
recognize
sense
him.
him.
I knew
kept my
all
rifle
20
in
or
my
so
hands the
people who
entire
came
time.
over. This
I
wasn't
made it back
any
to
of
my
them.
car around 3 in
I
the
leaned
afternoon.
closer to the glass.
I drove out of there so
The pool
fast,
lights lit up his
despite my
face just
exhaustion.
enough for me to know for
The
sure.
first thing I did when I got
I
to
had
a
never
safe
seen him
distance
before.
away was call the
I yelled out the
police.
window, "Who is that?"
I don't think they took
The
me very
swimming
seriously,
stopped
but
immediately.
I didn't care.
He looked
I
up
also knew there
slowly toward
probably
my
wasn't
window.
much they could do.
Even from
But I
that
didn't care
distance,
about that either.
I could tell he wasn't
pretty
confused or
messed up for
startled.
days
He
afterward.
just stared up at me.
None of it made any
Then
sense
he started
whatsoever.
moving toward the shallow end.
What I couldn't get over
He
was
climbed
the
out of
fact
the
that my
pool.
stuff had been
And
rummaged
that's when I
through.
saw how tall he
Something
was.
had either stalked me through
He
the
stood
woods
there dripping
or
wet
knew
for
where
maybe
I
2
was the
seconds,
entire time.
just looking toward the
That
house.
unexplainable fire from
I
the first
expected
night
him to
must
run
have had
away.
something to do with it.
Instead,
There's no way that
he
was
started
a
walking toward the
coincidence.
sliding door.
There's trees.
Not
Still
running
have
or
no
hesitating,
explanation for what could have
just
cut them
walking
down.
fast and direct,
I genuinely
like he
don't
already
think
knew
it
where
was
he was
anything
going.
human.
Almost
As to
in a
what
march.
animal it could have been.
I yelled again,
no
"Hey,
idea.
who is that?"
I
He
still
didn't
go
respond.
camping, believe it or not.
I heard the sliding
This is
door
something that I
downstairs
think will
open.
hang over me
I
forever.
know I locked it. I'm positive I did. But I heard it slide open. Then it slid shut. I ran to my bedroom door and locked it. That's when I noticed how much my hands were shaking. I grabbed my phone and texted Mark, asking him if he noticed anyone stay behind before leaving. But I didn't wait for a response. I immediately called 911. I whispered into the phone that there was an intruder in my house.
A really long time.
I gave my address as quietly as I could.
Maybe 25
Then
or
I heard the
26.
footsteps.
Way before I met my wife.
They were
way before
slow,
we had
wet
kids.
footsteps on hard wood.
I was a completely
I
different
could hear the
person
slight
back
stick
then.
of his feet
Not
lifting
in a
off the
bad
floor.
way, just in the
He
sense
wasn't
that I
rushing,
had the kind of free
nor
time
was he
and risk
searching
tolerance
randomly.
that I
He was
genuinely
walking
can't relate
directly
to
toward the
anymore.
stairs.
I used
Each
to do
step
these
on the
solo
stairs
backpacking
creaked,
trips
one at a
times
time.
year, usually
Reached the
somewhere
top.
in the Appalachians.
The hallway floor outside my
drive
room
out to some
creaked.
remote trailhead.
He stopped
hike
right
deep
outside
into
my
the
bedroom door.
backcountry, way off
could
the
hear
trail,
water dripping
and
onto
spent
the
a few
floor.
days completely off
Then
the
the
grid.
handle moved.
No cell
He
service,
tried opening
no
it
other
once,
people,
then
nothing.
twice,
I
then a
loved
third
it.
time, harder
My
each
friends
time.
thought I was insane.
When he realized
and
it was
honestly,
locked,
I kind of was.
there was a long pause.
This particular trip was in the
The
Cherokee
911
National
operator was
Forest,
saying something,
and it
but I had
changed
the
how
phone
I see
set down.
backpacking forever.
I could barely focus on
I had
what
been
she
out
was
there
saying.
for 2 days, and everything
Then the
had been
guy
going
knocked on the
perfectly.
door. 3
The weather
slow
had been
knocks.
great. The trail was quiet.
I picked up the
and I
phone
hadn't
and
seen
put it
another
on speaker.
person since the first
My
morning.
voice was shaking,
That
but I
changed
said
pretty
loudly
quickly,
that I was on the phone with the
On
police
the
and they were
afternoon
on their
of the
way.
second day,
There was
I
another
noticed
long
dark storm
pause.
clouds building up
Then a
to the
man's
west.
voice from the other side of the
I
door
wasn't
said,
too worried
very
at
low
first.
and calm,
I'd hiked through
"It's
rain
me."
plenty of
Open
times,
the
and
door.
it was never a big deal.
He sounded like a
But
grown
within
man
about
in
an
his
hour,
30s.
I realized it wasn't
I
going to be
said,
a
"I
passing
know that I
shower.
don't know you.
The
Leave
wind
now."
picked up hard, and the temperature dropped
silence
fast
again.
enough that I actually
5
stopped to put on
seconds,
another
maybe
layer.
more. Then I
By
heard
the
him
time the
turn
rain
and
started,
walk away quickly.
I was already looking for a
I
spot
heard his
to
wet
hunker
footsteps
down.
go back down the
The problem
hallway,
was that I
and
was
down
in a
the
pretty
stairs.
exposed section
A
of
few
the trail.
seconds later, I heard
As
the
I
front door
predicted,
downstairs
it
open
wasn't a
and
light
slam
rain.
shut.
It went from
I
windy
didn't move
to
until the
full-on
police
downpour
arrived.
in minutes.
When I finally went
The wind
downstairs
was
with
bending
them,
smaller
there was a
trees
clear trail
sideways,
of water
and I could hear
leading from the
branches
back
cracking
door
and falling
up
in
the
the canopy
stairs
above
all the way
me.
to the bedroom door.
I started getting
After
genuinely
searching the
concerned
entire
about my
house,
safety.
that was the only
Lightning
proof
was
that he had
striking
ever
pretty
been
close
there.
by. I was
I
hiking at
texted everyone I
elevation with a metal
invited,
framed
asking if they
pack on
stayed
my back.
behind or noticed
Not
anyone else
ideal.
stay behind.
I kept
Anyone
pushing
who was still
forward,
awake said no.
completely soaked at
The
that
rest
point.
texted back in the
I
morning,
was scanning
saying
the
no.
woods on either side of the trail
Was
for
a
anything
complete
that could pass as
stranger.
shelter.
And I have a feeling that
As
cough
if
I
by
heard in
some
the woods
miracle,
earlier that
I
day
actually saw a
was that
structure
man.
through the trees off to my
I don't know
left.
how he got the door
It
unlocked.
was small and
Maybe
dark
he
and
slipped in
partially
during the
hidden by
party
the
when people were
forest,
going in
but it
and
was
out.
unmistakably
As for a
man-made.
motive, I have no idea.
As I got closer,
I just know that if I
realized it
didn't
was a
wake up when I
tiny
did,
one-story cabin.
or if I opened that
It
bedroom
looked
door,
extremely old.
I don't know what
like
he
it could
would
have been a
done.
hunting cabin or a homesteader's shelter from decades ago. There was a single window on the side I was approaching. I can't overstate how relieved I was. I practically sprinted over to the thing and pushed the door open. Inside, it was dim but dry. There wasn't much in there. Just a chair, a small table, and what looked like a cot
middle
frame
sibling
pushed
of
against the
3.
far wall.
I have 2 brothers.
There was a
They
stone
both grew up as
fireplace on the
scouts.
right side that was
My
clogged
older
with
brother
old
made it
ash
to
and
Eagle
debris.
Scout. My little
The place
brother
honestly
quit some
smelled
time in
really
Boy
bad,
Scouts.
but I didn't
But for
care
whatever
about
reason,
anything other than
my parents
stripping
never
out of my
forced me
soaked
to become a
clothes
scout
and
when I
laying
was a
down.
kid. Which is
There
weird,
wasn't a couch
because
or
I
anything
remember
in there,
always being really
so I
jealous
literally
of
just
my
picked a
older
spot on
brother
the
Scott
floor
when
and
my
lied
mom would
down.
bring me along to the Pinewood
I
Derby
was in survival
contests
mode
and
at that
celebrations
point,
and
not
such.
exploration mode.
But the thing that I was
All I
always the
cared
most
about
jealous
was
that
that
I
I was
missed
out of
out
the
on
storm.
were the campouts.
It wasn't until
when the
I'd been
troops would
inside
go out
for
into the
maybe 10
wilderness
or
and camp out for a
15
whole
minutes
weekend.
that I started actually
I went
looking
along
around.
for the drive once or twice.
With the storm
and I
raging
saw them all
outside,
setting up,
there wasn't
doing
much else to
campfires
do
and
besides
such.
flick on a
But being
flashlight
younger
and
and
snoop.
also not part
So
of the
that's
troop,
exactly what I did.
I don't think I was allowed to stay.
There was more stuff in that
So
cabin
I'd go
than
home
I
with
had
my
initially
parents.
realized.
My
For
jealousy of
starters,
these
there was a
campouts was
sleeping
mainly
bag
towards
rolled
my
up in the
older
corner near
brother
the cot
because I
frame.
was growing up watching
It
him
didn't
prepare
look
for these
ancient like
camping
the rest of
trips.
the place, which
Before
confused
every
me.
trip, he'd
There
be
were
given a
also
tent to
couple of
take home and
cans
practice
water
setting up
jugs
in the
on the table,
backyard.
which made me
Even
think
though I
someone
was
had been
only
using
like
the place
7
as a
or
base
8,
camp of
I
sorts.
remember so clearly
Maybe
how
another
eager I
backpacker or
was
a
when
hunter.
I hatched the idea to do a
It
little
wasn't unusual
backyard
to find
camping.
stuff like that in remote
Basically,
cabins.
we set up the tent in the
more I looked
backyard
around,
and sleep in
the
it
more things
overnight.
started bothering
To
me.
my little mind,
There
that
were
was the
marks
most
on the
exciting
wall near the
idea
door.
ever.
At first, I
Also,
thought they were
our
just
backyard
damaged from
wasn't
age
really
or
a
weather,
traditional
but when I
backyard.
got closer to
Our
inspect
childhood
that,
house
I
was
could
in
see
a
there
very
were
spacious
scratches.
neighborhood where
There were
yards just
dozens
kind of
of
all
them,
meshed
some
together,
shallow
and there
and
weren't
some
many
deeper.
fences. More
There
so
was no
large
pattern
patches
or
of
order
trees
to
and
the
brush
marks,
separating
at least
yards,
not one I could
which
see.
added to the camping feel.
I stepped back.
Our
and
backyard
looked at
was
the door
also
itself.
huge, and we had a fire
handle
pit,
was a simple
so our
latch,
parents
which
played
wasn't
along and
unusual.
set up the fire pit in our
Despite the
backyard
storm,
for us so we could
I
get the
opened the
full
door just
camping
to get a look at the
experience.
mechanism.
My little brother
There was a
roasted
metal bracket
marshmallows
on the
with us
outside of
too,
the frame,
but our
which
parents
looked like
weren't
it was
going to let him
designed to
sleep
hold
in the
the
tent.
padlock.
He was only like 4 at the
bracket
time,
was
and
on
it
the
wasn't a good
outside.
idea. And no,
There was
he
no
wasn't a scout
corresponding
yet,
latch on the
obviously.
inside.
He was 4.
That meant the door could only
After
be
it got
locked
a
from
little
the
late,
outside.
our parents brought him in and told us it was
only
time
got
to start
stranger.
getting ready for sleep.
I shut the door and
At this
started
time in my
looking around
life,
the cabin.
the Game Boy SP was
Only
the
thing I hadn't
handheld
checked out
console.
yet was the window.
So after getting
So I
into our
walked over
sleeping
to it.
bags, Scott and I
Glass
whipped
was
out our
still
Game
perfectly
Boys and played our
intact,
respective
which
games.
surprised me, given the
I was
apparent
playing
age of the
Super Mario
place.
Bros. 2,
But then I
a game
noticed
I was
why.
obsessed with, yet
There
could
were
never
screws
beat as a
drilled into
child.
the window frame.
After getting a
One
little
in
more
each
tired,
corner,
though,
securing
I
it
turned to
shut.
my side and
Those
tried
had
to
also
sleep.
been driven in from outside.
remember not being
and
able
around
to
the edges
sleep.
of the frame on the
Like,
inside.
I was
there were
tired,
more
but
scratches.
restless.
Deep
Maybe
ones.
because I'd never slept in a
These were
sleeping bag
unmistakable.
before, and
They
quite
honestly
frankly, it
looked like
wasn't
someone had
comfortable.
tried to pry the window open
A lot
with
of
their bare
time
hands.
passed, and I mean a lot,
All of it hit
before I
me at
finally
once.
nodded off.
Someone had been kept in this
And
cabin,
then
trapped,
I woke up probably
and kept
confused
against
about
their
where I
will.
was at first.
I should have
not
left right
recognizing
then.
my
I
surroundings.
did consider that.
I remember
There was a good
looking
part
around
of
the
me
dark
that felt
tent,
like whatever had
and
gone
then
on in
noticing
that cabin
something.
was well in the past.
Scott was gone.
Everything in the cabin
His sleeping
looked
bag
really
was
old.
empty.
Even the
tent
sleeping
zipper
bag,
was
which
closed,
did look
though.
on the newer side.
He must have went inside
admittedly,
because he couldn't
was
sleep.
rigid and dusty.
I was suddenly too
Plus,
scared
the
to
last
be in
thing
the
I
tent
wanted
alone.
to do was go back
So
out
I got
in that
up
storm
and
again.
unzipped the tent.
So I stayed.
But before crawling out,
I'm not
I
sure
did a
how much
little
time
innocent
passed.
peek
Maybe an
outside,
hour,
simply
maybe
because I was
more.
too scared to run
The
out
storm
through the
wasn't letting
backyard
up at
without
all.
checking if the
If
coast
anything,
was clear.
it had gotten worse.
But it was not.
The rain on the
I
roof
saw
was so
someone sitting
loud
by
that
the
it was
fire
hard to
pit
hear
in
much of anything
darkness.
else. That's probably
wasn't
why it
Scott.
took me so long to notice
It was
the
a
other
grown
sound.
man.
He
was
picked
facing
up on
the
the
tent,
scratching,
and surely he had to
scraping
have seen
noises
me.
from outside.
I gasped
Somewhere along the
and
left
zipped the
wall
tent
of the
back up
cabin.
and crawled back into my
At
sleeping
first,
bag.
I thought it was
as
a
if that
branch.
piece of cloth
I
was
couldn't
any
remember
form
if
of
there had been
protection.
branches low enough
I
to even
stayed
touch the
completely
exterior
still
of the
inside
cabin.
my sleeping bag.
As I was
The
thinking
tent was
about
almost
it,
completely
I heard
dark.
two heavy
Just
thumps
a
on the
faint
porch.
gray from the moonlight coming through the fabric.
They honestly
I don't know
didn't
what
sound
was
like
going through
storm
my mind
sounds.
at that point.
This
but
time
I do
I
know
stood
that I
up.
wanted to call out
I did
Dad,
that thing
just
where you
hoping
freeze
that it
in
was my
place
dad.
and try to focus
But
by
I knew it
staring at a
wasn't.
random spot on the wall.
I got to look at the man, even
was
just
trying to
briefly.
listen.
And if
If
it were
someone
my
was moving
dad,
out there,
he'd have
it would
acknowledged
have
me
been
poking my
impossible
head
to
out
hear
of the
over the
tent.
storm.
And that's when I heard the
Started
chair by the
getting
fire
paranoid
pit
that
shift.
those sounds I heard were
I was
just a few
shitting bricks,
many,
hoping the man
and the
didn't
rest
get
had
up.
been drowned out
And if
by
he
the
did,
rain.
that he wasn't coming
My
towards
eyes
the tent.
drifted over to the window.
But I could see a
couldn't
shadow
bring
now on the
myself to
other
look
side of the
through it.
tent, blocking some
If
of the
someone
moonlight.
really was out there,
He was
probably
right
be
outside.
looking through it.
Somehow, I thought
stayed
if I
in that
didn't
position
move,
for what
maybe
felt
he
like
would think the
forever.
tent was empty.
After a while,
Then I heard the
started
zipper,
to relax a bit,
very
thinking
slowly
I'd just been
dragging
hearing the
downward.
storm, or at the very
It only
worst,
moved
an
a few
animal poking
inches.
around the cabin.
The opening was small,
I was almost
but it was
ready
enough.
to forget about everything.
I couldn't help
when
it.
I heard something that
I turned turned my head
over
just
the edge.
slightly. There's a small gap at the bottom of most tents where the
Pressure
zipper
on the
doesn't
door,
fully seal.
like someone was
I had
leaning
never
their
noticed
full
it
weight
before
against
that
it
night.
from the other side.
An eye was pressed
wood
against
creaked
that
and
gap.
the latch rattled
Just
once
one eye,
before the pressure
looking
released.
directly at me.
My heart rate instantly shot back up.
I could see the
and that's
white
when
of it in the
something
dark.
clicked.
I couldn't even
Why would
scream
someone
at
be
first.
outside in a storm
Not for a
like
few
this,
seconds at least,
circling
because
the
I was
cabin,
paralyzed.
tapping on the walls,
Then
and
the
the
eyes
eyes coming
squinted
in.
as if the
The
person
door
was
wasn't
smiling a
locked.
smile that I
Nothing
couldn't
was stopping
see.
them.
The zipper
And I
moved
thought about
another
what I
inch,
found inside the
and that's when I
cabin,
finally
and it
screamed.
occurred to me that
I
maybe
scrambled
whoever was out
backwards,
there didn't want
kicking
to
out
come
of my
inside.
sleeping bag,
Maybe they
knocking
wanted
into
me
the
to
tent
stay
poles.
inside.
I heard
Maybe the whole
footsteps
point was to
immediately
keep me
take
there.
off through the yard.
I don't know if that
Our
was the
back
right
porch light
conclusion
flipped
or if
on,
my mind was
which I
just
could see through
spiraling.
the tent
But I
fabric.
decided I was
My
leaving
dad
right
burst
then.
out the back door
I didn't
yelling.
care about the storm.
I could hear him
I started
running across the
moving things
grass.
into my backpack as
By the
fast
time
as
he
I
reached
could.
the fire pit area,
I had the
whoever it
sickening
was
feeling
was
that
already
something really
gone.
bad was about to happen.
My parents called the
And I
police,
was
of
right.
course. I
The
don't
next few
remember what
moments were a
happened after
blur.
my parents talked to the
I
cops.
was maybe 30
I
seconds
know I
from
went to my
walking out the
parents' room
door
with my mom.
when I heard the sound of
and
glass
eventually the
shattering
police
behind
did their
me.
thing. likely searching the immediate area.
See something come through
It was
the
an
window.
absolute nightmare.
That was all I could see.
I slept in my parents' bed that night. I was emotionally scarred for a while.
Flames spread so fast that I couldn't even
Just as
process
things
what
might
was
have been
happening.
going back to normal.
1 second I was standing in
a few
the dark
weeks to a
room,
month
and
later.
the next second the walls
This
were on
part
fire.
is what really hammers the nail in the
heat hit me
coffin
like a
for this
physical
experience
wall,
being
and the
something
door
I
wouldn't
can never
budge.
forget.
It was jammed from
I
the
went to
outside.
Catholic school, and during
I
lunch
slammed
we'd
into
have a
it with
short
all my
recess
might,
in the
and it
schoolyard,
gave.
which was all
It
concrete.
collapsed off its
The
hinges,
far
and
end
me
of the
with it.
schoolyard was fenced off.
I scrambled to get
towards the
back on my
street.
feet, and I just
We were
ran.
playing some game.
I couldn't
maybe
even
red
see.
light, green light, or
I was
something.
just running wildly.
This part I
through the woods
genuinely
and
don't
rain,
remember.
trying to put as
All
much
I know is I
distance
had to
between
run to the
myself
fence
and
to be
that
considered
cabin.
safe from whatever
Before I
the
could
threat
get
in
a
the
safe
game
distance
was.
away,
And while I was on the
tackle
fence,
me from behind,
next to some other
I was
kids,
back on
mind
the
you,
ground.
a man says, "Hey,"
There was a
from the other
person
side
on
of the
top of me.
fence.
Suddenly I was fighting for my life.
And it's a man asking
I
me for
clawed and
directions
kicked
to some
and
place I don't
screamed,
even
but
remember.
This guy wouldn't get off me.
I said, "I don't know."
He was
We
yelling
weren't even
too.
supposed to talk
He
to
kept trying to
strangers
get me in
outside
a
the
chokehold.
schoolyard.
He
Then
was
he
gouging
said,
at my eyes
"Your
and
name's
pulling
Chris,
my hair,
right?"
And I started to feel dizzy.
That moment
but
is
I managed to
implanted
push
in
him
my
off.
brain. His
I
voice,
got back up
the
and
look
kept
on his
running.
face,
and whoever
my
had just
heart
tried to
dropping.
kill me was screaming
I
like
said
a
no,
maniac.
lying to him.
I looked back
He then
twice.
smiled and said, "You don't
I couldn't
remember
see my
me, do you?"
attacker, but I did
At
see
this
the
point,
cabin.
I
which
ran
was
towards
fully
one of the
engulfed in
recess
flames.
chaperones and pointed over
I
at
think
the
the
fence.
picture of that fireball
but the man was gone.
burned into my brain forever.
One of the kids next to me told
The
me he
second
saw the
time
man
I looked
too.
back, the
The
glow was
recess ladies
smaller,
called the
but still
recess in
visible through
short.
the woods.
The school
But I
called
just
my
kept
parents. I was
For all
sure
I
it
knew,
was
I
that
was
man
being
from the
chased.
backyard.
I
I
didn't
was
stop
taken
until
home
my
early
legs
that
gave
day.
out.
I know my parents
Found
were
a
so
spot where a
sick
couple
and
of
worried
large
after
trees
this.
had fallen
It was
against
a hellish
each other,
month.
and there was a narrow
We
gap
lived in
underneath
such a nice
that blocked
area
most of the
too,
rain.
and to almost be
I
chased
crawled
out of
under
the
there and
neighborhood
just
because of
collapsed.
this was just a
I
nightmare.
couldn't feel my body. I don't know
After
if it was
months
the
of
fire,
me being
the
under
rain, or
tight
the
supervision
attack.
from my parents,
Maybe all three.
things went back to
But I was
normal.
completely numb.
I can't express enough, though,
All I did was
how
sit
much
in
it
that
still
crouched
pains me in my
position and try to
chest,
keep breathing.
thinking about how I
I
could
don't know
be
how
dead
many hours
today
passed
if that
under
man
those
had somehow
trees, but time
successfully
lost
taken
all
me.
meaning.
And it makes me sick,
Eventually,
wondering if
I
he
felt
was
some
ever
feelings start to
successful in
re-enter
whatever
my
he was
body.
trying to do.
I told myself
with someone
it was
else.
move or die. Whoever was out there was probably looking for me, and he couldn't have been that far away. So I got up and started moving through the woods. I didn't know
I
where
grew
the
up in
trail
Salem,
was, but I
Oregon,
didn't really care.
a quaint
I
little
honestly
small
can't tell you
town
how I
feeling
survived
place.
that night, but I
I
did.
moved out when I was 21,
stumbled onto a
buying my
random
first
trail
house
and just
about
followed
50
it.
miles out from
I
Salem.
was soaked and probably
I furnished my
bleeding from
first house
multiple
with a mix of
places,
stuff for
but
my
I just kept
parents,
trudging
their
on.
friends, and a bunch of stuff off
Eventually, the
online
rain subsided
marketplaces
a
and
bit,
apps.
at least enough for
I
me
was
to figure
driving a
out where I
Ford
was.
Raptor at the time, so
I made it
lugging
to some
stuff
random
around was
trailhead.
thankfully very
By that
easy.
point, the storm had
On
passed.
Facebook Marketplace one
I don't
day,
remember too much
I found
after
a listing
that.
selling a
All
bunch
I
of
remember
good-looking
is that
stuff.
The first person I saw
The ones in
drove
the
me to a
listing that
hospital.
caught my eye were this
I had
cream-colored
second-degree
sectional
burns on my
couch
left
that looked
forearm and the
pristine,
back of my neck.
and this
The doctors
Cannondale
told me I
brand
was lucky
mountain
I hadn't
bike.
inhaled more smoke
I didn't
than
have
I
a
did.
bike at the time.
None of it was
Where my
permanent,
house
but
is,
it hurt
having
like
one is
hell for a
perfect
long
for
time
exercise.
afterwards.
The other
By the
stuff
time
on the
I was
listing
healed
didn't
and
really
safe at
interest
home,
me.
I told
The
myself I
listing
would never
itself was
camp
just
or
sort of
hike
a
alone
digital
again.
yard sale.
Someone had
I
intentionally
contacted the
set that
seller,
cabin on
and we
fire
did a
to
little
kill
typical
me.
back and
That's
forth.
the only thing that makes any
He
sense.
was pretty short and
It was
straight to the
pouring
point
rain,
with his
a full-blown
answers,
thunderstorm,
and surprisingly
and the roof was
easy to
metal.
negotiate.
There's no way a wooden
He
structure
agreed
goes
to a
up
slightly
like
lower
that
price,
fast
and
unless
he
the
said
wood
I
had
could
been
come pick
treated
the
with
stuff up
something
later that
beforehand.
night.
I
Days
gave
are
the
long in
police
Oregon
everything,
in the
or
summer,
as much as I could,
so I'd still be
but I could
showing
tell
up
they
with
weren't
some
really gonna do
sunlight.
anything.
I
To be
banked on
fair,
having to
I
do a
wasn't in
couple trips
uncharted
to
part of the
transport the
woods,
sectional
so
couch
it would
due
have been
to its
silly
size.
to hound them.
I set out
The
on my
only
way
thing
to
I
the
don't
house.
understand is
The
the
address
timing
was
of
right on the
everything.
coast.
My wife would probably
I checked
tell
the
you I
satellite
stopped
view
doing
on the
solo
map just to
trips because
confirm
I
it was
grew
bringing
up
me
and
to a
got more
house, and it
responsible.
was.
And she's not entirely
Based on the
wrong,
map, there
but
was
I
a
honestly
long
never
trail
told her
or
about this
driveway
incident.
that veered off the
And I
road
know I'll
towards a
never go
huge
backcountry
open
trekking
property with a
again
big looking
alone.
house, and then in the backyard was a literal drop-off to the ocean. All I could think was, no wonder these people were selling all this stuff for so cheap. With that kind of money, I wondered why they weren't just giving it away.
My name is James.
I headed out that way.
7
It
or
didn't
8
take
years
long to
ago,
get there.
Back when I was in my
I
early
could tell the
20s
closer
and
I
still
got to
doing
the
stuff
shore,
that I
the
probably
nicer the
shouldn't have been
properties
doing.
got.
I had
and I
this
turned
friend
onto the
Charles,
last
who was
road
kind of
before I'd be
notorious
turning
in our
onto the
friend group
driveway
for
for the
finding
house.
cool places to explore.
This road was long,
like abandoned
it
buildings
was lined
and
with
old
woods
factories.
on each side, and then I'd
If it was
pass the
somewhere you
occasional
weren't supposed
driveway
to be,
leading to
Charles
probably
had
a cliffside
already
mansion.
been there and can tell you exactly
Eventually,
how to
I
get
made
in.
it to the turnoff.
He spent a
It was a
weird amount of
tree-lined
time
dirt
on Google
road,
Earth
or
and
the
these
driveway, I
niche
guess you would
urbex
call it.
forums. And he'd
About 10
always be hitting
seconds
the
in
group
of
chat
driving
with
down this
screenshots
driveway,
of random places
it
he
opened
wanted
to
to
this
check
massive
out.
clearing.
Most of us would
The driveway
entertain his
went on a
ideas,
slight
but never
incline
actually
leading to
follow
the house
through.
at the top of this hill.
I was usually the exception.
I pulled up next to this
Charles
older
and I had been
sedan.
friends since high school.
It was like a
and I
Mercury
think the reason we
Sable
got
or
along so
something.
well was that we
It
had
did
similar
not match the
thresholds
house
for
at all.
risk.
Like, this house
While most
looked
of
like
our
it belonged
friends
to a
would hear his
millionaire.
pitches and go,
This
"That
car was a
sounds
piece of
insane."
shit.
I'd hear them and
I
go,
went up to the
"When are
front
we
door,
going?"
ready to ring the bell.
It was a dynamic
There was
that
a
led
yellow
to some great
Post-it note
memories
on the
and
front
a few
door.
situations that I
And
look
it said
back
on
on
it,
now and
"Doorbell
genuinely
broken.
wonder how we
Please
made
use
it out
back door."
unscathed. This story is about one of those situations,
but I obeyed.
One weekend,
as I walked down the front porch,
me about a fire lookout
messaged
tower
the guy in Messenger that I arrived and was going around back.
I really wish I could remember the name of the forest,
looking at each window as I passed.
Charles said
the blinds
it had
all
been
seemed to be
decommissioned
closed.
years ago and was just sitting
I got
out
to
there
the
in the middle of
backyard,
nowhere,
and it was
completely
crazy.
untouched.
It actually
He didn't tell
overlooked
me
the
how he
Pacific
found
Ocean.
it, but I didn't want to know.
I walked up the back
He was
deck to go
convinced
knock
we
on the
could
back
hike out
door.
to it, climb it,
There was a
and
sliding
spend the night
glass
up
door,
there.
but there was
I
some kind of
more
sliding
skeptical.
blind that was closed.
Things like
so
that
I
are
couldn't
usually
see
fenced
inside.
off or at least protected.
I knocked on the
somehow,
glass,
but I promised him
stood
I'd
there
at
for a
least
minute,
come and check it out.
knocked again.
To be fair,
I looked down
the
at my
idea of
phone to
being
see if he
7
answered
feet
or
or so
read
up
my
in the middle of a
message.
forest with a
Neither.
360-degree
I went to
view
go sit on one of the
sounded
chairs on the
incredible to me.
deck and spun it around to
picked a
stare at
random
the
weekend
sunset
and made
and the
it
view
happen.
of the Pacific.
Charles planned the
It was a
entire thing
surreal
out,
view.
including the drive.
I kept
what to
checking my
pack,
messenger
how to
app and
find the
following
tower
up
once
with the
we were
guy.
in the woods.
He wasn't answering.
It was a 3-hour
triple
drive
checked
away.
that I had the right
Charles
address,
told me the hike would
and
be
I
off
did.
the trail, but
Plus,
pretty
the
short,
note on the front
about
door
4 miles
confirmed
or
that.
so.
I decided
drove
if he
out
was in
early
the
in the
shower
morning on
or
Friday
occupied or
and
something,
made it into the
I'd at
woods
least go
sometime
walk
in
over
the
to the
afternoon.
cliffside and get a picture
For
of the
some
view.
reason, I was kind of
I did
expecting
just
us
that.
to get lost.
I walked
or
down
at
the
the
deck,
very least,
then down
not
the
find
seemingly
tower,
freshly cut
which
grass
is exactly
to the cliffside.
why I was all the more
Taking
astonished
in the
when we
view,
actually did.
I daydreamed about
Seeing it
one
through
day
the
being able
trees
to
for the
afford
first
a
time
place
was
like
an
this.
insane sight.
I started
remember
walking back
blurting
up to
out
the
no
house,
way
but
when I
stopped
saw how
maybe
tall it
3
was.
steps in.
I was
And
even
realized
more
every
astonished when
single
we got to the
window
base
now
of
had
it
their
and
blinds
realized
open,
it was completely
and there was a person
unprotected or
standing at
fenced
each window,
off. It was
standing
just
as
sitting there in the
still
middle
as
of the woods,
statues.
waiting for us to find it.
I didn't know if what I was
The
looking
cab
at was
the
some
top
kind of
was
prank
this
or
small
not.
square room
I walked a
with
little
windows on all
closer,
4 sides.
and the moment I said
There was
nope,
a metal
I've seen
staircase
enough,
that zigzagged
when I
up the
realized
frame,
every
with a
single
section of
face
vertical
was
ladder
smiling.
for the final stretch up to the cab.
I honestly couldn't tell if they
The
were
whole thing
mannequins
looked
or
like
not.
it hadn't been touched
That's
in
how
decades.
still they were.
Some of the
I decided
lower
I just
railings
needed to
were
get to the
bent
car.
or missing, and
I
there was
did a light
graffiti on
jog around the
support
side of the
beams near
house again.
base.
And that
To be
side window that I
completely
mentioned that
honest,
also
it
had
did
its
not look
blind
like the
shut
type of
before
structure anyone
was
would
now
be
too
eager to
lifted.
climb. But Charles
There was someone at this
practically
window as
giddy.
well.
While
I
I
didn't
was
know what was
hesitating
going on
and
here,
debating whether I
but
should
I
try
had to get
convincing
out.
him to back out.
As I got to the
he
front,
had
I
already
got back
started
in my car,
climbing.
and I didn't
I
even
yelled at
look
him
at
to
the
be
front
careful,
windows.
and that
I
got
didn't
him to
even
slow
want to know
down.
if there were people at these
I figured,
windows
what
too.
the hell? I told
I
myself to
reversed
stop
all the way
bitching.
down the driveway.
The two of us
and
made our way
regrettably,
up carefully,
I did at one
checking
point
the
take a
stairs as we
curious
went.
look ahead at the house.
Most of them felt solid
The front
enough,
door was open.
but there were a few spots
There was a
where the
person
bolts had
standing on the
rusted
front
through
porch
and
with
the
his
steps
hands in his
wobbled.
pockets, watching me drive
The vertical
away.
ladder section near the
It didn't
top
matter.
was the sketchiest
Everything
part.
about this was a
It
red flag.
20-something feet.
I was out of
straight
there in a
climbing with
minute
nothing
and
but
down
a
the
narrow
road.
metal cage around
The guy
it.
never opened
The
or
adrenaline
responded
rush
to my
was
message
insane,
still.
but that's what
I
Charles
decided
lived
to
for.
turn into the closest
He made it
neighbor's
up
house
without any
driveway
issues.
and knock on the door.
The view from the cab was
They
unreal.
answered,
You could
and I
see for
explained the
miles in
bizarre
every
and
direction.
disturbing situation
They
I
had
just
also timed
encountered,
it perfectly.
and I pressed
The sun
them
was
about
maybe
any
an hour
info
from
on their
setting.
neighbor.
Our
The
plan
man
was
who
to camp
answered,
out for the night
I'll
and
call
catch the
Tom,
sunrise.
was shocked.
There was a
Because he's
decently
close
wide
friends with the guy
wraparound
next
walkway
door,
up there,
and he said
which is
he's
where we
hardly
decided
ever
to
in
chill.
town, and that he wouldn't
least
set up
initially.
some kind of elaborate
We
prank
cracked
like
a few
that.
beers and just
He
enjoyed
called
the
his
view
neighbor
and
on
some
the spot,
conversation.
and the guy picked up.
The sun eventually
Basically,
went down.
the conversation
and the sky
went
went
as
from
follows
orange
from what I
to purple
remember.
to dark blue
Hey,
in a
Jim,
matter of minutes.
it's Tom next door.
Once the
Listen,
light
I
was
got
gone,
someone at my
the
front door
forest
right
below
now
us
saying
was
you
just a
invited
black
him to your
mass
house
in
to
every
buy stuff,
direction.
but you pulled some
There
kind
wasn't
of
a single
scary
light
prank
in
on him
sight.
with the windows and
The
stuff.
stars were incredible.
And there
Easily
was a
the best
pause
I've ever
before
seen.
the Tom guy said,
But being
"What
alone
are you
out there in the
talking
dark
about?"
was freaking me
From
out a
here,
little.
I stepped in
It
and
was just
explained
weird
everything
not being able
from
to
the
see
Facebook
anything,
ad to
despite
my
knowing
arrival
there was a
there
whole
to
forest
the people
below
at the
us.
windows.
Charles could
He
tell
now
I was
sounded
getting
very
a little
concerned,
antsy, and
because
started
he said he
messing
wasn't
with
home
me,
this week.
grabbing my shoulder and
I did
stuff
my
like
best
that.
to describe
But
every
the thing that pissed
detail,
me off the
including
most
what the
was
man
when
on the
he
front
smacked
porch
his metal
looked
water
like,
bottle against
as well
the
as
side
the
of the
sketchy
tower.
car.
It sent
He
this
asked me to take his
incredibly
number
loud
so he could
echoing
contact
clang
me
in
after
every
the police
direction,
investigated.
probably to be heard for
After
miles.
that, I left.
The sound
I
was
went
so
home.
loud and
I really
ominous
didn't have
that
it
I
in me
actually
to
got
commit
mad at
2
him.
hours to some police
I told him I wanted to
investigation
go
that didn't
inside the
concern
cab,
me, truth be
He finally
told.
got the hint.
But I did hear from the
wasn't
guy
much in
later
there,
that
by the
night.
way. It had
He
clearly
called
been
me
hollowed
and asked
out
me to
ages
send him
ago.
the Facebook list.
He said he was going to finish
but
his
it
beer
was
before
removed.
coming in and joining me.
I did send him
I
the
was fine
details
with
of the
that.
profile that I was
I picked
messaging
a
on the
random
messenger
corner
app.
and started setting
It
my
was now a
sleeping
blank
stuff
profile.
up. But before
He
I could
thanked me
finish,
for that and
he
would
told
give
me
it to
in a
the
very
police
quiet,
anyway.
serious voice
When I asked
to
him
come
what the
back
cops
outside.
found, he told me
Very
they found nothing
un-Charles-like.
stolen, as far as he knew
So
at that
I
time,
did.
and that all the
Walked
blinds
back
were
around
once
to where
again
he was
closed,
sitting, and saw
and there
that he
was no
pointing
sedan in the
diagonally
driveway,
downwards,
but that
toward
all
the
3
forest
doors in the
below
house were
us.
unlocked.
At first, I thought he
Now
was
the
just
scary
messing
part
with
for me
again,
is
but
the
it
way
only
they were
took
all
me a few
standing at
seconds
the
to
window,
realize what he was
smiling,
pointing
trying
at.
to scare me.
There was a light
And
down
I have to
there.
wonder,
It was
what
faint
use was I
and
going
pretty
to
far
be
away,
of to them?
but it was definitely
Why did they
down
want
there.
me in the
It
backyard?
was genuinely horrifying.
Scary thoughts, honestly.
It was weaving through the
just
forest
glad I
at what
left when
seemed
I
like
did.
walking pace, and my first thought was that it was a person who'd heard the clang from the tower. I don't know why I felt the urge to whisper, but I did. I told him he was stupid for doing that, and and we were probably moments away from getting caught or arrested or something.
My parents were gone.
He looked at me with this confused expression.
So I decided I was going to have a bunch of people over in the backyard for a mini pool party.
Now it was my turn.
We have a pool house and an in-ground pool back there. It's perfect for parties.
I asked him
even though I rarely get a chance to throw anything.
He said that light was moving way too
The rest of the backyard is a little bit of grass and then the woods behind the pool house.
Swinging or
it's a very private
backyard. Someone carrying a lantern or a flashlight.
You'll see what I mean.
But then again, it was probably too
far away.
The little party
I planned was for Saturday night.
I didn't say anything after
Earlier that day, I was setting up outside.
He just kept staring at this mysterious light.
Since it was going to be a night party, that didn't really matter.
Part of me thought it was just some random hiker that had nothing to do with us.
They go at least half a mile back before they reach another backyard.
After a few minutes,
so there should really be no one walking
getting closer.
It's also
much clearer that the light was
no trails or any reason for anyone to be back
or hovering.
I was bringing out folding tables for beer pong and refreshments and setting them up.
There wasn't really anything we could do.
From the woods.
Like, what were we gonna do? Climb down?
It was clearly a slow, throat-clearing
out more
cough.
theories. The
like
light
someone trying to get something out of their throat.
Like it skipped a beat,
and it was definitely a man.
It was really thick, but for a
split
second, that light went from steady, even movement
stood there listening.
To an abrupt zip forward. Then
the wind was barely
moving
the leaves. So the sound carried really clearly.
My palms start to sweat.
It came from just inside the tree line, not deep in the woods.
I kept trying to
close
convince
enough that whoever made it could
was down
definitely
there
see me.
Just wandering aimlessly through the woods.
Set the table down and looked out toward the trees.
They were definitely heading for the tower, and after about 10 minutes,
unsettled would be a better one. No one should be in those woods
directly
ever.
Below us.
I scanned the tree line and called out, "Who is that?"
And announced
there was no answer.
Police.
Not even any movement.
The light just stopped.
Footsteps or branches
snapping right below us.
That almost made it
From
worse.
our vantage point straight
above,
above,
it was some random guy walking through, but I should have heard him moving away.
Charles and I stared at it for a while.
I got that feeling in my chest, like I was being watched,
killing Charles even
like
more.
someone was standing perfectly still, just behind a tree,
off the tower
staring at me.
This guy
stood there for
yelled,
maybe 20 seconds just listening.
Down at the light.
The longer I stood there, the more uncomfortable I felt.
I looked at him in horror.
Eventually, I just grabbed the rest of the stuff and brought it back inside for a bit. I didn't want to just stand out there alone anymore.
The light didn't even move.
I called my good friend Mark to come over early and help me set up.
Charles yelled down again.
I decided not to mention the cough. I didn't want to sound paranoid before the party even started.
An abandoned fire tower in the
Mark
middle
came
of
over
nowhere
around 6 p.m.
Someone or
he
something
brought some
blocking our
and
only
helped me
exit.
finish setting up.
We were completely
kept
trapped.
glancing at the woods while we
must
were
have
out
watched
there.
that light for 30 minutes straight,
normal.
whispering to each
Nothing
other every
moved.
so often.
If someone had been there
once,
earlier, they were gone.
I wasn't worried about
the rest
being
of my friends
secretive
started showing up around
Charles
7
had
to
burned
8.
that bridge a long time
At the peak
ago,
of the party,
so
there
I
were
did
at least
something I
20
should have done a
people.
while ago.
Nothing insane.
Grabbed my
It was a
flashlight
good time.
and aimed it
There
straight
was
down at the
music
base
playing,
of the tower.
people in the pool,
But even
lights
after
around
I
the
did that,
patio on.
I still couldn't
With
see
that
the
many
source
people
of the
there,
light.
the woods didn't feel
Eventually,
creepy anymore.
we accepted that there was nothing
A
we
couple
could do.
times during the
Tried
night,
to go back
I
to
caught
what we
myself
were
looking
doing.
toward the tree line, though.
We went back to talking.
I don't even know
I made
why.
sure I never took
I
my
guess
eyes
that
off
cough
that
just
light
stuck
more
with
than a
me.
few seconds.
Things started dying
Charles
down
thought it was
around
some kind
midnight.
of LED that
By
someone
1
had
a.m.,
placed there
the
to
last
mess
of the
with us.
guests had left.
But who the hell would bother
I
doing
figured
that?
I would leave the mess to clean
At
up
some
for
point,
tomorrow.
Charles said he was
I
going
was
to climb
tired and
down
ready
and
for
check
bed.
it out. And I
Before
told him that
going
was
inside,
insane.
I did
Not
one
only was
last
that
slow
inviting
sweep
trouble,
of the backyard.
it was downright
I
stupid
walked
and
around the
dangerous.
pool, checked behind the
As
pool
we were
house,
arguing about it,
looked toward the woods
I glanced
again.
down and realized that I
Everything
couldn't
seemed normal.
see the light anymore.
The water in the pool was
just
still,
darkness
the lights
and
reflected
more
off of
darkness
it.
down there again.
No one was out there.
I frantically
I
scanned
locked
the
the back
emptiness
sliding
below us
door
with my
and
eyes,
went upstairs to
looking
brush
for
my
the
teeth
light,
and go to bed.
but it wasn't there anymore.
I was in bed scrolling on my phone
Charles
for maybe
seemed
half an hour
relieved,
before
but
putting it
I
down.
was the opposite.
It probably
kept
took
telling me to
another
relax,
half hour of laying
saying
there
whoever
trying
had
to
been there
sleep.
had probably left.
I heard a splash.
But I was more freaked out than I
Not
had
a
been
small
when the
one.
light was just sitting
Not
there
like something
motionlessly.
falling in. It sounded
I thought that
exactly like
could be
someone
down
jumping
there.
into the
Now we
deep
couldn't
end.
even see them. It was
My eyes
terrifying
opened
to me.
immediately.
Charles
I held
reassured
still,
me that we'd
listening.
obviously be able to hear
A few
if anyone
seconds
tried to
later,
climb the
I
ladder,
heard the sound of
which I
someone
guess was
swimming.
true.
Literal
But I was still
strokes
really
through the
unsettled.
water. My
Suddenly,
first
I
thought
didn't
was
want to
maybe
be in the
someone
open
from the
air
party
anymore.
stayed
I
behind as a
suggested
joke,
that we wait
or
out
they
the
just
rest of
woke
the
up
night
drunkenly.
inside the cab.
But I
He
knew
agreed.
everyone who came.
So we went inside
one
and
would
set
do
up our
something like
sleeping
that.
bags.
I checked
Neither
my
of
phone.
us were going to sleep.
It was
though.
2 a.m.
That was suicide.
I got out of bed and walked
Staying
slowly
awake
to the
turned out to
window
be the
that
right
overlooks the
decision.
backyard.
It was not
I
20
didn't
minutes
turn
after
on any
going
lights in
inside,
my room.
we started
I
hearing
didn't want
noises.
whoever was out there to see me before I
First
saw
ones
them.
were all metallic
I looked
clangs
down
that
at the
echoed
pool.
up through the steel frame
I saw
of the
there was
tower.
a guy swimming
They
calmly
weren't
from
footsteps,
one end to the other.
which I want to be crystal
At
clear
first,
about,
I tried to
because
recognize
I was listening
them.
specifically
I
for
knew all
footsteps,
20 or so
and
people
this
who
was
came
not
over.
that.
This wasn't
Sounded
any of
more
them.
like someone struck
I
one of
leaned
the
closer
support
to the
beams with
glass.
a wrench or a
The
crowbar.
pool lights lit up his face
minutes
just
later,
enough for me to
another
know
one
for
came.
sure.
This
I had
one
never
was more
seen
of a
him
grinding
before.
sound. Like
I yelled out
metal
the
being
window,
twisted
"Who is
against
that?"
Metal.
The swimming stopped immediately.
Seconds before stopping.
He looked up slowly toward my
Charles
window.
and I kept looking at each
Even
other
from that
like
distance,
we were expecting the
I
other
could tell
one
he
to do
wasn't
something.
confused or
There was
startled.
nothing we could
He
do.
just stared up at me.
The sounds kept
Then
coming
he started
from what
moving toward the
sounded
shallow
like
end.
different spots.
He
Which was
climbed
what
out of the
really got
pool.
me, because it
And
meant
that's
whatever
when I
was
saw how
causing
tall
him
he was.
moving down there.
He stood there dripping
sounds
wet for maybe
continued on
2
and off
seconds,
for a while.
just looking toward the
I kept
house.
trying to map out the sounds in my
I
head.
expected him to
figure
run
out where
away.
they were coming from.
Instead,
how many sources
he started
there were,
walking toward the
whether
sliding
they were
door,
getting closer or
not
staying at the
running
same
or
level.
hesitating, just
Couldn't
walking
make sense
fast
of
and
any of
direct, like he
Charles
already
and
knew
I
where
were
he was
whispering
going.
to each other about
Almost
what
in a
we'd do
march.
if we started hearing
I yelled
someone
again,
walking up.
"Hey, who is that?"
I was sitting
He didn't
against the
respond.
far wall of the
I heard
cabin,
the sliding
facing
door
the windows
downstairs
on the
open.
opposite side.
I know I
Charles
locked
was
it.
on the
I'm
opposite
positive I
side,
did.
looking over my
But
shoulder.
I heard it slide open.
There were so many windows
and it
in
slid
there that we
shut.
didn't feel safe.
I ran to
We
my
wanted to be
bedroom
able to
door
see out
and
of all
locked
of
it.
them.
That's when I
There wasn't
noticed how
much
much
to
my
see,
hands
though.
were shaking.
They were all pretty dark.
I grabbed my
The only
phone and
light came from
texted
the
Mark,
stars
asking
and
him
the
if he
moon.
noticed anyone stay behind before
I
leaving.
saw something.
But I didn't wait for a
A
response.
dark outline moved
I
across the
immediately
glass.
called 911.
My brain couldn't
I
process
whispered into
what
the
I was
phone
seeing
that there was an
fast
intruder
enough.
in my house.
But then it passed in front
I
of the
gave my
next
address
pane
as
over,
quietly as I
and that's
could.
what did it.
Then I heard the
I
footsteps.
couldn't help but yell, and Charles
They
scrambled
were
away from the
slow,
window.
wet footsteps of
Two of us
hardwood.
immediately ran over
I
to
could
the
hear the
door
slight
and pressed
stick
our
of his
backs
feet
against
lifting
it.
off the floor.
If someone tried to
He
come
wasn't
through that
rushing,
door, they were
nor
going to have
was
to
he
push
searching
through both of
randomly.
us.
He was walking directly
Kept
toward
looking
the
for the
stairs.
figure through the windows.
Each
but I
step on
couldn't
the
see
stairs
anything.
creaked, one
It
at a
was
time.
impossible, though.
He
Unless
reached
they
the
were
top.
crawling on all
The
fours.
hallway
I
floor
should have been able
outside
to
my
see
room
them.
creaked.
Charles and
He
I
stopped
sat
right
up
outside my
like that for a
bedroom
really
door.
long time, and I could
hear
him
water dripping onto
hyperventilating.
the floor.
What followed
Then the
was
handle
the most
moved.
tense and
He
terrifying
tried
few
opening
hours
it
of my
once,
life.
then twice.
Charles and I
then a
sat
third
there
time,
in that
harder
exact
each
position
time.
like our lives
When
depended
he realized
on
it was locked,
By the time the
there was
sun
a long
started
pause.
coming up, I was completely
The
exhausted.
911 operator was
When it
saying
was finally
something,
light
but I had
enough
the
to
phone
see,
set down.
I counted to 3.
I could
and
barely
then swung
focus
the door
on what she
open
was
violently,
saying.
expecting
Then the
someone
guy
to be
knocked on the
crouching
door.
behind it.
3 slow
There was
knocks.
no one there.
I picked
Charles
up the
and I
phone
ran around
and
the
put it
side
on
of it to
speaker.
confirm that.
My voice was
clear.
shaking, but I said loudly
I looked
that
down
I was
to the
on the
base of
phone
the
with the
tower,
police and
there
they
was
were on their
nothing down
way.
there either.
There was another
We grabbed
long
our
pause.
stuff and started
Then a
descending
man's
as
voice
fast
from
as
the
we
other
could.
side of the door said, very
We
low
made it
and
about
calm,
3/4 of the way
"It's
down the
me.
staircase
Open the
before
door."
Charles stopped in front of me.
He sounded like a grown
He just
man
stood
in
on the
his
landing,
30s.
staring down at the
I
next
said,
section of
I know that I
stairs.
don't know you.
I looked
Leave
past
now.
him and saw it immediately.
There was silence
The
again.
entire section of the
5
staircase
seconds,
was gone.
maybe more.
It wasn't
Then I
just
heard
a
him
few
turn
steps.
and walk
I'm
away
talking
quickly.
about an entire
I
section
heard
of
his
stairs,
wet footsteps go
straight
back
up
down the
missing.
hallway, then
It
down
was
the stairs.
impossible, but
And a
we were
few
staring
seconds
at it.
later, I heard the
Someone
front
had
door downstairs
deconstructed
open
an
and
entire
slammed
section of
shut.
staircase during the night.
I didn't
while we
move
were
until the
sitting
police
directly above
arrived.
them.
When I finally
must
went
have been what those
downstairs with
sounds
them,
were.
there was a clear
That didn't
trail
make
of water
sense.
leading from the
The
back
noises
door
didn't stop
up the
until
stairs
after I
all
had
the way
seen
to the
the person
bedroom
up
door.
there.
After
So had they really
searching the
crossed
entire
that gap
house,
twice?
that was the only
In the
proof
dark?
that he had ever been
No
there.
way.
I
Plus, there's
texted everyone I
absolutely no
invited,
chance someone
asking
could
if
have
they
done
stayed
that without us
behind or
hearing.
noticed anyone
That
else
would've
stay
been a lot
behind.
louder than a few
Anyone
clangs
who was
here
still
and there.
awake said no.
We
The
stood
rest
on that
texted
landing
back
for
in
a
the
while,
morning saying
trying to
no.
figure out what to do.
It was a
We had
complete
to just
stranger.
jump across.
And I have
It
a
wasn't
feeling that
far,
cough I
but it
heard
was
in the
still
woods
scary.
earlier that day was that
Charles
man.
ended up twisting his ankle.
I don't
but
know how he
was
got the
fine.
door unlocked.
We made it
Maybe
the
he
rest of the
slipped
way
in during
down.
the party when
That
people
was
were
that.
going in and out.
There was no
As
one
for a
waiting
motive,
for us at the
I have
bottom.
no idea.
There was actually
I
nothing
just
there
know
at
that if I
all,
didn't wake up
including